Hello. It is me, Senior Fanfics, and this is what if Luffy and Zoro went back in time together. Please like and subscribe to my channel and check out the author and fanfiction linked in the description. Join the Discord server for early videos sometimes. You're all lovely people and I hope you enjoy. On the outskirts of Zenku. Jewelry Bonnie lay exhausted and defeated. Her arms were chained behind her to prevent the use of her devil fruit. She was breathing heavily from both lack of breath and her injuries. It was infuriating. This monster who had hurt Ace so badly, who had committed the greatest sin imaginable on a pirate ship, on Whitebeard's ship no less, only to run away with his tail between his legs. Had crushed her. Like a bug. Swatted her away, like a fly. Did she mention it was infuriating? And now she was chained to a tree. Her crew lay bloody, bruised, and unconscious beside her, all because she was too weak. Blackbeard and his crew were living it up as if their short confrontation hadn't even happened, but who knew what would happen to her crew now that they'd been captured, and holy shit, how could she have been so stupid? This man had murdered a Whitebeard commander in cold blood and she charged at him in a fit of rage, letting her emotions rule her. Of course her crew was going to back her up and of course they were going to pay the consequences for her actions. Stupid. Don't look so down, Jewelry Bonnie. You weren't even close to being ready for this stage yet, but I'll admit you've got spunk. Blackbeard mocked, getting too close to her face for comfort. Hey, why don't you join us instead of going to impel down? You're too weak to be a part of my crew, but you could steal my woman if you want. Bonnie saw red. Fuck you. She shouted, wanting nothing more than to wipe that disgusting leer off of his face. Too bad she couldn't move. As if I'd ever be some concubine to a piece of shit like you. I'll never forgive you for what you did. Although Blackbeard feigned disappointment in her refusal, he quickly recovered and looked at her curiously. What I did? Come to think of it, you were yelling about that earlier. Thing is, I don't think we've ever met before. He grinned maliciously. Though granted, I've left quite the destructive path in my wake. Could it be that you know someone from Drum? Or Banro? Or even the New World, perhaps? Jewelry gritted her teeth and kept her silence, knowing better than to answer that question. Well, not that it matters. Soon you and your crew will never see the light of day again, assuming you insist on turning down my offer. He grabbed her by the forehead and forced her eyes to meet his. Of course, I don't really care about them, you know. I could just let them go. The ultimatum chilled her to the bone. Before she could even consider the gruesome choice laid out before her, a voice spoke out into the night, low and dangerous. Get your filthy hands off her, Teach. As one, Blackbeard and his crew turned towards the figure standing behind them. Bonnie couldn't see him from her position, but she recognized his voice. Her breath caught in her throat. Borges Ace stood with a menacing scowl in his face, a small, simmering Viver card clutched between his fingers. This isn't possible, Chopper said with wide eyes, in denying the evidence the three of them were faced with in fear of what they implied. That girl, she was alive. Nami exclaimed, beseechingly. They were staring down at an unassuming newspaper article. One about a young actress who had died in a stage accident 10 years ago. The same girl who had just played host to them in a haunted mansion where they had just been chased around by zombies. But was she? Usopp asked, voicing the question that was on the tips of all their tongues. His only answer was an eerily familiar chant that echoed off the walls of the empty mansion. Yo-ho-ho. Hey, is that? Nami's question went unfinished as the ethereal song echoed again, seemingly coming from every direction. Yo-ho-ho. Usopp's eyes widened fearfully. It's getting closer. Yo-ho-ho. Chopper sucked in a sharp breath. You guys, that voice. Yo-ho-ho. As the sound echoed one more time, Chopper shifted into heavy point. There's two of them. Without any further warning, a clash of steel sounded behind the three, who all turned in shock to find Brook standing behind them, holding back the blade of an as of yet unidentified zombie from reaching them. Brook. Nami shouted. Straw Hat Pirates, please flee this place. This is the zombie who currently possesses my shadow, Brook stated seriously. I would settle my affairs with him. Not needing to be told twice, the trio turned and fled the mansion, leaving the two undead to continue their dance of blades. Yo-ho-ho, interfering again, Hummer Brook. Ryuma asked mid-parry. You should know how this will end. On the other side of the island, a different horde of zombies had been deployed to deal with the intruders. These zombies were faster, stronger, and nastier in general. They were the general zombies of Thriller Bark. And they were having some major trouble. Keep it coming, you shitty corpses. I'll burn you all to the ground. This week's me is feeling super. All this exercising is good exercise. Frankie. Please refrain from using that pun ever again. The moment Sanji, Frankie, and Robin had set foot on the island, they had quickly been accosted by armies of the living dead. Naturally, their immediate reaction was to start beating them down mercilessly. Ghost ships may have been scary, but once the ghosts were attacking you, they were just enemies whose asses needed some kicking, right? Well, at any rate, it turned out that beings which had survived death didn't go down easily. Go figure. As many times as they were beaten down, they got right back up. It had gotten very tiresome. At least, until Sanji had kicked one of the general's armies into the ocean and Robin had caught sight of its shadow flying out of the water. Remembering what Brook had told them about his shadow being stolen, she had quickly put two and two together. Which led to Operation Exorcise the zombie hordes via widespread drowning coming into effect. Sanji, how is Sunny doing? Robin took the time to ask. The chef briefly closed his eyes before opening them again. She's giving them the slip for the moment. Luckily, everyone's primary focus is us right now. Suddenly, he froze as his hockey warned him of danger. He quickly leapt behind Robin and Frankie, and a barrage of kicks later, a horde of creepy-looking spider rats were lying on the ground motionless. The hell? What are those things? Frankie asked as he knocked another zombie into ocean with a strong right. They almost got the drop on us, Robin noted. Perhaps they were planning on murdering us and animating our lifeless bodies using stolen shadows. Robin, that was overly morbid. Frankie protested. Get your mind out of the grave. How unusual, came a voice from beyond the fog. You were able to see my spider mice coming. That shouldn't be possible. Slowly, a giant cross between a monkey and a spider came crawling out from the fog. But this is as far as you'll go, I'm afraid. Thriller Bark's 3 enigmas are starting to make their move. Look alive, guys. We've got some pretty strong auras incoming, Sanji warned, although he didn't seem that worried. Suddenly though, his face darkened. Though one of them seems familiar. 2 more figures came out of the fog, one floating in the air, surrounded by ghosts, and dressed in pink from head to toe, and the other taking heavy steps on the ground, looking quite familiar. Sanji stared at the second figure with murderous intent. Oh dear. It's our friend from the Sunny, Robin noted mildly. Yeah, he's mine, Sanji replied. Robin caught sight of the look on his face and raised an eyebrow. Have you met that lion man before, Sanji? She asked, finding it highly unlikely. I haven't. But still, he has some things to answer for. Robin looked amused as well as curious, but didn't pry. I see. Have fun then. Don't act so nonchalant, Straw Hat Pirates, the floating girl spoke. You may have fared well against Absalom's useless soldiers, but you won't have such a fun time against me. Suddenly, the ghosts surrounding her all charged. Not knowing what they were slightly caught off guard, but Sanji and Robin were still able to dodge. Frankie, on the other hand, opted to try shooting them, which didn't go well for him. They floated harmlessly through the projectiles and then through his body, which immediately sank to the ground. Hey Frankie. You alright? Sanji shouted. Get up. You're not even injured. But Frankie remained in his fetal position on the ground. I'm so unsuper this week, he said quietly. My life has no meaning. I'm so useless. I wish I could just be reborn as a flea. Sanji looked on, baffled at the sight. What the shit? Robin looked equally unnerved, though without the outburst. You idiots. Perona laughed. You can't fight my negative hollows. You'll just be left questioning the values of your pathetic lives. The ghosts charged forth once more and Sanji kept dodging, aware of the danger now. Robin, though, was not as fast and eventually got hit. Damn it. Robin-chan. Sanji shouted in worry. But Robin simply stood there, her face blank and unresponsive. Perona blinked at the sight, wondering why she wasn't sinking to her knees. Sanji just stared, wondering what would happen to Robin at this rate. Finally, the archaeologist spoke. So, your power is to make people doubt themselves. How useless. Your use of the Horo no Mi is quite lacking, isn't it? Perhaps you should die and let the fruit pass on to someone who could actually use it. Silence. Complete and utter silence. The Straw Hats, Generals Amis and Enigmas alike all stared at Robin like she was something from another world. A stifled sob finally broke the quiet of the night. Perona was kneeling on the ground, tears trailing down her face as her ghosts mimicked the motion. That was so mean and unnecessary. Just why? Damn it, I just wanna die. Frankie was the first to speak, having recovered from his fit of negativity. What was that? Robin-chan. Sanji spoke in awe. Did you just project the negativity back to her? Robin blinked as if waking up from a trance. She looked slightly puzzled herself. Well, I'm already quite negative. Perhaps my negativity won out over the hollows. That's fucking ridiculous. Perona shouted, having recovered herself. There's no way a human being could be more negative than my hollows. No one could live their lives with that much emotional load. You'd be dead by now. Robin tilted her head to the side. The only thing ridiculous here is your fashion sense. What are you, 5? This put Perona right back in her fetal position and Absalom growled. Pull yourself together, Perona. This is pathetic. Sanji looked at Robin worriedly. Robin, are you? There seem to have been some lingering effects. I'm sure it will pass. Anyway, we should split up, Frankie said, still looking unsettled by what they have just seen. We won't be able to fight properly if we have to keep dodging those ghosts. You're right, Sanji agreed. I'll take the shitty lion. Robin-chan, you should probably handle the ghost girl. Great, that leaves me with Spider Monkey, Frankie said, looking disappointed. Oh well. The three nodded at each other and Robin ran after Perona, who screamed and started flying away. Sanji went straight for Absalom, landing a kick to his face that sent him hurtling back into the fog. Frankie smirked at Terrorin and gestured for him to bring it on. The spider monkey growled and charged. Back at the mansion, Hogback was fretting over recent events. Oh Sindri, what are we to do? Moria-sama will not be happy that I let those three get away. Plates should disappear from this world. That has nothing at all to do with what I said. Hogback-sama. The two turned to see a lower-ranked soldier zombie scrambling into the mansion. Hogback-sama, I have a report to make. Well, don't just stand there. Get on with it. The zombie gulped. Yes sir. The bulk of the island soldier and general's armies have been either defeated or purified. It took a moment for that to sink in. When it did, Hogback's eyes widened. You've got to be kidding me. Those zombies together number at 200 strong and the general's armies are the toughest ones we have. Who could have defeated all of them? Many were defeated on the outskirts of Thriller Bark by 3 of the Straw Hat Pirates. I heard, but Perona and Absalom were sent to intercept. There's no way they could have. But the bulk of them, the soldier zombie continued, shivering, were defeated by one man. Hogback froze, not even caring that he had been interrupted. What? Who? The zombie shivered again. Hirono Zoro. I was the only survivor. Zoro stood over the countless corpses of the general and soldiers' armies alike. Not a single one had been purified using seawater or even salt. Rather, every single one had faced death by the swordsman's blades, forcefully expelling the shadows within. Zoro walked past the last of the downed undead and smirked at the side of the mansion he had just stumbled upon. Finally, we're getting somewhere, he said quietly. I can sense Brook's aura in there. As well as another one of note. His eyes narrowed, realizing that the two were already fighting. And Brook was losing. Wordlessly, he lifted one sword and brought it down. The mansion split in two. Hogback and Sindri fell over onto the ground as the room split apart around them. Hogback screamed in fright while Sindri simply looked on, emotionless. It's him. The soldier zombie trembled. Zoro walked calmly past the fallen doors of the mansion and towards the 3 spectators. Why you? What are you waiting for? Get him. Hogback shouted at the last soldier zombie. Althig he was scared stiff, he was compelled to obey a member of the 3 Enigmas, per Moria's orders. With a shout, the zombie charged forward. And was casually cut down. His body fell to the ground and his head rolled away, causing Hogback to let out a shrill scream as the shadow within was ejected. But Zoro simply walked past the terrified Enigma, not paying the slightest bit of attention to his presence. I know that caught your attention, he said, speaking to an unseen presence. Ryuma walked out from behind the rubble, carrying Brook's defeated form over his shoulder. Zoro's face darkened at the sight of the fallen skeleton. As Ryuma threw him onto the ground unceremoniously, his hands tightened around his swords. You're going to regret that, Zoro stated ominously. Urano Zoro, is it? Ryuma said. You're right, I was about to finish off this fool, but that feat of swordsmanship caught my interest for the time being. I assume you're looking for a duel then, since you came here. Zoro-san, Brook mumbled from the floor. The only reason he was still conscious was because he technically couldn't lose blood, having none to begin with. But he had still taken considerable damage during the fight. I was, Zoro replied, answering Ryuma's question. But now I'm most plain pissed off. Prepare yourself. A few seconds passed by as the two measured each other up and then, by an unspoken agreement, the first mate and swordsman of the Straw Hat Pirates and the last and strongest general zombie of Thriller Bark dashed toward each other as Brook watched on in amazement. Limbs were in flight as rubber and shadow collided in an ungodly exchange of fistly barrages. Both combatants refused to give ground as their attacks met in the middle, born from mastery of their respective abilities and incited in a clash of ideals. Gomu Gomu no elephant gun. Moria mirrored Luffy's attack perfectly, just like those before it, as his fist expanded similarly to the rubber man's. What an interesting moveset, Moria cackled. You've taken your devil fruit powers far for such a low-tier paramecia. But I suppose it should be expected from this generation's dark horse. As much as you mock me for it, I can tell it infuriates you, Luffy said, dodging and parrying another mass of limbs as he spoke. Just the thought of us rookies chasing our dreams with our whole lives ahead of us, it makes you sick, doesn't it? Moria's face darkened. Quite perceptive, aren't you? Yes, you hit the nail on the head. Seeing all you clueless ingrates flocking to the new world, completely ignorant of why we call this current sea paradise. It almost makes me want to let you go just so you can witness the horrors for yourself. A sinister grin formed on his face. Almost. As much as I would like to read about your gruesome deaths in the newspaper, I have a much better use for your skills. I'm glad to know you care, Luffy scoffed. But you shouldn't worry about us rookies. Especially not my generation. Oh? Having delusions of grandeur are you? Do you really think this current generation of pirates is any better than the rest? It's the opposite, actually, Luffy said with a smirk. You could say we're the worst. Moria's smile vanished. You seem to be speaking in riddles. Is that supposed to mean something to me? Not yet. But it will. One day, you're going to fear the rookies that you so casually dismissed. But as for me, his face darkened and Moria felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. You shouldn't think of me as a rookie at all. I didn't get that shadow for free. Moria trailed off as he felt his grip on his newfound power slip just the tiniest bit. Who are you? I am he whose will shall bring forth another storm, Luffy recited. And this peace you enjoy, warlord. He looked up and Moria's eyes widened in fear. It's just the calm before it. It's been a long time, Commander. Good to see you again, Blackbeard spoke with false joy as he stood across from Ace. His former division commander didn't answer him though, opting to simply walk past the object of his hatred, much to Blackbeard's confusion. The rest of the Blackbeard pirates tensed as he neared, expecting an attack, but Ace ignored them as well as he walked up to Bonnie. Van Odger locked eyes with his captain with a questioning gaze, but Blackbeard simply shrugged with an uncaring, malevolent grin. Ace easily melted the chains around Bonnie's wrists and legs, and she immediately stood up, glaring heatedly at surrounding pirates who were now giving them a wide berth. Bonnie, gather your crew and get off this island, Ace commanded. Bonnie's eyes narrowed. You're going to fight him alone? That's the best option right now. Your crewmates aren't in condition to fight. Bonnie looked like she was having an inner battle, but eventually she nodded, her worry over her crew's well-being, making the decision for her. She kept a wary gaze on the Blackbeard pirates as she aroused her crewmates, but Blackbeard didn't seem to care one way or the other. While this made her seethe with rage, she held herself back this time. As her crew began to leave, Ace spoke up. Bonnie, I need you to let my brother know that this happened. I know him, Bonnie interrupted, shooting a meaningful sideways glance at the Blackbeard pirates, who were still listening curiously. And I'll find him. Ace nodded, getting the message. Go. Bonnie stared at him, gaze filled with regret. Be careful. As her crew left, Blackbeard stared at Ace in amusement. So, you two know each other. That explains a few things. I guess I should apologize then. I didn't realize she was a friend of yours. Ace's eyes narrowed. What are you playing at, Teach? You were going to turn her into the government, but now you're just going to let her go. What's your goal? My goal? Well, I suppose I can tell you. But only if you're willing to join my crew. What do you say, Ace? It'll be just like old times. I'll have to decline, Ace drawled, though inwardly he was relieved. If Blackbeard wanted to him as a crewmate, then he most likely let Bonnie go to convince him to join. That meant he wouldn't have to cover her escape. Oh? Are you sure? I may not be much of a big name now, but I have quite the plan in mind. If you help me bring it to fruition, it won't be long until we're the next big name in the new world. And after that, the next stop is Pirate King. I'm already part of a Yonko crew, Teach. The same one you betrayed, as it happens. Now, you should know what happens next. Blackbeard's face fell. If nothing else, he was a good actor. Oh, well, so much for that. But if you're not going to join me, then I have a pretty good alternative in mind. You see, after that stunt you pulled in Marineford, you being here could accelerate my plan quite nice. He didn't have time to finish his sentence, as Ace, feeling Bonnie's oar leave the island, quickly bolted forward, propelling himself with a burst of flame. Blackbeard screamed in pain as two spears of flame impaled him through the torso. His crew immediately leapt to their captain's defense, but their gunfire simply went through Ace's Loja body harmlessly. Stay back. Blackbeard shouted through the pain. You guys aren't ready for this kind of fight. Fire fist. A barrage of flame engulfed the Blackbeard pirates, who were all blown backward, cursing as they received severe burns. Ace's onslaught didn't stop there as he immediately fired off his signature move a second time. Shit, he's not playing around. Blackbeard exclaimed as he absorbed a blast of fire using the power of the Yami Yami no Mi. He took a moment to regain his bearings, not having expected Ace to be so unrelenting right off the bat. His black hole would have been unexpected, which meant he should have gained a moment of respite. Flash fire. Or not. The Blackbeard pirates could do nothing to stop the Loja as a rapid pulse of fire spread out in all directions, hitting every one of them. A few of the quicker ones defended with what hockey they could use, but it did little to stop the extreme temperatures. These different, Blackbeard realized. He wasn't nearly this strong before. Did you think I've been doing nothing during my search, Teach? Ace asked. I've been training for this moment for a while now. That left Blackbeard confused. Ace couldn't have known that he'd obtained the most powerful Loja in existence before this encounter. Why would he have felt the need to train when he could have already defeated him during their time on Whitebeard's ship? That brief moment of contemplation cost him as Ace shot into the air, descending upon him with a pillar of fire, burning him to the bone. Damn it. He shouted in agony. Fine, you asked for this, Ace. He raised his arm and activated his ability, drawing Ace towards him, where he was ready to deliver a punishing blow. Astoundingly, Ace behaved as if he'd expected to be yanked out of the air and readied another fire spear, aiming it straight for his heart. Blackbeard's eyes widened. No matter how much vitality he had, being speared through the heart was not something he wanted to experience anytime soon. He lunged out of the way, readying a blow as Ace landed in close proximity, but Ace didn't even hesitate before unleashing another fire fist at point-blank range. The blast sent him hurtling away. When he landed, he sucked the next barrage of fire into his black hole again, before trying something different. He brought his hands up and formed a larger singularity which devastated the landscape, sucking everything towards him, including the ground. He was hoping for Ace to lose his footing, but the flame man leapt into the air and propelled himself away. In response, Blackbeard drew him in again while he was in the air. Not able to aim properly from his position this time, Ace readied his flame spears, but missed his opponent's vital spots. Blackbeard coughed up blood as he was pierced again, but grinned victoriously as he grabbed onto Ace. If Ace was surprised that he was no longer able to use his powers, he didn't show it. He gritted his teeth as Blackbeard's hand collided with his neck. Blackbeard, on the other hand, watched with wide eyes as Ace's body darkened to obsidian and felt the pain in his hand from having just karate chopped his armament's heart and skin. He's been training his haki too. The shock caused him to let go of Ace's shoulder. Realizing his mistake, he made a lunge for him again, but Ace retreated, gaining his distance again. It was then that Blackbeard realized that this fight wouldn't be as simple as he initially thought. Finally stopping to catch their breath after fleeing Hogback's mansion, Nami, Chopper and Usopp stood debating what to do next. It wasn't long before Usopp's eyes widened as he locked onto several approaching auras. Eyes company. The other two's head snapped towards the approaching crowd. Assuming that they were more zombies, Nami whipped out her cleam attack. Wait. I assure you, we are not your enemies. Said an old man with a huge wound who could have easily passed for a zombie. Who are you then? Nami asked warily, still clutching her cleam attack. Call her paranoid, but she'd had a long day. We call ourselves the Thriller Bark Victims Association, a pink-haired woman explained. My name is Lola. We were all victims of Gecko Moria's ability. I have to ask, are you three part of the Straw Hat Pirates? You bet. Usopp declared. So did you guys all have your shadows stolen too? So you already know what's been happening, one of their visitors spoke up. That makes things easier, another said. Let us introduce ourselves. We are the Risky Brothers, members of the TPVA. As the Risky Brothers explained what was really happening on Thriller Bark, Nami and Usopp listened with wide eyes, while Chopper seethed in anger. You mean he's using people's shadows to animate and enslave people's corpses, the reindeer-human hybrid shouted. Well, essentially, one of the Risky Brothers confirmed. So that explains the whole zombie phenomenon. But still, why bring this to us? Hey, you. Lola said suddenly, looking straight at Usopp. Marry me. Usopp, taken aback, slowly pointed at himself in question. Yeah, she means you, one of the Risky Brothers assured. Oh, Usopp said, blinking. Well, sorry miss, but no can do. I'm a pirate through and through, and my heart belongs to the sea. As the Risky Brothers declared how many rejections that made, far too loudly in Nami's opinion, Lola looked confused. I happen to be a pirate as well. Is there a rule that states that they can't get married? She asked, not accusingly, but seemingly out of pure curiosity. Usopp suddenly lost the air of boastfulness about him, as his face took on a more wistful and melancholic expression. Well, they can. There's no rule against it, he replied. But it can cause problems later on. Lola's brow furrowed. I see, she responded, deep in thought, as Nami shot Usopp a sympathetic look. The Risky Brothers, sensing the somber atmosphere, decided to move the conversation along. Well anyway, one spoke up. We actually came to request something of you all. You see, just hours ago, in what could only be described as divine intervention, we of the Thriller Bark Victims Association miraculously began getting our shadows back. As of this moment, almost all of us have gotten ours back. All but one, in fact. Lola, one of our chief members, is the only one yet to regain hers. How did that happen? Chopper asked in amazement. Nami and Usopp, on the other hand, looked at each other blandly. Zoro, they chorused. Chopper's eyes lit up. Really, he's so cool. Aren't you forgetting that he left us alone on an island infested with vicious zombies? Nami asked haughtily. Technically we left him, Usopp reminded her, causing her to deflate a bit. Wait, Demon Wind Zoro. Are you telling me one of your crew is responsible for this? The other risky brother asked. Most likely, Nami replied. That just solidifies our faith in you. He proclaimed. Please, would you heed our request and get Lola's shadow back? She can't leave Thriller Bark without it and we refuse to leave one of our own behind. The three glanced at each other. I think we should help, Chopper gave his input. It couldn't hurt. Most of the zombies have been purified, right? It shouldn't be too hard to fight one zombie, Usopp added. Nami hummed and muttered something about needing to meet up with the others anyway, before turning back to Lola. It seems we're in agreement. We'll get your shadow back for you. The woman had tears in her eyes as she thanked them. Eyes, I hate to ask, but can I leave this to you? Chopper asked, catching their attention once they were out of earshot. I have business with Dr. Hogback. Usopp shrugged. Sure, go for it. Just be careful. We'll have Sanji-kun track you down afterward if we run into him, okay? Nami suggested. Chopper nodded and shifted into walk point, running off into the fog as he followed his sense of smell. Perrin screeched in frustration as Frankie once again pummeled him with the makeshift nunchucks he had fashioned out of a nearby pillar. How was this possible? In terms of physical strength, he was the strongest active zombie in Thriller Bark. How was he being overpowered by a mere human? He threw another punch at his tormentor, only for his hand to meet a solid wall of steel, the pain being his only reward for the endeavor. You? What the hell are you? Terran demanded, cradling yet another of his 8 abused limbs. Me? I'm just your friendly neighborhood cyborg. You won't get anywhere by pounding away, whatever you are. Terran suddenly grinned maliciously. Oh? Thanks for the advice. Frankie soon found himself ensnared in a giant webbing, which routed him to the ground. Terran laughed mockingly. You make a habit of telling your opponent what will and won't work on you. You should have just kept your mouth shut, you idiot. Well, you should have been able to figure out that punching me wasn't working anyway, Frankie said as he struggled to free himself, to no avail. So who's the idiot? Terran glared. Sorry, did you say something? I have poor hearing. My ass you do. Now let me out of this stupid web. Not gonna happen. I may not be able to hurt you, but that makes no difference if you can't go anywhere. That's your big plan? To just leave me here? Frankie asked. As far as evil plots go, I've seen better. Still can't hear you. And it's not as if you can do anything while you're in that web. Well, technically my head is still free, Frankie speculated. Fresh fire. He exhaled a stream of fire at the webbing, instantly setting it ablaze. Within seconds, the web burned away, leaving Frankie to run around aimlessly. Ow ow ow. Hot. That's super hot. He shouted before turning his attention back to the shocked Terran. Now. Time to end this. Weapons left. Terran screamed in pain as the projectiles collided with his face, but was granted no reprieve. Strong right. He was then sent hurtling away into the trees, which ceased his momentum painfully. Frankie wasn't finished. And coup event. The air cannon hit him hard enough to send him through the trees, off Thriller Bark, and into the ocean, where he was purified like his followers, leaving Frankie to strike a victory pose. Man, that fight was way too easy. Now, to find the others. Robin leapt out of the way as another ghost flew at her, but was still singed by the resulting explosion. She collided with the ground painfully, but quickly righted herself. She had learned the hard way that these specters could do a lot more than just spread negativity, nearly getting blown apart in the process. She was covered in bruises from head to toe as a result of the prolonged fight. Although Perona's attacks were nothing to scoff at, Robin's main issue with this ability was that it seemingly granted its user intangibility, rendering her attacks completely ineffective. It wasn't even the same type of invincibility as the Loja. She could bloom body parts on most Loja users, even if it wasn't exactly the wisest idea. But she couldn't even establish a base on Perona. It was like trying to bloom body parts out of an empty void, like the girl wasn't even there. At the rate things were going, pieces of her body were going to end up all over the place, with no help needed from the Hana no Mi. Not the time, Robin. Calm down, assess the situation. She quickly went over what else she knew. Perona was a user of the Horo no Mi. She'd ascertained as much rather soon going into this fight. That fruit was a paramecia, so it shouldn't provide any level of intangibility, much less this degree of it. So despite the spectral nature of the devil fruit, its class ruled out intangibility by default. What did that leave? Dimensional manipulation. That had little to do with ghosts, so no. Wait. Ghosts? What was a ghost? The spirit of a deceased entity. But Perona wasn't dead, as far as she knew. Unless her power operated similarly to Brooks and stayed with the user after death, which was exceedingly rare. Then the spirit would have to be separate from the body. Astral projection. The real Perona was never here. Hopefully. Oh well, it was worth a shot. Are you done running yet, bipolar bitch? Perona taunted, confident in her victory. Bipolar? That's a new one. Not to mention off the mark. Then again, Demonspan was never that accurate either. You would run too if you were being chased around by a face that ugly, Robin replied neutrally. As Perona sat sobbing with her knees against her chest, Robin blinked slowly. I honestly didn't think that would work again. Making full use of the reprieve, she closed her eyes. Mil floro homolinho. Thousands of eyes sprouted all over Thriller Bark, in every room, behind every wall, around every corner. One such eye soon found what it was looking for. A sleeping Perona on a bed in a room that looked like it belonged to a 5-year-old. It feels good to be right. Quickly sprouting 6 arms from afar around the girl's unmoving form, Robin performed a fast and efficient clutch, putting the girl out of commission. The projection in front of her froze before its eyes glazed over and it went slack. It soon dissipated completely. Well, that could have gone worse. I wonder how the others are faring. Shitty-faced piece of dollar and $% and percent number and RQ number and. Sanji roared, accentuating every swear that came out from his sailor's mouth with at least 10 kicks. At the receiving end of his heel was a bloody and beaten Absalom, his wrist bazookas crushed and discarded on the ground next to him. For all his physical fortitude, the best man could barely stand. He'd spent the last 10 minutes fruitlessly attempting to ward off Blackleg Sanji's onslaught as the chef swore bloody murder at him. Absalom was no stranger to hostility. In many circumstances, he'd come to expect it. He was the subordinate of a warlord, after all. But this was something else, something beyond what one would show to even an enemy. This was a personal vendetta. Gritting his teeth through the pain, he turned invisible and attempted to flee for what had to be the 5th time, only for the chef to effortlessly follow, as if he could see him perfectly. Every time he attempted this, he would be kicked even harder. Have to get out of here, this guy's insane. After a particularly brutal axe kick embedded his skull into the ground, he stood up and roared angrily, despite the blood flowing from his face. You? What the hell is your problem? Even I can tell you could have ended this fight already, and yet you're just causing as much pain as possible. What kind of monster are you? What do you have against me anyway? Shut up, you piece of shit. I have nothing against you, women's bath. Petty grudges are beneath me, women's bath. I'm doing this for the sake of my crew, women's bath. Sanji shouted, the bloodthirsty look on his face offering little credibility to his disjointed claim. Absalom's jaw was unhinged. That made no sense at all. This guy, he really is insane. I'm fighting a mentally unstable person. And losing. Just as Sanji was about to finish the fight, a large figure leapt out of the trees and swung at Sanji, who effortlessly dodged. Lol, Absalom shouted. Great, just what I needed, another crazy person. You bastard. The warthog zombie screamed. How dare you do this to Absalom-sama? What did he ever do to you? Sanji seemed to calm down as he was faced with a member of the opposite sex. Regardless of trivial classifications such as alive or dead, this thing before him was a woman, and it would be bad form to show the depths of his rage in front of her. He didn't do anything, Sanji replied calmly. Like I said, it's nothing personal, women's bath. Lola was even further incensed by the nonsensical explanation and charged at Sanji with a vengeance. The chef continued to dodge with little difficulty but didn't retaliate as Absalom took the chance to vanish and sneak away. In the rubble of what was once recognizable as Hogback's mansion, 2 swordsmen continued their duel. Zoro had yet to receive a single scratch. That was more than could be said for Ryuma, who was covered in blade wounds all over. If he was still alive, he would have no doubt bled out by now. Urano Zoro, your actions confuse me, the zombie stated. You are clearly the far superior swordsman, and yet you have yet to finish this duel. Did you not wish to take revenge for your fallen comrade, my shadow's previous owner? Why do you delay the end result? I wouldn't be satisfied fighting you at this level, Zoro retorted, causing Ryuma's eyes to narrow. If I'm going to slay you, I want to face you at your best first. Your words are empty, designed to insult my integrity and nothing else, Ryuma sneered. I have been going all out since our duel started. I disagree, Zoro said dully. I can sense it, the breath of the warrior that has long been silenced, only to pulse once more beneath the suffocating presence of foreign sovereignty. Just as swords embody the will of their wielders, so too does the body carry the will of its original bearer. That medium that you occupy, without the slightest regard for the legend that once embodied it, the weight of the name that you now go by it, still carries an echo of the man it once belonged to. Zoro dashed forward again, and as their swords clashed once more, Ryuma let the words wash over him. He was swayed by stirrings deep within, beyond his own comprehension. What is this? Why do I feel this way? It is not my place to contemplate the life that these hands once built, the ground that these legs once walked. I am simply Moria-sama's soldier, destined to carry out his will. So then why? As the steel of Zoro's swords gleamed in the light, Ryuma's eyes widened. Why do the words of this man move me so? Compelled by forces he could not fathom, Ryuma centered himself and attempted to remember his previous life as the Dragon Slayer. He couldn't. It was as if a barrier existed to prevent his consciousness from crossing the divide to his past life. Of course. Although he had never tried this before, he knew instinctively that Moria-sama's will would deter him from such independent endeavors. It was the very nature of his existence. So why was he so disappointed? No luck, huh? Zoro spoke up, breaking Ryuma out of his thoughts. I guess it won't be that easy. I figured as much. In order to feel that echo, you'll have to walk the border between life and death that your entire state of being is dependent upon. His face broke out into a feral grin. I hope for your sake that I'm right. Zoro raised one blade into the air, and if Ryuma had a heartbeat, he would have sworn it was pulsing in his ears. He was just a mass of reanimated organic matter with no independent will of its own. So why, when faced with the end of his being at the end of this man's blade, did he suddenly feel so alive? For this artificial consciousness to leave him without ever discovering the echo that this man had preached of, that felt so close, and for the first time, so attainable at the moment, he couldn't think of a more dissatisfying end. As Zoro's blade drew closer to his neck, time slowed down for Ryuma. When it was just inches away, something in his makeshift mind shattered. He felt like a puppet with its strings cut, who had just discovered it could move on its own all along. Zoro's blade was caught on Shusui, the killing strike stopped dead in its tracks. Amidst the silence that followed, the Straw Hat swordsman's face was unreadable, until finally, a mad grin manifested on his visage. Ryuma's aura spiked. Shusui's steel blackened to obsidian. I have much to thank you for, Zoro, he spoke with a far more dignified air. As reward, I promise a duel to be remembered for the rest of your days assuming you survive. The two separated, jumping back to survey each other. Forgive me, I never did introduce myself, did I? Ryuma chuckled. I fully blame Moria for that lack of conduct. You may refer to me as Dragon Slayer Ryuma Samurai of Wano. Nightfall, on the island of Zenku. Countless pillars of deadly flames assaulted Blackbeard. He absorbed what he could with his devil fruit, but as soon as he did so, another barrage of fire would replace the last. As a particularly searing fireball vanished into his singularity, a spray of faster flame bullets shot towards him and riddled his body with burn holes. Screaming in pain, he was unprepared for the next fire fist, which hit him dead on, blackening his already burned skin and blasting him backwards. He sucked in a ragged breath, trying to get his breathing back under control as he staggered to his feet. Suddenly, Ace shot out of the surrounding walls of fire, propelling himself forward as he brandished a blade of flame that Blackbeard had already learned the hard way was hockey imbued. He cursed as the blade headed straight for his unprotected neck, aiming to decapitate him. Ace had been aiming for vital spots every chance he got in this fight, as if he knew beforehand about the incredible vitality that Blackbeard had done his best to hide while on Whitebeard's ship. Blackbeard managed to duck under the first swing and took the chance to reach out and grab his former commander, darkness emanating from his palm. Ace was prepared for that though, and swung the blade back around swiftly. Blackbeard roared in agony as the blade nearly burned through his limb, bone and all. If not for the special properties of his body, that strike would have taken his hand off. The sight of victory burned in Ace's eyes as he got ready to take another swing at the traitor's neck when suddenly his hockey screamed at him and he leaned backwards to dodge Van Auger's hockey-imbued gunfire. A brief respite was all Blackbeard needed to gain some distance as more bullets shot towards Ace. Hatred fueled the Whitebeard commander as the ground practically exploded beneath his feet, propelling him through the wall of flames to where he could sense the sniper's location. More bullets shot toward him in a desperate attempt to ward him off, but Ace glided through them, his hockey strengthening his Loja defense. When he burst through the flames, Jesus Burgess was there, having noticed his crewmate's predicament, ready to punch his lights out. Or at least try. Ace shot through his guard like a missile, toppling him over as he formed a fire dagger, his gaze locked on the wide-eyed sniper who had robbed him of his vengeance. The makeshift blade burned through Auger's heart and as his life faded, the Blackbeard pirate heard one last scathing remark from the Loja's mouth. I'll make sure your precious scum of a captain follows. His body hit the ground with a thud. Burgess watched the callous murder of his crew member in shock, which then turned to rage as Ace started forming a ball of fire in his hand. Before he could attack the Loja however, Ace got yanked off his feet by an unseen force. Gritting his teeth, he continued charging his next attack as he was pulled toward the other Loja on the battlefield. Great Flame Commandment Entei. The plunged the gargantuan ball of fire towards the ground and it exploded with a deafening roar. The explosion was large enough to engulf most of the island, the greatest damage being dealt near the epicenter. The screams of the Blackbeard pirates were drowned out by the sheer volume of the blast as they were incinerated. When the blast ended, everything in sight was on fire. Standing in the center of the flames was Blackbeard, who had absorbed most of the fire heading in his direction, but still had fourth-degree burns covering his body. Despite his injuries, his eyes burned with triumph. In his grasp was Ace, who was trapped in the traitor's chokehold. He gasped for air, but Blackbeard was unrelenting, slamming him against the ground so that his head cratered the earth and vision became spotted. "You bastard," Blackbeard seethed, all false pretenses thrown out the window. "Look what you've done." Ace smiled darkly. "How does it feel, Teach? To lose your crewmates? I know you never really gave a damn about Thatch, but maybe you'll know firsthand now," he rasped. Blackbeard growled. "This is a major setback, I'll give you that," he said as he continued to choke the life out of the powerless Loja. "But it won't stop me. After I kill you here, I'll find more crew members. One day, I'll bring the Whitebeard pirates to ruin and take that sentimental old fool's place on the throne. This is my era, Ace." Ace spat in his face, causing him to tighten his hold. He wrapped one of his hands around Blackbeard's wrist, coating his hands with hockey and trying to loosen his grip as he subtly reached his other hand toward his hip. Blackbeard grunted in pain as his burns were aggravated by Ace's hold, but his grip didn't loosen in the slightest. "I hope that doesn't hurt, Teach," Ace wheezed. "Because where you're going, those burns will be nothing in comparison." Blackbeard's observation hockey suddenly screamed at him to move, but before he could so much as loosen his hold around the flame man's neck, a small, steel dagger, easily concealable, plunged into his chest. Blackbeard stumbled back in shock, allowing Ace to take in mouthfuls of air in relief. With shaking hands, he grabbed the hilt of the weapon and pulled it out from between his ribs, knowing that it had nicked his heart. Ace massaged his neck tenderly. His throat was covered in a hand-shaped mark that would surely bruise soon. He turned back toward a heaving traitor in front of him and readied one final attack with his now recovered Loja powers. Blackbeard looked at him with unmasked fear but was still able to gather his strength for one last clash. "I won't die here. I will become the next pirate king. It's my fate," he rambled as he struggled to move. "Your fate is the same as your crew's," Ace whispered as a searing white flame appeared in his palm. "Great Flame Commandment." Blackbeard desperately brought his hands up in defense. "Darkness Creed." Ace charged forward. "Genesis Edict." Blackbeard met him halfway. "Primordial Void." If one was to cast their gaze, at that moment, towards the island of Zenku from any neighboring islands of the Grand Line, they would have witnessed the sky light up as the sea was engulfed in fire for miles. The light shined like a colossal beacon, as if signaling to the heavens its triumph over the darkness of the night. Echo Moria knew he had ambition, no matter what any uninformed pirates may say about the matter. Although he had once fled the New World following the loss of his crew, that hadn't kept him down for long. Granted, he had no aspirations for ruling the seas anymore, but the darkest corner of it was still a fitting kingdom. Yes, he had ambition. But at the same time, he also that the best way to achieve them was to adhere to his strengths and rule from the shadows. To do that, he needed to be able to effortlessly command said shadows. Seeing as he was the user of the cage no me, that wasn't exactly a problem. So why couldn't he command this one? Twisting his body to unnatural forms using his shadow manipulation, Moria dodged another round of blows from his opponent, but as he readied his own mimicry of an attack, it happened again. The shadow that he had recently stolen resisted him, causing his punch to its hockey-imbued luster. Straw Hat Luffy charged through the weakened attack like it wasn't even there, once again nailing Moria in the face with his own strike. Moria roared in pain and rage as he was sent hurtling back towards the wreckage of the already collapsed wall. Landing on the floor painfully, he pushed himself back to his feet. "Starting to slip, huh?" Straw Hat's infuriating voice assaulted him, causing him to glare at the unfazed pirate captain. "Let me ask you, of all the shadows you've enslaved, have any of their owners awakened Conqueror's Haki?" Moria's eyes widened, but he didn't answer. "I guess that's a no," Luffy said with a smirk. "Well, you're about to learn why it won't work." Luffy quickly activated gears 2nd and 3rd simultaneously and began his next onslaught as Moria's, forcing Moria to fall back on the power of the shadow that was slipping from his grasp. Desperate, Moria held one hand out and used his trump card. "Shadows Asgard," he shouted, summoning all the subjugated shadows on Thriller Bark to his aid. Much to his shock, he could only feel 100 of them gather. "If you'd been using my haki correctly, you would have realized that most of the zombies have already been purified," Luffy stated, causing Moria to curse. The Straw Hat captain went on the offensive again, imbuing his fist with both armaments hardening and his Conqueror's Haki, causing the limb to darken and black sparks to trail down his arm. Gomu no. As the only shadow that could help him here continued to resist him, Moria braced himself for the pain. "Nighthawk. Stay still so I can hit you," Lola shouted as Sanji continued to evade her. Sanji, his anger having cooled after Absalom's departure, had resorted to trying to placate the warthog zombie woman attempting to bisect him. So far, he was having no luck. If only he had a crewmate nearby to distract her, but then they'd most likely be attacking her, which he'd object to anyway, unless of course the person attacking her was Nami-san or Robin-chan, but then they'd be in danger. Ah, the trials of being a chivalrous knight. Wait, I can fly. Why am I not using skywalk to get away? Thunderbolt tempo. Came a disembodied voice, followed by a bolt of lightning, which descended upon Lola. Nami-san, Sanji thought as he pinpointed her aura, as well as that of Usopp, who had taken up a sniping position. Sanji-kun, get going. I'll handle her. The voice shouted. Who's there? Lola shouted. Sanji opened his mouth to protest, but then closed it. Ah, screw it. Knowing the navigator could take care of herself, he leapt into the air, using skywalk to bring him towards Absalom's aura signature. I won't let you get away. Lola looked like she was about to try to jump after him, but she was suddenly hit by a firebird star, courtesy of Usopp, before Nami came out of Mirage Tempo right next to her, striking her with a Thunder Lance tempo, and finally following up with a Cyclone tempo, which hurled the warthog zombie over the gates of Thriller Bark and into the sea, purifying her. Nami blinked. Well, that was easy. You can come down now, Usopp. Absalom stumbled invisibly over some rubble, still panting in exertion, and covered in blood and bruises. That fight had been a disaster, but at least he'd gotten away. Where do you think you're going, you shitty lion? Seriously, just why, man? What vendetta could you possibly have against me that you chased me this far? And don't say women's bath. Actually explain, you son of a bitch. Sanji was silent for a moment before speaking. I suppose I owe you an explanation. There's a devil fruit that I've always wanted for myself since I was a child. The ability to turn invisible, I'd be able to achieve so much with it. But now that I know the devil fruit has been eaten, my dreams have been shattered. Tears started flowing from his eyes. I'll never know what it's like to be able to peep in the women's bath without anyone knowing. Are you fucking serious? Absalom deadpanned. No, you know what? Don't answer that. You are, aren't you? I can already tell you're completely insane. You did all that because I ate the devil fruit you wanted. I may technically be a pirate, but even I have to admit that's low. You could have at least come up with a better excuse for why you broke half the bones in my body. A valid reason, something I did so I'd know I at least deserved this bullshit. Hell, just earlier today I sexually assaulted your navigator. That would have been plenty of motivation to do what you did. His rant over, Absalom took a fortifying breath. You done? Sanji asked calmly. Yeah, I'm done. Good. Now could you repeat that last part? Absalom's brow furrowed. That would have been plenty of motivation. No, sorry, before that. A valid reason, something I did so I. After that, you shitty elephant. Hell, just earlier today I sexually assaulted your. He trailed off as Sanji stared at him silently. You didn't know, did you? Sanji continued to stare. From all across Thriller Bark, Absalom's screams could be heard for what felt like hours until they finally fell into silence. Hogback ran as far as his legs could take him, Sindri following behind him. Everything had gone wrong. These crazy pirates had either killed or purified most of their zombies before they even got the chance to take their shadows, and now Arano was destroying his mansion. He had to make it to Moria-sama to report this. Without any powerful shadows, the plan to animate ores would never be fulfilled. Hogback. The terrified doctor nearly tripped before he turned around and caught sight of Chopper running towards him in walk point. You again? What is it, Dr. Chopper? I'm busy. Why have you done all this, Hogback? When you told me you were resurrecting the dead, I thought it was a miracle. But all you're doing is enslaving them. Hogback scoffed. It's impossible to resurrect the dead without a few sacrifices. They can move, speak, and fight as if they were alive. As it stands, I'm the only doctor in the world that has come this far. Sindri, remove this naive fool from my presence. The enhanced zombie ran towards Chopper and made to attack, but Chopper easily swerved around her and rammed into Hogback, eliciting a yelp from him. Chopper then shifted into heavy point and pinned the doctor to the ground. I've lost all respect for you as a doctor. You disgust me. Chopper seethed. Sindri, get this barbarian off of me. Hogback panicked. Hearing the rapid footsteps behind him, Chopper lifted Hogback and threw him into Sindri's path, causing the plate she'd been aiming at the reindeer to shatter over Hogback's head instead. Hogback cursed as Sindri's eyes widened. You stupid girl. Can't you aim right? Hogback shouted before backhanding Sindri. The undead girl barely felt the hit but fell obediently to the ground as Hogback started kicking her in retaliation for her botched aiming attempt. Unable to even feel the pain, Sindri merely lay on the ground, submissively taking each assault on her person. Stop that. Chopper shouted in rage before punching Hogback across the face hard enough to knock a tooth loose. Neither noticed the hint of surprise that barely registered on the zombie woman's face. Even if they'd been looking, it would have been difficult to place the strange emotion that manifested directly afterward, barely even present. "Who do you think you are?" Chopper continued to scream. "Playing with their lives like this. They can't even feel anything anymore. It's not living, it's just being a slave inside your own body. Look at this poor girl. You've taken her very humanity away. What foolish dribble." Hogback spat, blood dripping down his chin. What part of her humanity has been stripped from her? Her body and soul are both human. Humans have free will. Chopper shouted with such passion that it cut deep through Sindri's being, deeper than even the force that reanimated her. "Enough of this nonsense. Sindri, stop sitting there and eliminate this filth." "Sindri. I can't." Sindri replied. "What?" Hogback screeched. Even Chopper turned to her in surprise. "I can't move. My body won't move," she clarified. Unbidden, tears started to trail down her cheeks. Tears. Why? She wasn't sad, so why was she crying? It was as if body was doing things on its own. "Sindri. Are you listening to me? I'm ordering you to take out this." Hogback was silenced as Chopper's fist implanted itself into his skull again, knocking him unconscious as he fell to the ground. But the doctor was still staring at Sindri in wonder. Slowly, he walked up to Sindri and scooped her up in his arms. "I can't move," she murmured again. "I can't." "Don't worry, it'll be alright," Chopper whispered. "You'll be alright soon." But she just kept repeating the same words, even as Chopper made the long trek to the edge of Thriller Bark, placed her into the ocean water, and watched as she was purified. As he gently set Sindri's once again dead body down on the ground, he looked up at the fog surrounding the area. "I wonder, could she really feel something after all?" he murmured solemnly to himself. "Can these zombies, shells of their former selves, really carry the will of their past spirits?" Sparks ignited the air with every cross of their swords. Demon Wind Zoro of the Straw Hat Pirates and Dragon Slayer Ryuma of Wano matched each other blow for blow, neither letting up. Both were covered in wounds, but none were lethal. "It seems we're quite even," Ryuma stated. "And yet, I can sense that you're still holding back." "Sorry about that," Zoro grunted. "I was just getting used to this new pace." "Now then, 9-sword style Asura." "Oh? Quite the technique you've got there," Ryuma said, as Zoro's appearance and aura were altered. "If my heart was still beating, it would be pulsing with excitement. Let's see what you can do." Demon 9 Flash. Although Ryuma was shocked at the power behind the attack, he met it head-on, attempting to counter the slash. His eye sockets widened in amazement. Too much. The wall behind him shattered from the force of the blades, along with the entire structure of the building. Still, Ryuma finally managed to deflect the 9 swords away, though the attack had still cut him through, leaving him with a large hole through his side to show for his efforts. If he was still alive, that attack would have ended this fight. "It seems he is still the superior swordsman," Ryuma marveled. "Still, well, he outclasses me in skill, I outclass him in experience." Zoro immediately spun around, Asura still active, and made to attack again. One miss silver. This time, as Zoro charged, Ryuma approached at a different angle, attempting to mitigate the damage now that he knew he couldn't overcome the technique. That won't work, Zoro thought. Even that way, he can only avoid 3 of them. Still, something was off. There was something strange about the way he was gripping Shusui. It's as if he wasn't even trying to cut him. Zoro's eyes widened, but it was too late. Ryuma's one sword collided with 6 of Zoro's as he avoided the other 3. Another wound opened on Ryuma's shoulder. As they passed each other, Zoro growled. "Bastard." Ubashiri shattered, and Asura faded. Brook watched in amazement from his spot on the broken floor. He used a sword-breaking technique at the cost of another injury. "You know, despite being pissed, I have to admit I'm impressed," Zoro said. "That gamble would have paid off had I not noticed what you were doing at the last second." Ryuma rose from his crouched position on the floor. "It seems that this fight is ended," he whispered. "Yeah, I doubt you can win like that," Zoro agreed. Lying on the floor next to Ryuma was the Dragon Slayer's severed arm. "Then let's finish this," Ryuma said, before holding his arms out at the sides, as Zoro stared at him in surprise. "Wounds on the back," Ryuma began. "Are a swordsman's shame," Zoro finished, before dashing forward one more time. "Lion's Elegy." The green-haired swordsman bisected Ryuma from shoulder to waist, and Ryuma's form began to tip over. "I thank you, Rarana, for this one final duel. You may take Shusui as compensation for your lost blade." As he finished speaking, Brook's shadow fled from Ryuma's body, returning to its original owner. As the corpse fell to the floor, Zoro caught Shusui in one hand. Moria was forced back against the wall, attempting in vain to defend against Luffy's onslaught as his control over the shadow slipped away from him. "Gomu Gomu no. No. I won't be stopped here by some damn rookie. I am the master of shadows. Drawing his fist back again, he coated his fist in hockey one last time in an attempt to turn the fight around. That was when he felt it. A foreign presence in the back of his mind issuing out a single command. Stop. Moria's body obeyed, freezing up as his rage gave way to shock. Elephant gun. The punch hit him dead center, finally forcing him to relinquish his hold on the shadow that had been fighting to escape, the same one that had just fought him for control of his own body and triumphed. Left with only the weaker shadows of the common zombies around Thriller Bark, Moria's eyes widened in fear. As Luffy's shadow returned to him, he smirked. I guess that's it then. One final jet pistol sent Moria through the wall, knocking him out cold. Moria has been defeated, Bartholomew Kuma said, standing atop Thriller Bark's mast. There was silence at the other end of the transponder snail. You're sure of this? Sengoku's voice finally came. I am. Would you like me to strike now? Sengoku sighed. No. Against both of those monsters, you're not going to win. We still have to find a replacement for Crocodile, and if we can't cover this up, Moria as well. We can't have you be defeated as well. Understood. Do they know you're there? Most likely yes, I'd assume so. Then get the hell out of there. With that, the line went silent. Kuma turned his cybernetic gaze back towards the Straw Hat Captain, who he could almost swear was now staring right at him through the foggy sky. Monkey D. Luffy, quite the interesting crew you have there, he said, before vanishing without a trace. And just like that, the long-standing nightmare of Thriller Bark came to an end. The Straw Hat Pirates and Thriller Bark Victims Association met up at the Thousand Sunny following Moria's defeat. Upon boarding the ship, the Straw Hats were met by the side of their ship Spirit sitting cross-legged on the deck of the ship. Did you enjoy your trip? The girl asked, visibly pouting at not being able to go with them. You bet. Luffy exclaimed. We made new friends and saw all sorts of cool stuff. Sunny crossed her arms and looked away as Nami smacked Luffy upside the head. Robin giggled. Don't worry, Sunny. We'll tell you all about it during the inevitable celebration. The girl visibly brightened. Really? Usopp grinned. Of course. The post-victory celebrations are 110% mandatory. You mean that shit you pulled back on Water 7 was a regular thing? Frankie asked. Heh, guess I could get used to this. Let's break out the cola. Sanji sighed. Women's bath, he bemoaned. Oh, will you shut up about that? Nami scolded. Don't just go saying women's bath at random intervals. It's embarrassing. Luffy gave him a thumbs up. It's okay, Sanji. You don't need the devil fruit. If you can't peek in on the women's bath using invisibility, then you'll just have to peek in on the women's bath without it. Captain Sanji whispered, inspired by Luffy's words, as tears trailed down his face. Nami had a contrasting reaction and was now chasing Luffy around the deck, trying to hit him. I can't believe you. Why are you encouraging him? Aren't you supposed to be the captain then act like it? But I am. Luffy protested. It's a captain's job to make sure the crew follows their dreams. God, you guys are noisy, Zoro complained. I'm gonna go sleep. Before he got the chance, however, Chopper latched himself onto Zoro's face. Zoro. Don't leave us like that. I was so scared. You're the one who left. Now get off of me. Hey Nami. Lola called, causing the navigator to stop chasing Luffy. I'm so grateful that you got my shadow back. Even though your captain knocked Moria out anyway, you still went out of your way for me. As thanks, I'd like to give you something. Curious, Nami voiced her consent and Lola held out a blank white paper. A Viver card? Nami asked. It belongs to my mother. She's a powerful pirate in the New World, so who knows, this might be very useful to you and your crew. Wow, thanks. As the Straw Hats and their guests began their obligatory celebration, Brook took in a deep breath. It wouldn't be long now before he'd be able to see the sun again, and it was all thanks to this crew and their captain who had so suddenly declared him a comrade. He truly owed them everything. Perhaps, if he went with his crew, then one day. Thinking about Laboon? Luffy's voice came from behind him. Yes. I was just thinking that if I were to set sail again, I'd want to see him again. A few moments passed before Brook turned to Luffy in shock. What? Luffy-san, how did you know about that? Luffy grinned. We met Laboon on our way into the Grand Line. He's been waiting all this time for his crew to come back. I promised him that I'd come back too, so that he'd hang on a bit longer. Brook was speechless. But you, how did you know one of those crewmate was me? Luffy's smile turned solemn. That I'll tell you about later. For now, what do you say we just enjoy the party? Calming down, Brook nodded. Yes, it's been quite a long time since I've had so many reasons to celebrate. If you don't mind, could I sing a song for you and your crew? It's one of my favorites. Sure thing. Hey, guys. Gather around. Brook's gonna sing for us. Curious, the Straw Hats and former victims of Thriller Bark gathered around Brook as he pulled out his violin and began to play. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Gather up, no time to lose, time to round up Bink's booze. Sea breeze blowing, where are we going? Let the waves decide. Far across the ocean blue, the sun is shining white and true. Birds they sing, drawing rings throughout the endless sky. Say so long to solid land, bid farewell to shores of sand. Sing out loud, and sing it proud, our song of setting sail. Through the gold and silver flow, a salty spray from sea below. Day and night, from play to plight, the waves will tell our tale. Gather up, no time to lose, time to round up Bink's booze. Pirates we, to sail the sea, that is our destiny. The sea provides a place to rest, the waves, our branch, the ship, our nest. Fly our flag and proudly brag that we are sailing free. Somewhere in the boundless blue, stormy gales begin to brew. Oceans dance, a man's romance, the rhythm of the drums. Never give in to your fright, lest you walk towards the light. Just hold on, it won't be long, the morning sun will come. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Gather up, no time to lose, time to round up Bink's booze. The day onward, to tomorrow, dreaming through the night. Our days are like the passing wind, eternal we have never been. Wave goodbye, but don't you cry, let twilight be your guide. Gather up, no time to lose, time to round up Bink's booze. Play our song, and sing along for all the sea to hear. Live this once and don't bemoan, for one day you'll be naught but bones. Set the sail and spread your tail, our next adventure nears. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. Yo-ha-ho-ho, yo-ha-ho-ho. The party began to gain momentum following Brook's performance, and Brook exhaled slowly. It's been a long time since I was able to sing that song without feeling the full weight of the tragedy that befell me. Seeing he had everyone's attention, he turned to Luffy. Luffy-san, may I join your crew? Luffy grinned. Duh. You're already part of it, remember? At that, Brook let the tears that were 50 years in the making flow. It never felt so good to be alive. The party continued well into the night. Right before dawn, when everyone else was going to sleep, Luffy pulled Brook out on deck and explained how they knew about his connection to Laboon. I see. So this is not the first time you've met me. And you said Zoro-san was in the same situation. As Luffy nodded, Brook hummed. That would explain the strength he displayed. And here I was wondering how much stronger Grand Line rookies could have gotten in the past half a century. So you believe me? Just like that? Luffy asked. Brook chuckled. Considering that I've come back from the dead, far be it from me to not believe in something like time travel. Luffy smirked. That makes sense, I guess. Suddenly, a light caught his eye, and he smiled. Hey, Brook, he said, getting the skeleton's attention as he pointed out at the horizon. Brook followed his finger, and his eye sockets widened as he took in a sight he hadn't witnessed in 50 years. The rising sun. Urano as Zoro awakened abruptly to the darkness of twilight and the calm rocking of the thousand sunny overnightly waves. Frowning, he cast his eyes out in the direction of Sunny's deck. Intruders? No, Sunny would have noticed first and warned them herself. It didn't take long for him to realize why his observation haki had awoken him so suddenly. Luffy was wide awake and not for a midnight snack. Silent as a shadow, he slipped out of the cabin door and made his way up towards the deck. His movements were swift but not urgent, whatever had Luffy's aura pulsing, it evidently wasn't enough to send his captain into a panic, merely send his mind abuzz with distressing thoughts. As he reached the deck, he felt Luffy's aura calm the slightest bit, probably in reaction to his arrival. It was just like Luffy to be broadcasting his emotions enough to wake his first mate up and not even realize it. He walked up behind the Straw Hat captain, who hopped down from the Sunny's head. Zoro sent him a questioning look. In response, Luffy held out a white, sizzling sheet of paper. Base's Beaver card. Base sharpening, Zoro examined it with narrowed eyes. It was about 3/4 of its normal size, a far more comforting sight than the meager slip of paper it had been reduced to in the previous timeline. Ace had evidently been in a difficult situation, but not a life-threatening one. But that was assuming it hadn't gotten smaller than this previously. They hadn't expected Luffy's brother to fight Blackbeard this time, what with their rather direct warning, and to their knowledge he was still in paradise. This meant either that Ace had been fighting a different opponent that posed a similar danger in the first half of the Grand Line, or, more likely, could he have won? Zoro asked hopefully. Luffy frowned, but there was the same underlying sense of hope emanating from him. We told him about Blackbeard's devil fruit, his vitality, his crew, everything. Do you remember what he said? He promised he wouldn't take on Blackbeard unless he was sure he could win. But we're talking about Blackbeard. "We're also talking about Ace," Luffy replied. "His rate of growth rivals ours. Do you think we could have taken Aokiji back in Alabasta, even together?" Zoro gave that some thought, though the answer was obvious. Upon arriving in the past, they'd been about as strong as they'd become after training for 2 years. Certainly not enough for the likes of the Marine Admirals, even with their superior teamwork. If Ace had been spending this time improving his Haki and Devil Fruit mastery instead of chasing leads on Blackbeard, what Luffy was suggesting was quite possible. Zoro's gaze returned to the sizzling Vivre card and finally noticed something that made his eyes widen. "Luffy, which way is it moving?" Luffy blinked and held the card up in his palm. It inched itself towards the figurehead. Directly towards the figurehead. "The log is on course to Fishman Island," Zoro said. "But there's no way he's there." Luffy's eyes widened as he caught on. There was only one Paradise Island remaining that followed the same path as Fishman Island. Sabati Archipelago. Light slowly filtered through his eyelids as he groaned and tried to sit up. The result of the endeavor was soreness and a splitting headache, and he quickly collapsed back onto the bed he was lying on. Wait, bed. That wasn't quite right. Last thing he remembered was Teach. As his vision began to clear, he took a few deep labored breaths before attempting to sit up once more, slower this time. He placed one arm under him for support and managed to force himself into a sitting position. Surveying the room around him, he caught sight of a glass of water on a bedside table next to him, and only then did he realize how thirsty he was. He experienced a brief bout of paranoia, but shoved it aside. If whoever brought him here wanted to poison him, which wasn't that improbable, it was one of the only ways to harm a Loja user with observation Haki, even when they were unconscious, they simply would have forced the liquid down his throat while he was asleep. Besides, this room was a bit too nice to be a makeshift prison. Just a bit. After he was done chugging the water, he decided to gain some sense of his surroundings. Pushing his legs out from under the covers so that they hung off the bed, he reached out with his senses and was a bit surprised to note how populated this island was wherever it was. But pushing that to the back of his mind, he quickly narrowed his field to the building they were in and was rewarded with a familiar presence. Tension easing from his shoulders, he called out. "Hey Bonnie." He waited a few moments before he heard footsteps thudding down the hall outside his door, which soon swung open. "Ace, you're awake," she exclaimed. Marching up to the bed, she placed her hands on her hips. "You scared me, you idiot. Don't do that again." Ace let out a sheepish laugh. "Sorry about that. But to be fair, I'm not the one who picked a fight with a New World veteran when I still barely knew what Haki was." Bonnie scowled but soon conceded the point with a sigh. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. "Don't worry about it," Ace said. "At least we're both alive. But I have to ask." His face darkened. "What about Teach?" "Blackbeard?" Bonnie asked. "I wouldn't be worried. He was barely alive when I got back there. The scary part though is that his body was still intact. I have no idea how durable he would have to be not be incinerated after that, but I suppose it doesn't matter now. The Marines showed up afterwards." Ace scowled. So Teach had survived. Just barely though, from how it sounded, and now he was no doubt in Marine custody, most likely headed straight for Impel Down. Hearing that, Ace felt conflicted. Having learned the truth of Luffy's past had only deepened his personal vendetta against the bastard, and he'd wanted the vindication of killing him with his own 2 hands. Though he was unlikely to survive long in that state where he was going, Ace still couldn't help but feel worried. If that asshole could survive Ace's strongest attack, what else could he survive? Well, not that it mattered. Impel Down was practically inescapable. Overall, he supposed he should be satisfied with the outcome. Bonnie practically read his mind and her fist abruptly shot through his head, causing small flames to dance across the room. "Don't look so pleased, idiot. You weren't in that great a shape either. I had to treat your injuries and haul your ass out of there. Did you think the Marines wouldn't take note of an island-sized explosion?" Hearing that, Ace immediately sobered. He knew what the consequences would be if he was captured. Luffy had told him firsthand, and yet he had still acted recklessly. Still, he didn't regret it. "I'd do it again if it meant not leaving you in the hands of that scum," he said unapologetically. Her eyes softened. For someone who was mostly oblivious to her feelings, Ace could act pretty tender when the time called for it. "Well, it's past. Let's not dwell on it. I almost forgot, but there's someone here who wanted to see you." Ace raised an eyebrow. "That reminds me. Where is here exactly?" She smirked. "Come see for yourself." Having shaken off any lingering weakness, Ace got dressed and followed Bonnie out the door. When he arrived outside, he was struck by a strong sense of nostalgia and the sight of giant trees and soap bubbles. As the rest of the Straw Hats woke up, they sent Luffy and Zoro some concerned looks due to having woken up so early again. They didn't have much time to worry about it though, as they were soon assaulted by a typical Grand Line storm which became not so typical once it started raining candy. They paused briefly to marvel at a sea raccoon and a circular rainbow before the onslaught finally concluded with a set of serpentine currents rising out of the sea, which Luffy insisted on riding out rather than escaping with a coup de burst, much to Nami's annoyance. Afterward, the captain and first mate began explaining the situation with Ace and how he was most likely at their next destination, over breakfast. Hearing that, the crewmates who had met him in Alabasta were especially eager to meet him again. Brooke, being the only member of the crew to not know who Ace was, listened intently as Luffy spoke of his past. "We're not blood related," Luffy explained. "But to us, that just makes our bond all the more real. Along with Sabo, we forged our brotherhood through the fires of blood, sweat, and sake. Those were good times." Robin giggled at the sight of Luffy's enthusiasm. "Well, I've loved to meet him. It was quite amusing hearing Crocodile throw a fit when he first heard of Whitebeard's 2nd Division commander dropping by Nanohana. He seemed to think his plans were in jeopardy. Imagine that." Luffy sniggered. "I would have loved to see that." "So we're going to meet up with Ace-san on Sabati Archipelago, correct?" Brooke asked. "That's right, but there's another reason we need to go there," Zoro chimed in. "It's an essential stop if we want to get to Fishman Island." "I was wondering about that," Nami said. "I guess I should have expected it, but right now, the log pose is angled down. Is there really a way to get to the bottom of the ocean using the Sunny?" Frankie tensed up, now considering the possibility that they wouldn't be able to take his creation to the new world, but relaxed when he heard Zoro's next words. "It'll be fine. We just need to get a coating for the ship on Sabati," the swordsman answered. "Coating?" Nami asked. "You bet. We get someone to put up a giant bubble around the ship and then it can sail underwater, no problem," Luffy said, pumping his fist into the air in excitement. Along with Skypia, Fishman Island had been one of his favorite locations in Paradise. The crew stared at him skeptically, hearing of that seemingly impossible method, and turned to Zoro. "Nope, that's basically it," the first mate confirmed with a smirk. "Well, far be it from us to doubt that future knowledge of yours," Sanji said with a shrug. More importantly, he suddenly started jumping around the room in an uncharacteristic show of excitement. "Mermaids. I can't wait to see them. Oh, the beautiful living gems of the sea. I can't wait to meet one." "Huh? But you already met one," Luffy said. That stopped Sanji in his tracks. "Huh?" Zoro suddenly choked on his sake, drawing the attention of the crew. The swordsman was trying hard to hold in his laughter and failing. "What's wrong with Zoro?" Chopper asked. "Never mind that. What do you mean I've met one before, Luffy?" Sanji asked eagerly. "Oh, that's right, you guys never found out this time," Luffy realized. "Found out what, Luffy?" Robin asked. "Well, let's put it this way," Zoro said, having regained his composure. "Someone we've met in our travels was a mermaid, but hid it well." Luffy smirked, catching on to the game. "Think you can guess who it was?" That caught their interest, and everyone's minds were now hard at work for some hint of who it could have been. But no one was thinking harder than Sanji, whose mind was in overdrive. "I got it," the chef finally shouted. It was Vivi-chan. The crew stared at him quizzically. "What? She's certainly beautiful enough," he defended. "Next guess," Zoro said, rolling his eyes. "Nichiko-chan." Nami gave him a blank stare. "I think I'd know if my sister was a mermaid, thank you very much." "Really? But Kanis-chan was an angel, and other than present company, I can't think of anyone who was more beautiful than those three." Suddenly a bomb went off in his mind as the realization settled in. "I've got it," the chef said seriously, before pointing to both Nami and Robin. "It has to be either Nami-san or Robin-chan. It's Granny Kokoro." After about 10 seconds of letting that sink in, Luffy and Zoro both erupted into laughter at the looks on everyone's faces. Sanji, realizing they were serious, began sulking in the corner of the room. "It's not fair," he began mumbling over and over. "Wait, how is that even possible?" Usopp asked, face slightly green. "We saw her walking on 2 legs." "Yeah, there was an explanation for that," Luffy recalled. "Something about monster cats and turning 30. "You're making zero sense," Nami muttered. "If you guys are done," Zoro said, shaking off a few more bouts of laughter, "this would be a good time to enjoy the sights." It didn't take them long to figure out what he meant. Far off in the distance, the gargantuan wall of land that was the Red Line could be seen towering into the heavens. It was a sight they had all seen at least once before, but it was as breathtaking as ever. Halfway there, Nami mumbled in awe. "I feel like crying. So much has happened," Usopp exclaimed. "I have to say, it's not exactly dull, even the 5th time," Zoro reminisced quietly. "5th?" Robin asked curiously, being one of the only ones to have heard him. "Shouldn't it be the 4th?" "No, Zoro's right," Luffy said, a faraway look in his eyes. "It's the 5th. Back then, we should have felt thrilled. It was a sight almost no one else had ever witnessed," he trailed off sadly. Zoro's grip on his swords tightened. but try as we might, we couldn't bring ourselves to feel a damn thing. Robin was slightly pale, having now realized what they meant. Many had seen the red line before entering the Grand Line or the New World, but there was one location from which only a select few had borne witness to its glory. Just then, another giant wave rocked the ship and the Straw Hats went out on deck to see what the commotion was. "Oh, it's just a sea king," Nami said. Having been broken out of his thoughts, Luffy promptly punched it in the gut and it fell back, motionless, into the sea, but not before coughing up a humanoid figure who was now falling toward the ship. As the figure drew closer, yelling in panic all the while, Sanji's eyes gradually widened. As he traced her falling form to the moment she was right above him, a single thought echoed through his mind. There's a god in this world and it's not that lightning bastard. After the Straw Hats were acquainted with the excitable mermaid Kami, or in Luffy and Zoro's case, reacquainted, Luffy pulled Nami aside, much to the navigator's curiosity. "Nami, there's something you should know. It's about a friend of Kami's that we're probably going to run into soon." Nami blinked. "Do I know this friend of hers?" Luffy debated briefly about how to best break this to her, but decided the best thing to do was be blunt. "It's Hachi." Nami stiffened and took in a sharp breath. Luffy already felt bad as he could quite literally feel the memories haunting her. While Hachi had never tormented Nami directly, he still helped cause the horrifying nightmare that had plagued her for so long. "In the future in our timeline, you forgave him and he became a friend of ours," Luffy continued, watching as she drew further into herself. He reached out and placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "I just want you to know this is ultimately your choice. If you decide to forgive him, the rest of us will too. If not, then we'll just go our separate ways, and that'll be that." Nami let out a breath and relaxed. She had thought, for a brief irrational moment, that maybe Luffy would try to emulate what had happened in his own timeline. Upon hearing that she wasn't to be held to a decision she hadn't made yet, most of the tension eased out of her. She knew Luffy better than that, but some scars ran deep. After a moment of thought, she made up her mind. "I'll give him a chance, but I can't promise anything." When the two rejoined the other Straw Hats, Kami declared that she had to thank them for freeing her somehow, and sure enough, she soon promised them free takoyaki. As she dialed Hachin's number on the transponder snail, Luffy's mouth watered in spite of himself. The last few months had been rather eventful for Hachi. After being defeated by the Straw Hat Pirates along with his crew, he thought it was all over for him. Lucky, he managed to escape from the marine ship that was taking him to Impel Down before it got there. Being a fisherman, it was easy for him to make a getaway after that. He decided to make a clean living from then on. Terrorizing humans had always left a bad taste in his mouth, but he had never questioned it out of respect for Arlong. Still, since there wasn't much he could do to get them out of Impel Down, short of a futile prison break attempt, it had been as good a time as any to make a fresh start. He had met a young mermaid named Kami along the way, and although he hadn't made the best first impression, they had stuck together like glue after some time, even opening up their own mobile takoyaki stand in the Grand Line. Unfortunately, Kami had a bad habit of getting either eaten or captured every so often. Either one, really. It varied from week to week. Recently she had been eaten by a rabbit-like sea king, one of which Hachi had lost track of after being attacked by some old rival fishmen who didn't know when to give up. They'd been after Kami, so perhaps it was best that she hadn't been there. Luckily, she had been coughed up onto the ship of some Grand Line pirates. After she had given him a call, he'd instructed her to send a number of fish to find him and then lead him to her. Which led to his current journey, which happened to be leading him in the direction of Sabati Archipelago. Hachi was reluctant to go anywhere near that place, but the fact that Kami was already in its vicinity, in the care of unidentified human pirates no less, was enough to spur him into action. The school of fish dispersed as they reached the ship in question. Hachi noted that the figurehead was in the form of a rather happy-looking lion sunflower thing. He'd never seen or heard of this ship before, so it probably belonged to some no-name pirates. So hasty was he to ensure Kami was alright that he didn't bother to look at the ship's flag. He leapt out of the water to land on the deck, only to be met with some very familiar faces. Contrary to some human misconceptions, fishmen were, in fact, warm-blooded. As Hachi's blood ran cold, however, he felt anything but. The Straw Hats had mixed reactions to seeing Hachi. Luffy and Zoro both felt conflicted, though the latter hid it well. While they had long since made amends with the Hachi of their timeline, this Hachi was not the same one who had apologized profusely to Nami and made multiple attempts to make it up to her, even after being forgiven. Usopp and Sanji's thoughts were much simpler. They, along with the rest of the crew, had been filled in on the situation by Zoro, while Luffy distracted their mermaid guest with questions about the takoyaki stand. They had decided to keep their thoughts to themselves, grudgingly in Sanji's case, once Nami made her intentions to give Hachi a chance known. Topper, Robin, Frankie, and Brooke all understood what was going on for the most part, but didn't harbor any of the feelings the rest of the crew had for this new arrival. For now, they were withholding judgment. Nami's reaction was the most telling. From the moment Hachi had landed on the deck of their ship, her eyes had narrowed. She gave no other reaction, even as the fishman's was rendered utterly speechless by the sight of them. After several long moments passed with Nami and Hachi staring at each other and no one saying anything, the fishman finally averted his eyes and looked down in shame. Nami sighed. The anger she wanted to feel towards Hachi simply wasn't coming. Seeing him now, far from the imposing figure he had been during her childhood, made most, if not all lingering resentment fade away. As much as she wanted to condemn him for everything, she knew that it wouldn't change anything. Nami had been a slave to her past for 10 long years. Now that she had escaped that prison, she didn't think shackling herself to it again would be a good idea. She was happy now. She was free. Hachi couldn't take that from her. "You know, I didn't think I'd see you here," Ace said to the man sitting beside him as a wary bartender served him some sake. "Can you afford to spend this much time in the first half?" "I could ask you the same," Sabo replied. "I know you were staying here to find me, but you accomplished that a while ago. Is there any reason you haven't returned?" "I was actually getting ready to, but I had a bit of a situation on my hands." "So I've heard," the revolutionary sighed. "That was reckless, by the way. Marshal D. Teach was still an unknown factor, even to us." Ace smiled sheepishly. "I made it out all right. What about you? You haven't said why you're still here." "Don't tell me you've forgotten our last talk already," Sabo said dryly. It clicked in Ace's brain. "Ah. So you're ready to meet Luffy then?" He received a nod in response. "And your memory? I know it hasn't been that long. I'm getting some brief flashes every now and then, but nothing major. Still, I think maybe meeting my other brother would go a long way." "Worth a shot," Ace agreed. "There's another reason we're here though," Sabo said. "He seems to think that there's a storm brewing." Ace hummed. "We talking a paradise or New World storm?" "A New World storm in paradise." Ace's eyes narrowed. That sounded too familiar for comfort. "Do you have any idea what they're talking about?" Bonnie asked the other revolutionary, who was sitting off to the side with her. Cola shrugged. "Couldn't tell you even if I did. Hell, our chief of staff is stretching it by saying as much as he is, even if Fire Fist seems to be trustworthy." She frowned. "Still, I can't deny that there's strategic value to giving the Whitebeard pirates a warning." Just then, another figure walked in. "Yo, boss. They're approaching the island as we speak. Just thought I'd let you know." Sabo sighed. "Will you stop calling me boss already? I'm the second in command." Maverick smirked. "Which makes you the boss when he's not around." Ace raised an eyebrow. "Luffy's coming. I can't sense him." "They're probably not that close yet. Maverick ate the honey no mi and became a scope man," Sabo explained. "He can see even farther than the range of most observation users." "Sounds about right for a spy," Ace mused. "Hey Bonnie. How would you like to meet your competition again?" The recently dubbed Supernova smirked. "Sounds great. I still owe him one." The Straw Hats arrived at Grove 41 of Sabati Archipelago in high spirits. Once Nami had agreed to give Hachi a chance, the octopus fishman had been so grateful that he'd insisted on helping them find someone to coat their ship, in addition to showering them with free takoyaki. He knew he hadn't been forgiven yet, but seemed eager to make amends as much as he could. After Sunny nearly gave Brooke a heart attack, he couldn't actually get one since he had no heart, as he was soon to joyfully proclaim, by manifesting in front of him for the first time to see them off. Hachi and Kami had exchanged confused glances as the entire crew said their temporary farewells to seemingly no one. The group had made their way to the lawless zone of the archipelago, casually warding off attacks from ambitious bounty hunters and other pirates every now and then. Luffy and Zoro were currently leading the way, having told Hachi that they had someone to meet with before they got their ship coated. It was on the way there that Luffy noticed something he hadn't before. "Hey Zoro. Do you sense that? There are some familiar auras where Ace is." Zoro focused for a moment, then blinked. "Huh. You're right. The revolutionaries are here too. And they're not exactly hiding." When the group arrived at their destination, they were greeted by the sight of grudge match between pirates taking place in plain sight. The term grudge match was used loosely here, since it seemed to be at least a couple dozen pirates all ganging up on one person. "Is that all you shitheads got?" Bonnie shouted as she continued to weave through the horde of assailants. "You seemed so confident earlier. At least make me work for this." Ace, Sabo, Cola, and Maverick stood off to the side, watching. "Aren't you gonna help?" Cola asked the Whitebeard commander. "Nah. This is her journey," Ace replied. "Let her have her fun. Besides, they're all small fry anyway." "Ace. Sabo." Luffy shouted excitedly. The two groups converged as Bonnie finished off the last of the cannon fodder. "So, we finally meet," Sabo said with a grin. "I've heard a lot about you, Luffy." In a bar that was rather well known for ripping off pirates, a black-haired woman was cleaning up the mess her last band of difficult customers had made before she'd extorted them for all they were worth. "No more business today, huh?" she mused before the door to her cavern opened with a creak. She turned around, ready to welcome the newcomer, whoever they were, and was momentarily taken aback. "Oh? I didn't expect you back for a while now, Ray-san." The silver-haired man took a long drink from his flask before answering. "Long time no see, Shaki. I actually wasn't planning on coming back for a while, but something caught my attention. I feel like trouble's just around the corner, so I came to warn you." Shaki hummed. If whatever was coming was enough to alert the Dark King's observation, then a major upset was about to happen. "Well, there are rumors of revolutionaries on the archipelago. Is that related in any way?" "Could be," Rayleigh admitted. "But there's something else I've noticed." His face suddenly turned serious. "Have you noticed a distinct lack of marine presence around lately?" In the heart of the lawless zone of the archipelago, the supernova named Basil Hawkins sat studying the cards laid out on the table in front of him soberly. "A sign of adversity," he muttered before flipping over another card. His eyes immediately narrowed. "A major conflict is about to take place here. And at the heart of it." He lifted his head, gaze drawn to some unseen threat in the distance. "Straw Hat, even you'll be hard-pressed to make it out of this one." A few hours earlier. Many miles away, one of the most famous mythical zones in existence fumed at what he was listening to on the transponder snail before him. "Let it be known that I'm completely against this. Do you know what you're asking of me? We are very much aware. The Straw Hats have done too much and gone too far in too little time. We should have allowed Akainu to continue on his way to Water 7 and destroy them all. Now that they've come to the end of paradise, we have no choice left in the matter. We must and we will mobilize whatever forces the Marines can muster to ensure that Dragon's son and his followers do not enter the New World." "You complete maniacs," the zone said quietly. "You know that the Marines stand no chance against Whitebeard unless it's on our terms, and doing something like this won't do anyone any favors. If the Straw Hats lose, one of the four emperors is going to muster all of his forces to avenge them. And if they win, which is not out of the question, their reputation will go through the roof and the old man will still strike back. And both ways, mustering our top brass for something like this is going to leave us low on manpower and high on casualties. There is no good ending for this. The ending in which Dragon's son joins with Whitebeard is worse," the elder voice said firmly. Akiji's report stated that Straw Hat and his first mate alone kept pace with him perfectly throughout the city and then proceeded to stop holding back their strength at the same time that he did. If the rest of the Straw Hats aren't to that level yet, then they will be soon if they're heading for the New World. We cannot afford to add a crew capable of defeating our strongest authorities to the likes of Edward Newgate, especially when they have ties to Dragon. We have worked hard for this balance, and if we have no choice but to allow it to alter, then we must cut our losses." The gaze on the other end of the snail sharpened. "You have your orders, Fleet Admiral Sengoku. This is not up for discussion. Gather whatever forces you can spare. As of now, we move against the Straw Hat pirates. Do everything in your power to ensure that they never reach the New World." And with that, the line disconnected. Sabo wasn't sure what to make of Luffy. On one hand, he was about what he'd expected to find from someone who had led his crew to victory over a marine admiral and caught the attention of both Dragon and Whitebeard. On the other hand, there was another part of him, some obscure aspect of his psyche that he couldn't quite identify, that was clearly expecting something different. Luffy had greeted him enthusiastically. The giant bear hug he'd received had ironically been the only part of their meeting that hadn't surprised him, despite how out of place it seemed for a notorious pirate that had the world government running around like wingless seagulls. But then he had proceeded to bonk Ace for the head with a hockey-coated fist, shouting at the Flame Man for being so reckless twice in a row, and everything he unconsciously seemed to know about his younger brother promptly fell apart before his eyes. Luffy was scolding someone for being reckless. He didn't know why that image was so bizarre, but it was. Something about his straw-hatted brother's demeanor, warm, yet wary, outgoing, yet hardened, seemed to make his unconscious mind scream that there was something wrong here. He simply couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Luffy shouldn't be like this. Deciding that trying to compare this Luffy to the one he didn't remember was an exercise in futility, Sabo let it go for now. He would be sure to grill Ace about it later. As Luffy and his crew prepared to leave to find a coder for their ship, Sabo pushed his thoughts aside and gave his brother one last warning. "Keep your guard up, Luffy," he advised. "We don't know what it is, but there have been signs that the Marines are planning something big." "Yeah, I'll be careful," Luffy promised, still on a high from seeing both his brothers, even as he ignored Ace, muttering something about the fist of love being hereditary under his breath. "It was good to see you guys again." As the Straw Hat captain left with his crew, Cola caught the contemplative look on her superior's face. "What's wrong, Sabo?" she asked curiously. "I might have just remembered something," he replied uncertainly. "Something about Luffy." Asabadi Archipelago was the crossroad at which the various routes of the first half of the Grand Line converged. It was only natural that the most infamous of criminals from each generation of pirates would also cross paths there. In recent months, there had been a rather high number of notorious pirates to reach the archipelago, each wanted for a number of nefarious crimes in the eyes of the world government. This elite group of Paradise veterans was unaffectionately referred to as the 12 Supernovas, 2 of which were currently facing off in the depths of the lawless zone. One was a towering brute of a man with an ever-present grin on his face, who effortlessly wielded a large pillar as a makeshift mace. He was known as Mad Monk Urauge, Supernova captain of the fallen monk pirates, with a bounty of 108 million. His opponent was a shorter man with a wild mane of blonde hair and a mask that covered his entire face, who was wielding a pair of spinning scythe blades, one on each arm. He was another Supernova, the first mate of the Kid Pirates, with a bounty of 162 million. As the two clashed again and again, a crowd warily gathered around to watch, at least until the fight was broken up by yet another member of the Supernovas. Red Flag X Drake, a former Marine Rear Admiral turned pirate captain with a bounty of 222 million, fearlessly jumped in between the two with a weapon in each hand to block their strikes. "There will be plenty of time to wreak havoc later," Drake intoned. "Leave the hostilities for the new world." The two wordlessly agreed to a ceasefire, seeing as their disagreement has been trivial to begin with. As X-Drake walked away, one of the bystanders addressed him from the barrel he was sitting on. "Damn, and it was just getting good," the onlooker commented. It didn't take Drake long to identify him as the Surgeon of Death Trafalgar Law, Supernova captain of the Heart Pirates, with a bounty of 200 million. "If your intent was to end the hostilities, you might have some work ahead of you," Red Flagger, Law said with a calm smirk. He gestured for Drake to look over his shoulder, and the former Marine officer obliged. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of Eustace Kidd walking towards them. Knowing Captain Kidd's penchant for conflict, he and Urauge both readied themselves for a confrontation with both captain and first mate. Surprisingly though, Kidd ignored them both. "Filler, gather the rest of the crew, vacation's over. We have bigger fish to fry," Kidd said with a grin stretched across his face that wasn't entirely sane. Although Drake was slightly annoyed by that comment, he allowed Kidd to collect his crewmate and leave without protest. "I think Captain Kidd would pass up the opportunity to scope out his competition," Urauge remarked. "I wonder who this bigger fish could be." "You mean you haven't heard?" Law asked as Drake sheathed both his weapons. A certain gleam had entered the Surgeon of Death's eyes, one which was hard to interpret. "It seems the 500 million man himself has graced us with his presence." As Drake walked away, a bead of sweat rolled down Urauge's face, despite the wide grin that never left it. "So he's here, is he?" Urauge asked no one in particular as he watched Kidd's back fade into the distance. "Eustace, do you have a death wish?" As the Straw Hat Pirates were on their way to meet their ship coder, being led by Hachi, Luffy and Zoro were communicating via observation hockey. "Zoro, it feels like Rayleigh is already there," Luffy conveyed to his first mate. "Well, that's different. Are we going to tell him about the time travel?" "I think so, he can be trusted. Also, he might know more about it, come to think of it." The two were soon broken out of their thoughts by Usopp's voice. "Have you guys noticed that everyone is giving us a wide berth?" the sniper asked, referring to the fact that everyone seemed to be clearing a path for them. "It's probably because of Luffy and Zoro. Even for the end of the first half, their bounties are extremely high." Topper looked amazed. "Are they really that scared of them?" "It's only natural," Robin commented. "They defeated a Marine admiral together." While the rest of the crew silently conceded the point, Brook's jaw visibly unhinged. "A Marine admiral?" Luffy-san and Zoro-san did. "When was this?" "Oh, that's right. This would be the first you've heard of it, huh?" Frankie realized. "It was after they arrived on Water 7, before they recruited me again." "I see," Brook stuttered. "Why else did you think they had such high bounties at this stage?" Sanji asked the skeleton. Brook coughed in embarrassment. "Well, it's been 50 years since I've sailed the seas. I might have assumed it was due to inflation." The rest of the crew laughed at this, and Brook's face actually reddened despite his utter lack of flesh. "Nayu, I'm a bit worried that we're attracting too much attention, actually," Hachi commented. "But at least we're in the lawless zone." "Don't worry so much, Hachin," Kami said with a beaming smile. "Luffy-chin and everyone are really strong. Besides, we're here anyway." Apig, Kami's starfish friend, stared at the sign in disbelief. "Shaki's rip-off bar. Where in the 8 seas are you taking us, Hachi?" "Nayu, we're not here for drinks," the octopus fisherman pointed out. "We just need to find Ray-san. He'll coat their ship for them." From the moment the door opened, a pairs of brown eyes fell upon their group, belonging to a seemingly young woman with short black hair. The woman's eyes soon settled on Hachi. Hachi. It's been a long time, hasn't it? It's good to see you again, she greeted. And it seems you've brought along some interesting friends. The woman waved happily at the Straw Hats. You can call me Shaki. I'm an old friend of Hachi's. As the crew grew acquainted with the friendly woman, Chopper stared at her in apprehension. She seems so nice. Is she not going to rip us off after all? He asked innocently. Shaki's eyes landed on him, causing him to jump, realizing he'd spoken out loud. Well, aren't you adorable? She said with a smile. Don't worry, I won't scam any of Hachi's friends. Besides, I'm actually a big fan of your crew. Chopper's eyes widened. Really? Of course. Cheering on rookie's one of my favorite pastimes. Your captain and first mate have the highest bounties of all the 12 supernovas and they achieved them without killing civilians like the Kid Pirates. The Straw Hats are also the only crew to have 3 supernova members. 12 supernovas? Nami asked curiously. What are those? Shaki lit a cigarette as she explained. They're well known throughout the entire first half of the Grand Line and their infamy even reaches some parts of the New World. The 12 supernovas are the only rookie pirates of the current generation to reach Sabati Archipelago with bounties of over 100 million. There are actually only 9 crews total, but as I said, some have more than one of these members in their ranks. There's Mad Monkey Rouge with a bounty of 108 million, Capone Gang Beej with a bounty of 138 million, the Glutton Jewelry Bonnie with a bounty of 140 million, Blackleg Sanji with a bounty of 155 million, Massacre Soldier Killer with a bounty of 160 million. Roaring Sea Scratchman Apu with a bounty of 198 million, Surgeon of Death Trafalgar Law with a bounty of 200 million, Red Flag X Drake with a bounty of 222 million, the Magician Basil Hawkins with a bounty of 249 million, Eustace Captain Kidd with a bounty of 315 million. Her speculative eyes shot to Luffy and Zoro. And then there's Demon Wind Zoro, 360 million, and Straw Hat Luffy, 525 million. Nami sighed in a mix of exasperation and fondness. Well, that really puts things into perspective. It does, doesn't it? Shaki mused. The world we live in is one of precedents and those precedents act as limits. So when those limits are broken, it's unprecedented and that leaves people like the world government who rely on those limits, scrambling for order. She grinned. But as for me, I'm just here to enjoy the show. Which is why I'll be rooting for you guys. Zoro smirked. We'll try not to disappoint you. While they'd been talking, Hachi's eyes had settled on a seemingly unremarkable old man taking shots at the counter. Nayu, Ray-san. I didn't think you'd actually be here already, the fishman admitted, sounding amazed. This brought the rest of the crew's attention towards the old man, who turned around in his barstool to face them. So, this is the crew I've been hearing so much about lately. Your auras are certainly more impressive than I'd expected. His eyes landed on Luffy and Zoro. Especially you two. I've been waiting to meet you, Monkey D. Luffy. So who's the old man? Usopp asked. I'm getting a Baddest Legend vibe from him. Sanji, on the other hand, was sweating, having realized from his aura that this wasn't just some old man. You're surprisingly observant, Shaki commented. Ray-san was an infamous pirate back in the day. That's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? Luffy asked with a grin. Right hand of the Pirate King. Upon hearing that, most of the crew were shocked into silence, with the exceptions of Zoro, who already knew, Robin, who accepted the information calmly, and Nami, who started yelling. Come on. Not again. The navigator complained. Tell us these things sooner, idiot captain. Rayleigh smirked. You're well informed. But I'm retired now. I prefer to go by Ray-san the shipcoder. Still, Shanks once told me about his bet on the new era and you seem more than capable. Why do you aspire to rule the sea, Monkey D. Luffy? Luffy's grin widened. I don't want to rule anything. I just want to enjoy my freedom. His smile turned solemn. I'd give up ruling the sea in a heartbeat if it meant being able to keep sailing the seas with my crew. After all I already did once. Rayleigh's eyes widened. In the silence that followed, the Straw Hats looked back and forth between the two in apprehension, while Shaki watched with a raised eyebrow and Hachi, Kami, and Papik just looked confused. This was unexpected, Rayleigh admitted after a while of staring Luffy down. I might actually be able to enjoy my retirement after all. He pushed the thought aside. Alright then. Since you're so determined, let me tell you all a story, he said, addressing the rest of the crew more so than Luffy and Zoro. Of my captain and friend, the Pirate King Gold D. Roger. About an hour later, Luffy and company exited the bar, most of them reeling at the information they had just been made privy to. To think the reality of what happened was so different than what history recorded, Robin mused. The situation had hit entirely too close to home for her. But super surprising, Frankie agreed, starting to understand Tom's unwavering respect for the Pirate King. But why didn't you tell us any of that, Luffy? Usopp asked, still excited about the retelling of Roger's ascension and subsequent fall. "It wasn't my story to tell," Luffy said quietly. The group's path was suddenly obstructed as another pirate crew stopped in front of them. At their head was Eustace Kid, who was staring at Luffy with a maniacal gleam in his eyes. "So you finally show your face, Straw Hat Luffy. I was starting to think you'd never show up." Luffy stared at him blankly, having recognized the rival supernova from his dealings with him in the previous timeline. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. Kid chuckled lowly. "Well, since you asked, Straw Hat, what I want is to rule the seas, to become the Pirate King, and until the day I achieve my goal, I won't be outdone by anyone." His body tensed, preparing for a fight. Even someone who was acknowledged by Whitebeard. Zoro smirked. "So in other words, you're just throwing a fit because your bounty is lower," he inferred. Immediately following Zoro's bold statement, the swordsman was attacked by Killer, but effortlessly blocked his spinning scythes with a single katana. "Hasty, aren't you?" Zoro asked, despite the challenge that was clear in his tone. "If you're going to insult Kid, I don't care how high your bounty is," Killer declared before engaging Zoro in a close-range sword fight. Soon, a brawl had ensued between the Straw Hat and Kid pirates, with Zoro facing Killer, Sanji intercepting a man with the likeness of a scarecrow who had tried to assist his first mate, Frankie attacking a tall man with a red trident who had tried to stop Sanji, and Luffy facing off with Captain Kid himself. "Oh dear. That escalated quickly," Robin commented, clutching a duo of lower-level grunts who had tried to run her through. "Yo-ho-ho. My non-existent heart is about to beat out of my empty eye sockets. Yo-ho-ho. Double skull joke." Brook exclaimed as he disappeared behind another pair of foes who didn't realize they'd been cut until they turned around. The man with the trident was dodging Frankie's swipes with little difficulty, but once he went in for the kill, he was shocked to see that his weapon of choice rebounded off of Frankie harmlessly. "That won't work on my super body, Dumbus," Frankie shouted before aiming a coup de vent right at his face. The man clearly wasn't expecting such a manner of attack and was soon launched through a building by the air cannon. "Wire?" one of the lower grunts shouted in concern. Sanji was casually weaving in between the scarecrow lookalike swords, occasionally sending out a kick that was blocked by a cross guard. He was slightly surprised when the man, having made no progress in hitting him, suddenly spewed fire from his mouth in an attempt to roast Sanji alive. He was surprised when instead of being burned, the chef started rapidly spinning, the fire rendered virtually ineffective as it dispersed around him before he erupted in a shroud of his own flames. "Did you think a chef would fear an open flame?" Sanji asked with a smirk before using Zoro to charge forward faster than his opponent could react. The flame-enhanced kick smashed into the Kid pirate's skull, instantly rendering him unconscious. Meanwhile, Zoro grew bored of the low-level sword fight he was partaking in and decided to end it. "You have some skill," he admitted. "But you'll never measure up to me as a swordsman." He accentuated the declaration by effortlessly cleaving through Killer's spinning blades, delivering 2 slashes across his torso. "Are you okay with this?" Luffy asked curiously as he dodged a barrage of metal projectiles, courtesy of Kid's magnetism. "Your crewmates are falling one by one. That just means they'll have to learn from this defeat," Kid shouted, undaunted, as he formed a colossal arm out of all the metal in the vicinity. Luffy smirked. "You'll have to take your own advice soon," he stated. The force of the magnetic repulsion was enough to launch the makeshift arm at supersonic speeds, but Luffy simply imbued his arm with haki and blocked its trajectory, causing it to explode into a shower of metal. Taking advantage of Kid's shock at seeing one of his strongest attacks thwarted so easily, he charged forward and drilled his opponent with a haki-enforced punch, causing him to cough up blood and sink to ground in pain. Luffy walked past him, but stopped once he realized Kid was getting back up. The rival captain glared at him with blood dripping from his mouth. "Bastard, is that the best you've got?" he asked, struggling to his feet. Luffy hummed as he turned to face him. "Well, what do you think?" Kid gritted his teeth as he mentally gauged the level of the adversary before him. As much as he didn't want to admit it to himself, that probably wasn't anywhere near Straw Hat's true strength. That punch had been casual. "Just the tip of the iceberg, huh?" Kid muttered. From his prone position on the ground, Killer struggled to raise his head in order to watch the proceedings. "Captain," the first mate rasped as he fought against his blackening vision. "Will there be more opponents like you once we enter the new world?" Kid asked, staring Luffy straight in the eyes. Luffy grinned as he gave the question some thought. "How should I know?" he asked. A misleading answer, but not a lie. Kid was sweating. Perhaps it had been his semi-consciousness speaking, but for a moment he'd completely forgotten that he'd been speaking to a fellow rookie. "Well damn," he muttered, before forming a coat of metal around his arm and charging at Luffy. Even in his barely lucid state, he knew he was hopelessly, hilariously outmatched. And he didn't give a single flying fuck. Luffy dodged a punch and responded with a ruthless uppercut to the face that lifted Kid off the ground before he once again landed with a dull thud. As Kid's consciousness began to fade, he could just make out the next words that came out of Luffy's mouth. "The level of strength I just showed you, you'll be lucky if it's all you have to deal with in the new world." With those words lighting a flame of determination in his soul, Kid drifted blissfully into unconsciousness. Looking around and seeing that the rest of his crew had dealt with their attackers without too much trouble, Luffy called everyone together and they proceeded to leave, heedless of the crowd that had gathered to watch the one-sided grudge match in awe. Seeing as the Straw Hats had successfully attained a ship coder, they were basically free to enjoy their remaining time on the archipelago, something which Frankie soon pointed out. "So, Straw Hat, any plans for the next 3 days, or are we just going to be sightseeing here?" the cyborg asked curiously. I wanna stop by the Sabati Park, it was fun the first time," Luffy grinned. "But first, I'm planning on making a pirate alliance." "Ah, that sounds wait, what? Why are you even surprised?" Zoro asked everyone. It was a little exasperating that even Robin looked surprised. "Why are we? How were we supposed to know?" Frankie sputtered. "Zoro, go find Trafalgar," Luffy interrupted casually. "And Sanji, go find Bonnie. We'll meet back at the Sunny." Zoro nodded, focused for a minute with his eyes closed, and then began heading in a specific direction. "Kinda funny that he can only see where he's going when his eyes are closed," Luffy said under his breath. The rest of the crew laughed, and Zoro shot Luffy a glare that promised pain later before continuing on his way. "Luffy?" Sanji asked once he got his laughter under control. "I didn't know Bonnie in a past life like you did, and there are too many strong auras on these islands for me to count on Haki alone. Where should I look for her?" She's always hungry," Luffy said nonchalantly. "Just follow the complaints about someone eating more than they should be able to. And double check that it's not you first, got it?" Sanji added with a smirk. "Hey, I resemble that," Luffy protested. Trafalgar Law was enjoying a meal with his crew, having wandered through much of the lawless zone already. After his most recent encounter, he could safely say that he had thoroughly scoped out much of his competition. That's not to say he'd been searching for weaknesses or anything to gain an advantage over them. That endeavor could be saved for the new world. He simply liked to judge for himself what he was up against. Thus, he had taken to some sightseeing with purpose. In fact, only one supernova crew had been excluded from his diligent observations by now. The Straw Hat crew was one that he hadn't felt the need to scrutinize. It may have seemed counterintuitive to his crew to leave the biggest fish in paradise pond out of his calculations, but the reason why was actually fairly simple. You don't need a magnifying glass to examine a mountain. You just need one look to know it towers over you. Straw Hat Luffy was an enigma. He didn't think anyone could deny that at this point. But he was an enigma in plain view. He had no doubt that he'd unravel the mystery that was his fellow rookie eventually, but he was in no rush. It was only a matter of time. As the tavern door suddenly creaked open though, Law didn't need to turn his head to know that his day had just gotten better. The immediate silence in the establishment was enough of a sign. Turning to the green-haired swordsman that had just entered the bar, Law inwardly smirked. It seemed fate was telling him to get a move on. "Yo, Trafalgar. My captain sent me to find you," Hirono Zoro said lazily. "Will you meet with him?" Law hummed. "I don't see why not," he replied, before letting the smirk appear across his face. "But only if you can prove it's not a waste of my time." If he'd been trying to get a rise out of the other swordsman, Law would have been disappointed. If anything, there seemed to be a satisfied gleam in his eyes. "That," Zoro replied, radiating bloodlust, "is something you're welcome to find out for yourself." As the patrons at the bar started sweating and the bartender tried and failed to gather his wits enough to tell them to take it outside, Law obliged the challenge and shot out of his seat without a single indicator that he was about to move. Before anyone could so much as blink, the entire tavern was contained inside a blue transparent bubble, and Law's Nadachi was reared towards Zoro's neck. Zoro effortlessly drew Shisui and blocked the sword strike in one smooth motion. That slash was imbued with the powers of the Op no Mi, but he blocked it all the same. "I had figured that you were an accomplished Haki user," Demon Wind, Law stated, though his expression didn't quite match the nonchalance of his tone. "I'm not the only one in my crew," Zoro said, confirming Law's suspicions. "So? Will you meet with him?" Law sheathed his long sword. "I think I'd be a fool not to." Sanji grudgingly admitted to himself that Luffy's suggested method of finding their potential alliance member was surprisingly effective. He didn't even had to stop to ask anyone where she was, since she was quite famous. Jewelry Bonnie's insane appetite was apparently a hot topic of conversation, and he just had to follow the gossip. He soon arrived at a local restaurant with high penchant for noise. As soon as he walked in, several eyes fell on him, causing murmurings to break out, but he ignored them. His eyes soon settled on the pink-haired woman in the middle of the establishment, piling plates on top of each other with every passing second. That's quite the appreciation for food. A woman after my heart. But haven't I seen her before? He soon recognized her. She'd been with Ace when they'd met up with him upon arriving on Sabati, but had merely offered Luffy a searching look and a nod before slipping away into the crowd. "Hey, you." Bonnie shouted with her mouth full, snapping Sanji out of his thoughts. "Are you just gonna stare forever, bastard? You're a member of the Straw Hats, aren't you? The hell do you want?" Sanji bowed. "Greetings, mademoiselle. My name is Sanji. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I've come with an offer to sate your appetite." As her crewmate started snickering, Bonnie scowled, unamused. "Flirting with the rival supernova? Seriously? I know that's not why you came, so skip the innuendos and get on with it, asshole." Sanji sighed wistfully. "Ah, but I had to try. Very well then, down to business. My captain wants to meet with you." "Hell no," Bonnie said bluntly. "I've seen enough of Straw Hat's ugly mug for one day. Besides, I haven't finished my meal." Sanji sympathized with her plight. "Of course. I'll give you a moment to finish. Food shouldn't be wasted, after all. But when you're done, can I at least invite you to dine with my crew? I'm quite the accomplished chef, you know. I'd be more than willing to prepare a full-course meal for you should you accompany us." That caught Bonnie's interest. Well, pizza was pizza, and therefore good by default. Most of the chefs in the lawless zone were admittedly quite mediocre. Sanji inwardly smirked at her visible interest, knowing he had her attention. Bonnie sighed as if she knew she was being manipulated, but couldn't quite bring herself to care. "Fine. I'll meet with him. But the food better be the best I've ever had." But of course. The Straw Hat, Heart and Bonnie pirates all converged at the Thousand Sunny. Although there was a certain degree of tension in the air that was expected of a meeting between rival crews, Luffy was all smiles. "Hey guys." He shouted, addressing not just Zoro and Sanji, but also Law and Bonnie with a surprising amount of familiarity. "Straw Hatter," Law said, ignoring the informality. "I heard you made quick work of Kid and his lot. Making waves already?" Bonnie raised an eyebrow, having not heard that bit of news yet, while Luffy pouted. "That wasn't my fault," Luffy protested. "He just attacked me." He soon recovered though and invited everyone into the dining room. "Sanji. Food. I'm already on it, shithead." The entire meal was ready in less than 10 minutes, much to the shock of the Heart and Bonnie pirates. No one commented on the otherworldly culinary feat, though. The Bonnie pirates looked ecstatic. As the three crews dug into the food in a manner only befitting pirates, Law spoke up. "Not that I'm gonna turn down free dinner, Straw Hatter, but exactly why did you call us here?" "I'm glad you asked, Trafalgar." "Trafalgar? You're all here because I want to form an alliance." That threw them for a loop. A pirate alliance, already? They hadn't even entered the New World yet. "I have a plan," Luffy continued. "To take down Kaido and Big Mom." Shocked silence met his proclamation. Almost every set of eyes in the room widened, many of which were those of his own crew members. After a while, the silence was broken. "You're aiming high," Law said with a smirk, "gunning for the Yonko before you even enter the New World." Bonnie also seemed interested by the proposal, if skeptical. "Is there a reason why you chose those two in particular?" she asked. "Well, I happen to be on friendly terms with the other two." They both looked stunned at that. "Your connection with Whitebeard is common knowledge," Law allowed. "But red-haired Shanks too." "My childhood hero," Luffy said with a shrug. "But there's another reason why I chose those two, actually. Do you two know about the road poneglyphs?" Both of them shook their heads. Luffy turned to his archaeologist. "Mind explaining, Robin?" Though she was still caught off guard, Robin recovered quickly. "There are 4 total. Each has a location inscribed, and where the 4 locations intersect, the hidden island of Raftel can be found." As Law and Bonnie gave their undivided attention, Zoro smirked. Luffy had them, hook, line, and sinker. "Would I be right in guessing that Kaido and Big Mom both hold possession of one of these road poneglyphs?" Law asked. "Spot on. So here's my offer. When we take down Kaido and Big Mom, I'll let you guys know where Raftel is. And from there on it'll be a race." Bonnie smirked at his challenging tone. "A race, huh? And now that you've kindly given us this information, why can't we just go ahead and use it for ourselves?" Of course, she already had no intention of doing that. She wasn't that ungrateful, and she knew someone like Straw Hat would be a huge help in taking those two Yonko down. But she still wanted to hear his answer. Surprisingly though, it was Law who spoke up. "Because the poneglyphs are written in the ancient language of the Void Century," he reminded her with a narrow-eyed smile. "And that makes Nico Robin here the only person in the world who can read them." The silence descended once more as both rival crews stared at Robin in a mix of shock and awe. Robin hummed in thought before she gave Law a smug smile and nodded. Yes, I'd say that's accurate. So, Luffy said. You guys interested yet? Bastard, you know full well we can't say no after that, Bonnie said with grudging respect. Fine. I'm in. As am I, Law stated. I happen to have my sight set on Kaido anyway. But I have to ask, why did you choose us? Because of all the other crews aiming for the top, I trust you guys the most not to betray me, Luffy answered. That's a lot of faith you have in someone you just met, Law pointed out with a menacing smile. Luffy just smirked. Call it a hunch. Law leaned back in his seat and gave him an accepting nod. It's settled then, Luffy said. One of the captains in this room will become the Pirate King. It was amazing how in sync everyone in the room was at that moment as they all raised their glasses and gave their approval as the meal continued. Hey Trafalgar. Bonnie shouted. You've got to try these sandwiches. They're amazing. Law briefly considered showing his fellow Supernova why it wasn't a good idea to indulge Straw Hat's whimsical nickname. But he decided that it was bad form to attack a member of their alliance just moments after said alliance had been formed. No thanks. I don't like bread. En route from Marine headquarters to Sabati Archipelago were 10 battleships, sailing in tight formation. Aboard the lead one, a tall, lazy-eyed man with yellow clothing and red-tinted sunglasses stared down at the baby transponder snail on his wrist. The man was Marine Admiral Kizaru, and behind him stood the royal warlords Boa Hancock and Bartholomew Kuma. Admiral, we'll reach Sabati in a few minutes, came the voice of Vice Admiral Onagumo from the transponder snail. Thanks Vice Admiral. I have to say, the Elder Stars have put us in a tough position. But I suppose we'll have no choice but to wipe out the Straw Hats. Maverick sat atop a building on Sabati Archipelago, staring out in the direction of the ocean. As he squinted his eyes, a nervous grin appeared on his face. Again, huh? Well damn. Yo, Law. Try this pizza. It's the best I've ever had, I'm serious. Woman, how many times must I repeat myself? I don't like bread. Who the hell doesn't like bread? Bonnie asked, staring at the Heart Captain dubiously. Maybe he likes it gluten-free. Usopp chimed in. The room was rendered silent as every face paused to stare at the sniper. To Usopp's credit, he looked entirely unrepentant. Usopp, that was terrible, Nami said. Never do it again. He crossed his arms defiantly and huffed. You can't handle my puns. Yo-ho-ho. It was no skull joke, but I liked it. Meanwhile, Luffy had paused in his own ravenous rampage and was staring out the window, expression pensive. Yo, Luffy. What's wrong? Sanji asked. It's not like you to stop before your 50th plate. Luffy's brow furrowed. Maverick is flaring his aura, he said. It almost feels like he's sending us a signal, but I can't sense anything out of the ordinary on the archipelago. Zoro hummed. Now that you mention it, I feel it too. Didn't Maverick have a devil fruit that lets him see really far away? Maybe the threat isn't on Sabati to begin with. Luffy closed his eyes, focusing his observation haki out to the sea. By now he had drawn the attention of everyone in the room and all 3 crews listened curiously. Suddenly, Luffy's eyes snapped open and he began to sweat. Oh, shit, the rubber man mumbled. Alright, anything that has Luffy sweating is Emperor grade levels of danger, Sanji said, getting to his feet. What are your orders, Captain? Sunny, Luffy called. The girl appeared in the room immediately, leaving the 2 outsider captains utterly confused as the other 9 stared at thin air, the skeleton straining his eye sockets. We're going ashore. As soon as we're offboard, go around to the other coast. Sunny looked like she wanted to argue. We'll call you if we need you, but the longer our enemies don't know that our ship can fight on her own, the better, Zoro said. Sunny sighed. Aye, she conceded. What? Law and Bonnie said together. Explanations later, evacuations now, Usopp said, already on his way outside. As they exited the ship, Bonnie demanded an explanation. As expected, Luffy was blunt. An elite army from Marineford is heading our way. Admirals, vice admirals, warlords, you name it, he said nervously. This is a hell of a way to kick off our alliance, Straw Hatter, Law deadpanned. You think I planned for these things? On second thought, I probably should. The 3 pirate crews were uncharacteristically silent as they fell back to the lawless zone. As Ace and Sabo met up with the alliance, Maverick having alerted them both, Sabo asked the obvious question. Luffy, do you have a plan? This isn't going to be like the time with Akiji, it's going to take more than just you and your first mate. I know, and I have a feeling it's going to be touch and go for a while, Luffy replied. For now, just fall back and suppress your auras. Ace gave him a skeptical look and Luffy was quick to reassure him. It's our best bet. The Marines don't even know you 2 are here, so we should keep the element of surprise. I actually do have a plan this time and the 2 of you will know when to intervene. Besides, backup will be on its way soon. Luffy then turned to Law. Law, I need you to teleport everyone else to a safe distance. wait for an opportunity to step in. Law nodded in compliance, making a mental note for later to ask how Straw Hat knew about his devil fruit before holding up one hand. A blue bubble appeared around the group and soon the Heart Pirates, Bunny Pirates, and every member of the Straw Hat Pirates other than Luffy and Zoro were teleported away. Ace and Sabo soon followed suit, suppressing their auras and making their way deep into the lawless zone. Luffy and Zoro didn't have to wait long before they felt the Marine Admiral's aura coming in fast. Too fast. Zoro quickly reacted to the threat, leaping into the air and using two swords to deflect the oncoming beam into the sky. The resulting explosion was visible from the entire archipelago, lighting up Sabati with all the intensity of a second sun. As Zoro landed, Admiral Kizaru materialized in front of the two combatants. "Ooh. It seems that I'm facing quite the adept swordsman here," he droned mockingly. "You've gathered some useful allies, Monkey D. Luffy. Though not all of them are as forthcoming as your first mate." He smirked. "Did you really think you could hide a Yonko commander and revolutionary from me?" He took aim at Ace and Sabo, despite both of them being out of sight. "My observation hockey isn't exactly subpar." Luffy quickly appeared in front of him before he could fire, aiming a red hawk at his face and forcing him to block. "Neither is mine," Luffy growled. Kizaru merely pointing a finger at Luffy, preparing to blast him at point-blank range, but was forced to dodge a lion's elegy from Zoro. Kizaru proceeded to barrage them with lasers, prompting Zoro to start deflecting and Luffy to start dodging. Luffy appeared in front of Kizaru again, aiming an elephant gun at him, but Kizaru effortlessly warped behind him, aiming a laser at his head. According to Kuzin's intel, with that strength technique of his activated, he should be slower to dodge. He was proven wrong when he realized the elephant gun was just a feint and that Luffy had already begun dodging before Kizaru could take aim. As Luffy appeared to his right with a hawk gatling at the ready, Kizaru's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm moving faster than him, I'm not broadcasting my intentions, and yet." As the Straw Hat captain once again dodged his lasers without even looking, he realized what was happening. That's future side observation. Rookies these days sure are scary. Opting to try a different approach, Kizaru decided to use an attack that would be harder to dodge. He appeared in the sky above Sabati, readying another area of effect blast. In his haste, he was blindsided by Zoro and forced to abandon that maneuver when he was hit dead on by a 1080 caliber Phoenix and torn to shreds. "Aren't you forgetting someone?" the swordsman asked. Kizaru once again reformed on the ground without a scratch on him, aiming a lightspeed kick at Zoro, which the latter attempted to block with all three obsidian swords. The kick connected, only to be stopped when Luffy helped block it, his arms also clad in armament hardening. Black lightning danced around the pirate captain's frame and Kizaru's eyes widened. Luffy spread his arms out wide, his conqueror's haki working in conjunction with Zoro's armament to send Kizaru hurtling away. Kizaru gritted his teeth as he was sent hurtling away. Zoro quickly pressed the advantage, calling upon a fraction of Asura's power and aiming a flying slash at the admiral. 3000 caliber Nightwing Gale. The wind blade had a dark purple tinge. Kizaru once again warped away to avoid the worst of it, but as he reformed, this time a small pool of blood could be seen dripping down his leg. "First blood," Zoro grunted, panting heavily along with Luffy. "Oh, dear, this doesn't look good for me," Kizaru said. "You know, if you two step up your game, you might actually be able to take me out before my backup arrives." Luffy and Zoro exchanged a brief look before nodding at each other and turning back to their opponent. "Make us," they shouted as one. Kizaru inwardly sighed. He'd been hoping to bait them into going all out and exhausting themselves, but it seemed they weren't that stupid. Luffy and Zoro both charged forward, ready to push their advantage, but were intercepted when a large bear-like figure appeared in front of their paths. Bartholomew Kuma stared them down, Ursa shock ready in his palms. They both fell back to dodge the explosion, giving Kizaru a small reprieve. "Nice of you to come, Bartholomew Kuma." Kizaru's sarcasm wasn't at all subtle, but then again, it never was. "It's your own fault for warping in ahead of us, Admiral," the cyborg replied. But you could have done the same thing, you know." Kizaru replied. Kuma ignored him. "Fine, whatever. I just need you to separate Hirano from his captain, anyway. Can do that?" Kuma once again didn't answer, but wordlessly engaged. As Luffy and Zoro charged in again, Kuma tried to catch Zoro with his paw fruit and remove him from the battlefield, but Zoro effortlessly dodged his every swipe. As Kuma continued his assault, however, the swordsman noticed he was being directed away from Luffy and Kizaru. Before he could spare his captain a glance, he received a mental nod of reassurance from him and thus allowed himself to be led away. Kizaru lazily turned his gaze between the warlord-engaged swordsman and his opponent, his carefree expression not wavering in the slightest. "Well, I guess it's just the two of us now." Luffy, for his part, pursed his lips and let out a long-winded hum. "Oh, my, it seems like I've fallen right into your trap. How scary," he drawled mockingly. For a long moment, the admiral didn't react. "Is that really what I sound like?" he asked beseechingly. Further into the lawless zone, Sanji and Usopp were watching the fight from afar using observation haki, narrating its events to the rest of the alliance. "They've been separated," Usopp exclaimed. "Isn't that really bad?" "They don't feel very nervous about it from their auras," Sanji replied. "Do you think it could be part of their plan?" "Either way, are we really just supposed to sit here and find an opening?" Frankie asked, frustrated. "It's Captain's orders, so it can't be helped," Sanji said with a scowl. Clearly, he had a problem with this too. Suddenly, the chef let out a loud string of curses. "Sanji-kun. What's going on?" Nami asked worriedly. Beads of sweat dripped down Sanji's face as he uttered a single word. CP9. At the coast of Sabati Archipelago, several figures had just arrived ahead of their respective battleships, leaping through the air without a foothold. "Lucci-san," Vice Admiral Onagumo spoke up. "Can you and your fellow agents help me deal with the weaker Straw Hat members? Admiral Kizaru won't need any help against Straw Hat Luffy." Despite technically being his superior, the high-ranking Marine had a good amount of respect for Rob Lucci's dark justice. Lucci wordlessly signaled to the rest of CP9, and Kaku, Jabra, Blueno, Kumadori, Fukaru, and Khalifa all followed behind the two to engage the Straw Hats. Meanwhile, Ace and Sabo both had their eyes closed, keeping tabs on all of their allies from afar. "This is it," Ace said. "We'll need to get involved now that there's a Vice Admiral here." "You're right," Sabo admitted. "Other than Luffy, Zoro, and maybe Maverick, we're the only ones here who can deal with him." Suddenly, numerous explosions could be heard throughout Sabati. "Shit. They're attacking the lawless zone," Ace realized. "It's a focused buster call." He turned toward Sabo. "I need to take care of the battleships before Sabati goes up in ashes. You need to go help Luffy's crew." Sabo nodded and the two split up without another word. Onagumo was nearing the location of the Straw Hat crew and judging from their panicked auras, they knew who was coming. So they have someone else who can use haki. Interesting. He was interrupted from his musing when another, more powerful aura roared to life behind him. He had no time to react before an armament-hardened staff caught the side of his face, sending him crashing headfirst into one of the mangroves. "I hope I'm not interrupting something," Sabo said innocently as he touched down next to the downed Marine. "Revolutionary." The Vice Admiral spat in disgust, and the fight was on. Sentomaru eyed the archipelago under siege with a critical eye. Their battleships had finally arrived and it felt like a long time coming, what with Uncle Kizaru getting impatient earlier. But now they'd be free to test out Vegapink's prototypes at last. That plan was soon thwarted when their battleships began going up in flames one by one. A quick scan with his observation haki alerted him to the threat. "Fire Fist!" he shouted in fury. He quickly leapt off of his battleship, axe reared to cleave the hovering Loja user in two. Ace ceased his assault on the battleships to throw his trademark move at Sentomaru, who was forced to abort his attack and disperse the flames with his haki-imbued weapon. The two landed on the coast of Sabati, Sentomaru seething all the while. The damage had been done. 5 of their battleships had been destroyed, and with them, half of their human weapons. He quickly engaged Fire Fist, swinging his battleaxe in a wide arc. Ace, for his part, just stood there, allowing himself to be bisected by the blade. His haki easily nullified Sentomaru's, and he was able to reform without much trouble. As Ace clad his arm in armament hardening and reared it back, the limb encasing itself in a searing flame as he aimed his fist straight at his opponent's heart, Sentomaru had never been so certain of an enemy's capability to kill him. He was saved from that fate as Vice Admirals Bastille, Strawberry, Stainless, and Dalmatian swiftly surrounded Fire Fist, all with haki-imbued steel at the ready. Ace pulled his fist back and thrust both arms out, surrounding himself in an explosion of flame that forced all of them back. Sentomaru leapt backward, sweating heavily. "Go ahead of us," Bastille shouted as the 4 Marines got into formation around Ace. "There should still be some human weapons that can fight. Take them and eliminate the Straw Hats." Ace's eyes narrowed dangerously. As he exploded into a bombardment of fireworks, Sentomaru shouted an order to the remaining pacifistas. The 5 remaining cyborgs answered his call, following him onto Sabati while Ace was preoccupied. No one noticed a certain pirate empress also sneaking into the lawless zone. Sanji was once again facing the familiar sensation of having to push his body to the limit of its physical capability. The fact that he'd been facing the exact same foe the last time this had happened did not escape his notice, but he didn't have the luxury of entertaining that line of thought right now. Lucci was already in his own form. The agent clearly held a grudge after having been forced to retreat the last time. As Sanji blocked a particularly brutal kick with his fire-encased leg, he heard several shouts of distress from the rest of the crew, who were all occupied with the rest of the government assassins. He gritted his teeth and willed himself not to lose focus. As he clashed with the Rakishiki user again, Bonnie tried to get behind the leopard man and use her powers on him, but Lucci easily saw her coming and swatted her way, causing Sanji's blood to boil. Every time the other supernova would try to pin him down long enough to use her devil fruit, she would be thwarted. This bastard was just too fast. Even with his observation haki, he had trouble keeping up, just like last time. Broom, Law muttered as his translucent blue sphere formed around him again. He was facing off against both Kaku and Jabra and had quite a few bruises to show for it. He had managed to avoid any lethal blows by using shambles on himself, but against two opponents who were faster than he was, he couldn't create an opening to cut either of them up and put them out of the fight. That wasn't to say he hadn't landed any hits himself, but his normal sword slashes weren't enough to pierce their defense, and they were cautious enough not to charge at him recklessly when he had his room up. To top it off, they both had zoned devil fruits, which augmented their physical abilities greatly. "Great," he muttered. "I knew Sabati had a theme park, but not a circus." "Tell me about it." One of his opponents, the Wolfman, agreed. "I thought Lucci was the only copycat around here, but now fucking Kaku gets his own type devil fruit too, and a giraffe, of all ridiculous things. What was the chief thinking after they failed in Water 7? Will you focus?" Kaku asked calmly. "We have a job to do. And for the record, giraffes are a lot cooler than wolves." "My ass, you bastard. Your long neck has nothing on my long. Does it look like I give a shit about either of your idiotic powers?" Law drawled. "It's not like either can compare to mine." "What? Now this fool too," Jabber shouted. "Your stupid bubbles can't even compare to fucking giraffes, much less wolves." The agent charged forward, forgoing caution in his enraged state. "Rankyaku," the Wolfman shouted. Law smirked. "Shambles." He quickly switched places with Kaku, causing the giraffe man's eyes to widen as he was hit dead on by Jabber's attack. "Ah!" The wind blade had pierced his hastily executed Tekai, and blood now seeped from the resulting wound across his torso. His usual patience now being tested, he glared at Jabber. "Will you watch it? You charge in without thinking, and this is what happens." "What? Don't blame me. It's your fault for getting in the way." As the two argued, Law saw his chance. He didn't know why these two fought so horribly as a pair, but he wasn't complaining. Creating another room, he swung his sword at Jabra, effortlessly bisecting him from shoulder to waist. The wound didn't bleed or even hurt, but it would help immobilize him, and from his alarmed shout, he knew it too. Before Law could cut him down to smaller chunks, Kaku charged in with a Soru, and Law was forced to block the Rankyaku with his longsword, deflecting it to the side with great effort. He teleported out of the way again before the next kick could cut him in half. "One down, one to go," he muttered. "Strong right." Frankie's punch connected with Blueno's face, causing him to groan. The latter nevertheless delivered a blow to Frankie's skull, causing the cyborg to groan in turn. The two had been fighting evenly for a while now. Blueno's Shigen and Rankyaku had proved largely ineffective against Frankie's steel body, and the two had resorted a contest of strength in which neither had the edge. Blueno finally decided to use his devil fruit, opening an air door and appearing behind Frankie. To his surprise, the cyborg spun around and delivered a haymaker to his face without hesitation, breaking his nose in the process. "What? He couldn't have known where I would appear." Was it his immediate instinct to guard his blind spot? Before he could ponder this more, Frankie exploited the opening and aimed his strongest move at the assassin. Max Cola power. Coup event. The air cannon blasted against the front of his body, sending him careening backwards, bouncing off of the ground several times before he was embedded in one of the mangrove trees. Frankie's hair sagged a bit. "That's just super. I'm almost out of fuel." As Blueno forcefully pulled himself out of the tree, gasping for breath, the cyborg grimaced. "And that bastard still kicking, to top it off. Hakite. Cross." Chopper shouted an arm point as his hooves impacted with Kumidori's chest. The eccentric agent gasped in pain, but brushed it aside and readied his staff to punch a hole in the zone user. Trying to flare. 30 hands gripped his arms, legs, neck and torso, stopping him in his tracks. "Yoyoi. This won't hold me." With some effort, he managed to break out of the hold, the shock-jarring Robin, who winced, but it allowed Chopper time to shift forms and jump out of range. Arrow-notch strike. Broke appeared behind Fukaru, drawing blood, but the wound wasn't very deep. Although he was faster than his opponent, his attacks couldn't seem to penetrate very far into his defense. At least not enough to deal more than trivial wounds. He was a speed-type swordsman, after all. Yo-ho-ho. Any ideas, Usopp-san? I must admit I'm not making much progress. "I do have one," Usopp shouted as he barraged the round-faced agent with Firebird stars, which he either dodged or brushed off. "But I really hope I won't have to use it." Meanwhile, Nami was once again facing off against Khalifa. Although she was faring better this time, she knew she wouldn't be able to gain the edge in this fight unless she was able to slip into Mirage tempo. Suddenly, she heard a desperate shout. "Everyone, get out of here. This place is about to become a war zone." It was Sanji, and he shouted even more distressed than before, if that was possible. It was soon revealed why, as more enemies charged onto the battlefield. Sentomaru and his small legion of pacifistas arrived to top the scales, with the human weapons all taking aim at the Straw Hats. Sanji gave a cry of warning before he was battered by a devastating kick from Lucci for losing his focus. Salvation appeared in the form of Maverick, who used a combination of Zoro and Geppu to appear in between the pacifistas. Rebel Storm. He placed one arm on the ground and spun, sweeping his legs out in a widespread Rankyaku that instantly cleaved through 3 of the cyborgs. Sparks flew off of them as they all split in half, fell to the ground, and shut down. With no intention of allowing the final 2 to meet the same fate, Sentomaru attacked. Maverick dodging the battle axe as it impacted harshly with the ground, spinning around and aimed another Rankyaku at his opponent's face, but Sentomaru brought his axe back up and cut through it with a grunt. The 2 remaining human weapons resumed their assault, forcing Robin and Brook to break away from their respective fights to try to ward them off. They had little success, as the durable cyborgs brushed off their techniques and swatted them both aside, slamming both Straw Hats into the ground. Then they began charging up beams in both their mouths and hands, ready to unleash them on the preoccupied Straw Hat pirates. Law slipped away from his fight and hastily teleported the Straw Hats out of the way of the blasts, but almost got his head taken off by Kaku in the process and was forced to refocus on his fight even as the 2 cyborgs took aim again. "Shit. No." Sanji shouted. At that moment, an unfamiliar voice sounded out across the battlefield, causing the human weapons to cut off their attacks in order to scan for the new threat. "Come on, let's go everybody, oh we share the music. Come on, let's go baby, baby, oh we share the one dream." Sanji's eyes widened as he felt the new auras approaching. "Come on, let's go everybody, oh we share the good times." "Who is that?" Nami shouted, desperately hoping it was an ally this time. "Come on, let's go baby, baby, oh we share the one world." Scratch. Both pacifistas suddenly went up in flames and stumbled backwards. Though the move didn't seem to do that much damage, it had been effective to an extent. Both of their ears were now bleeding and they had burn marks all over their cybernetic bodies from the strange attack. Scratchman Apu walked leisurely onto the battlefield, followed closely by X-Drake and Eustace Kid. "Hey Blackleg." Kid shouted. "Don't think this changes anything. I'm still gunning for your captain when the time comes. But this is a matter of principle." "I might just have to agree," X-Drake said. "The entitlement of the world government is still as baffling as ever." Yo. Do these government dogs seriously think they can just walk into our turf and interrupt our celebrations right when we're gearing up to enter the second half? Apu asked. "Just this once, we'll show them why we're called supernovas. After that, don't expect any help from us in the new world." X-Drake was the first to charge in, swinging his axe and sword at one of the pacifistas and sending it flying. Apu followed suit, sending a barrage of sound waves at the same target, damaging it further. Eustace Kid merely stuck a hand out and the other one was stopped in its tracks. "You shitstones are made of metal, aren't you?" he asked with a savage grin. "This isn't going to be fun for you." Law was panting heavily. Jabber had managed to put himself back together while he'd been occupied with Kaku and he was back to square one. Seeing an opportunity, he called out to Drake. "Red Flagger. Switch with me. My powers are better suited to fight that hunk of metal." Drake, seeing that his physical attacks weren't doing much damage to Vegapink's creation, complied easily enough. "As if we'd let you." Jabber shouted, aiming a Shigan at Law's throat. But it was too late, the surgeon teleported again and in his place stood Drake, who blocked the strike with his sword. Leaving Law, Kid, and Apu to deal with the pacifistas. Luffy was covered in bruises and burns from head to toe. Although none of them were serious, he hadn't landed a single hit since Zoro had left and he knew he wouldn't last too much longer like this. Kizaru was far too strong to be fighting on his own, much less holding back. Just as he was preparing to enter Gear 4, he sensed a familiar aura approaching. Kizaru must have sensed it too, because his eyes snapped to the approaching figure in surprise. "This is quite the situation you've gotten yourself into, young one. I don't suppose you'd have any complaints if I decided to lend a hand." Luffy exhaled deeply as Rayleigh drew his sword. "Nope. Be my guest," he said, visibly sagging in relief. Kizaru drew his light sword and tried to finish off Luffy before the Dark King could interfere, but the right hand of the Pirate King easily foresaw the move with his own future sight and intercepted Kizaru, swiping his sword at the Admiral's neck. The Loja user moved just in time and the blade nicked his cheek instead. The Admiral sighed in annoyance as blood dripped down his cheek, resignedly shifting his full focus to the dangerous adversary before him. Luffy, having caught his breath, wanted to help his old mentor against Kizaru, but knew he'd have to wait when he felt another familiar presence approach. He turned around and came face to face with Bo Hancock. Sabo was finally making some significant progress against Onigumo. After his first surprise attack, it had been tough to get around the Vice Admiral's 8 arms, but once he had, the wound he'd inflicted with a well-placed Shigan was enough to slow him down significantly. The fight ended quickly as Sabo surpassed his opponent's guard and managed to grab Onigumo's skull, then crushed it like an egg in his talons. The Marine groaned in pain and stumbled backward. He tried to get one last shot in with his 8 blades, but Sabo leapt over the attack and bashed his staff against the Vice Admiral's already battered skull one more time. He went out like a light. Panting slightly, Sabo took stock of his injuries, which weren't too serious, before reaching out with his haki to find where he was needed most. His first instinct was to go aid the Straw Hats against CP9, but as he locked onto 2 other auras in the distance, he hesitated and then made a different decision. Sanji, Bonnie and Lucci were all tiring. Lucci from constantly warding off both his opponents, and Sanji and Bonnie from taking so many of his attacks. Bonnie wasn't as durable as Sanji, but at least she had taken less hits. Sanji, on the other hand, was covered in wounds and bruises and visibly struggling to stay upright. "Bonnie-chan," he said suddenly. "Could you go help with my crew? I've got this covered." Bonnie looked rightfully skeptical in the face of the bold-faced lie. "You're fucking crazy." Still, seeing that some of the weaker members of the alliance were struggling, she huffed and relented. "Try not to die," she said, before rushing off to aid the others. "What a fool you are," Lucci scoffed. "You know full well that you can't win this fight by yourself." Sanji, having already exhausted himself using Diable Jam, inwardly agreed. "But that's exactly why I need to do this alone." Lucci used Zoro to charge forward and Sanji did the same. They clashed in a barrage of kicks, Sanji's leg screaming more at the abuse each time. Finally, when they collided again, his leg received a hairline fracture, causing him to grit his teeth through the pain. Stunned, he was completely open to Lucci's next kick, which impacted with his face and sent him hurtling across the ground. The zone user then jumped into the air and descended down on the chef once again. Sanji rolled out of the way and Lucci's kick cratered the ground where he'd just been lying. He couldn't dodge the next punch in time and it hit him square in the gut, knocking all the wind out of him. He tried to leap back to gain some distance, but Lucci's tail wrapped around his waist, holding him in place. "It's over," Lucci growled, bringing both fists to Sanji's torso. Sanji's eyes widened as his observation haki screamed at him. He knew with absolute certainty that this attack would destroy him, but there was nothing he could do about it while he was trapped like this. He just had to withstand it somehow. He braced himself for the pain he knew was coming. Rakugan. The ultimate Rakishiki technique tore through Sanji's body, jarring his insides and causing him to bleed internally. Blood spewed from his mouth and he fell limp. Lucci's tail uncoiled from his waist and he dropped the chef carelessly. "Now, for the rest of your crew," the agent said, spitting a wad of blood onto the ground next to him. He stopped in his tracks as he heard the unmistakable sound of movement. He turned back towards the chef with wide eyes. He was standing. That shockwave should have shredded his insides. He shouldn't even be alive, much less able to stand. The leopard man was soon proven wrong as Sanji dashed forward again using Zoro. Lucci grit his teeth and swatted him aside, causing him to roll across the ground, but he was up again in an instant. "I'm at the end of my rope here," the chef thought. "My vision's starting to darken. I'm at the brink of death. So why do I feel?" He let out a roar and jumped into the air, skywalking towards Lucci, and readied another kick, which the zone user raised an arm to carelessly block. "Why do I feel like I just can't lose?" Lucci was shocked to his core when the kick broke through both his guard and his tech eye, sending him crashing into a nearby building. He pulled himself out with widened eyes. Impossible. He's nearly dead and yet his kicks feel stronger than before. Did he learn tech eye? As Sanji shot forward again, Lucci dismissed the thought. No. He wouldn't be able to move while using it if it was newly learned. He raised both arms in a cross block, activating tech eye, but was still knocked off his feet again by Sanji's concass. "This is armament hockey. Come on, you bastard." "Round 3, the chef whispered. For the 100th time, Kuma's paw pads deflected Zoro's air slash and lunged toward him, forcing him to dodge to avoid being sent flying from the battlefield. It was like a never-ending cycle. Kuma would either deflect his attacks or warp out of the way of them, and he would have to keep dodging his paws with observation hockey. Zoro sighed in annoyance. If he really wanted to, he could win this fight, but not without a lot of effort on his part, effort that would be wasted on someone who had been an ally in all but name the last time he'd seen him. He didn't want to kill Kuma. He owed him far too much. "Why are you hesitating, Hirono Zoro?" Kuma asked, even as Zoro kept dodging. You're going through the motions, but your attacks possess no intent to kill. Why is that? Zoro shrugs. This fight will be over soon anyway. Oh? How do you plan to end it if you don't go for a killing strike? I'm going to recruit you. Kuma froze for a fraction of a second, and Zoro thought he could detect a hint of confusion on the cyborg's impassive face. Kuma? The voice caused the warlord's eyes to widen slightly, and he immediately stopped engaging. He looked at Sabo with a blank look. What are you doing here? He asked. Helping the Straw Hat Pirates. It's in the Revolutionary Army's best interests to aid them at the moment. Kuma paused. Is it because Straw Hat is Dragon's son? It's more than just that. You've been doing a good job as our double agent, but this order takes priority. Act as if you were defeated by Urano Zoro and forced to retreat. Kuma gave him a dry stare. How am I to make that look realistic? Sabo simply grinned. I have faith in you, the chief of staff answered. Kuma sighed and warped away from Sabati. Lucci roared in pain as Sanji's hockey-imbued kicks assaulted every corner of his body. Although he was still faster than the chef, Blackleg was still able to predict his moves with observation hockey, and whereas Lucci had had the edge in strength and durability before, now that the chef was using armament too, he was outclassed in both. Never had a single opponent turn to fight against him so quickly. He had tried to land another Rakugan, but the chef wasn't falling for that again, even being extra wary of his tail. His Shigen and Rankyaku were all being dodged as he began to slow down, and his punches and kicks weren't even hurting his opponent anymore in his weakened state. In a final desperate gambit to turn the fight back in his favor, he shifted into his speed form using Life Return and attempted to end the fight with one more Rakugan. This proved to be a mistake, as the chef avoided the finishing move by a hair despite Lucci's increased speed, and the strain of using the move a second time in the state he was in left the assassin open. Diable jam. Lucci staggered back away from the heat, unaware that his opponent still had the strength to use that move. Mutton shot. The flaming, hockey-enhanced kick drilled into his chest, breaking several ribs and setting his insides aflame. He was shot backwards, a yellow torpedo, crashing through several buildings, which soon collapsed afterward. The extent of his injuries finally caught up with him, and he slipped back into his human form as he lost consciousness. Sanji's arms shook as he lit a cigarette. Come back again and I'll make a feline stew out of you, shitty government catdog. Amek. Kuma's vacation. Kuma arrived at his destination. Kuragana Island. He walked past the bewildered baboons, who knew by now not to attack him, and proceeded towards the castle. It wasn't long before he was greeted at the door. Bartholomew Kuma, Mihik drawled. Just because I allow you to keep one of your paw prints here doesn't mean you can come and go as you please. Dracul Mihik, Kuma greeted. As a fellow warlord, I request that you inflict a non-lethal sword wound on me. Mihik stared. What should I consider non-lethal? Not enough to kill me, but enough to make it seem as though I almost perished, Kuma replied. Should I even ask? It would be preferable that you didn't. Mihik sighed and then casually swung Yoru, cutting halfway through Kuma's cyborg body. Kuma staggered but didn't fall. Mihik sheathed his sword. You may leave now, he stated. Very well. But shouldn't you be at Marineford at the moment? Kuma asked. Mihik hummed and relented. Might as well. Would you like to do the honors? Kuma placed one large hand on Mihik's shoulder and teleported them both to their destination. You don't fight me, your crew will fall to ruin. I won't let that happen. The words were spoken so simply, but with resolution firmer than anything Hancock had ever experienced except perhaps her and her sisters, that they would never again be slaves. Wordlessly, the two combatants charged at each other, one armament blackened leg slamming against another, and one conqueror's will wrestling against another. The air itself came close to shattering, cracks visibly spider webbing out from the clash of the two monsters. If anyone else had been in the area, they'd have been left unconscious for a week. Finally, they split apart, leaping back from each other. Hancock came away only marginally worse off than Luffy, in that his willpower had left her shaken slightly while he stood unperturbed. I underestimated your resolve, she admitted. Thoughts of stopping the man before her were now far from her mind. Can you really accomplish what you set out to do? Luffy tilted his head curiously. What do you mean? I could feel your intent, Straw Hat Luffy. Do you truly have what it takes to bring down the world government? Luffy's confusion evaporated and he folded his arms. My goal is keeping my friends safe and helping them reach their dreams. And if I have to tear down the world government to make that happen, then that's what I'll do. Hancock stared intently at Luffy, searching for any hint of deceit. But she didn't get far before her observation veritably screamed at her to move, backing up the scream with a mental flash of light. She didn't question it, she hurled herself forward in what an uncharitable observer might have dubbed a sprawl. Out the corner of her eye, she could see Luffy flailing out of the way, too. And that brief moment of observation was all it took. Hancock was just a little too slow in dodging, and a beam of light, split in two by Rayleigh, grazed the back of her top instead of missing her entirely. The fabric crumbled away into ash, and the mark on her flesh that embodied every ounce of her fear, distrustfulness, and misandry was exposed to the world. She moved immediately, darting to the nearest mangrove and pressing her back against it. For the briefest of moments, she allowed herself to relax. Then Luffy reappeared a short distance before her and closed the distance between them with 3 long strides. "Stay back." Hancock shrieked, terror at the thought that she could be exposed worse, that she could be exposed to someone that she couldn't silence, nearly sending her into a panic attack. Then her fear slowly gave way to confusion as the man removed his cardigan and held it out to her. "Use this to cover yourself up." Her heart still thundered, dreadful half-formed possibilities flitting in and out of her mind's eye. Seemingly seeing this, Luffy shook his head slightly. "I've seen that mark before. The only ones who should be ashamed of it are the ones who gave it to you," he said darkly. As his words slowly penetrated her panic, her trauma gave way to reasoning. Once again, Bo Hancock searched Luffy's face for any hint of deceit. She found none, instead seeing the same will that she felt earlier reflected in his eyes. Almost unwillingly, she allowed herself to relax. For the first time in 13 years and the second time in her life, a man had earned her trust. She accepted the fabric and wrapped it around herself before locking eyes with Luffy. "I will return to Amazon Lily. Should the Marines ask, I will tell them that you defeated me." Luffy nodded. "Thanks, Hancock. I hope we can meet again under better conditions someday." And with that, the two parted ways. "Am I late?" In spite of the ongoing fights, the combatants glanced at the newcomer and then double-took. For the pirates, it was because Sanji was obviously and perhaps literally running on fumes based on his appearance. For the assassins, meanwhile, it was because they knew that his presence and his current state only meant one thing. "It can't be Lucci lost." Khalifa gasped. "What does it matter?" Jabber snapped. "Even if he did lose, he got one of their main fighters into this sorry state first, so he's no threat to us while we take out the rest of them." "Shitty wolf," Sanji snarled. "Just for that, I'm gonna erg." Unfortunately for the Straw Hats, Jabber was proven absolutely correct. The last of Sanji's adrenaline faded as he confirmed that everyone else was still safe, and he lost his slackened grip on consciousness. But unfortunately for CP9, certain Straw Hats seized on the distraction that Sanji's appearance presented for them. Nami vanished behind a mirage, Usopp sprinted to a safer distance, Chopper took a rumble ball, and Frankie and Brook both took swigs of drinks that they had stashed somewhere, restoring their stamina. Needless to say, that was the end of any hope the assassins had of winning their rematch against the Straw Hats. "I thought I told you to butt out, you long-arm bastard," Kid shouted as he used his magnetic powers to thrash his cybernetic opponent. Apu ignored him entirely, sending another destructive soundwave at the pacifista in his grasp, causing it to spark dangerously from the damage both had inflicted upon it. Against 2 supernovas, one of which was its perfect counter, the human weapon wasn't faring well. It looked like it was about to fall apart as Kid continued to ruthlessly lift it up and smash it against the ground. Nevertheless, it had refused to stay down, and they were essentially competing to see who could destroy it first at this point. Khalifa stood ready to evade her opponent at any moment, realizing how quickly the fight had fallen out of her favor. Her keen eyes focused on the grass, on the air, trying to seek out distortions that she could use to pinpoint the pirate's location. Unfortunately, that process was hampered by the fact that any distortion was an unreliable sign of her presence and, of course, the fact that she wasn't quite fast enough to dodge every sneak attack shock. She suddenly caught sight of her opponent appearing out of thin air, with a clear expression of dismay on her face. "Ah. My time's up already. I should have had at least a few more." "Minutes, seconds, whatever it is doesn't matter," Khalifa said coolly as she fired a Rankyaku straight towards Nami. The latter was left with no time to dodge, and the attack split her in half, only for said halves to fade away. Khalifa had all of 1 second to realize that she had just made a fatal mistake before a bolt of lightning shot straight through her torso. She was out cold long before her body fell to the earth. The real Nami appeared and stuck her tongue out. "Gotcha. Thunderbird star." Usopp shot a bird-shaped lightning projectile at Fukuru, only for him to weave around it with Kami. "Aeronaut strike." Brook blitzed behind the CP9 agent, having just taken a slash at him, but the CP9 agent withstood the strike with Tech Eye. "Usopp-san, I don't suppose you'd be willing to let me in on that plan of yours now?" the skeleton asked as they both dodged a Rankyaku from the Rakishiki practitioner. "Ugh, fine." Usopp relented. "This is gonna hurt like a bitch, damn it. Brook, use me as a sword, quick." Brook's jawbone unhinged itself. "That was the plan." "Usopp-san, with all due respect, that is the most idiotic plan I've ever heard. I pray for the well-being of anyone who would come up with something like that." Zoro suddenly sneezed as he was making his way back towards Old Man Rayleigh's aura. Am I getting sick? The swordsman wondered. That's just embarrassing. I need more training after all. Just do it anyway. Usopp insisted. Reluctantly, Brook sheathed his own sword and grabbed Usopp by the legs before rushing at Fukuru again. Thanks to Usopp's visual observation haki, he was able to see everything with relative clarity despite the impressive speed they were traveling at. As he caught sight of Fukuru's smug expression, he smirked. He was clearly secure in his belief that they couldn't harm him. He'd have to change that. Reject. At the moment of impact, Usopp pressed his most powerful dial against Fukuru, and as the two straw hats passed him by, Fukuru felt his insides turn to shreds. The CP9 agent let out a silent scream of agony before falling flat on his face, unmoving. So that was the plan. Brook said. Brilliant maneuver, Usopp. Son of a bitch, ooh. The sniper cried out, cradling his now broken arm. Ah, that must hurt. Topper was on his second rumble ball already. He had been landing decent hits against an opponent that used biofeedback to move his hair around freely, but his attacks didn't seem to be affecting him that much even in arm point. Robin had already prevented him from getting skewered, restraining their foe with her powers, but his body-hardening technique protected her from doing much else against him, and his strength was such that he would soon break free of her grip. Topper locked eyes with Robin and she nodded, agreeing to try their tactic again. Chopper shifted into arm point, or at least he tried to. He ended up in brain point instead, thanks to the side effect of taking the rumble ball twice in short succession. This left him vulnerable, which Kumadori capitalized on. But even as he prepared to punch a hole through Chopper with his staff, Robin was already sprouting dozens of arms to hold him down. This is my chance. In the brief moment that he was restrained, Chopper used brain point to scan Kumadori for weaknesses. The answer soon came to him. Just in time as well, as at that moment, Kumadori ruthlessly broke Robin's hold, causing her to gasp in pain as the shock was transferred back to her arms. Seeing that her arms were bleeding and that Kumadori was aiming for her now, Chopper tried shifting into walk point. He ended up in jumping point instead, but that worked just as well, and he leapt towards Robin, pulling her out of the way as Kumadori's staff impacted the ground where she'd been standing. Thank you, Chopper, Robin said, wincing. Robin, clutch him when I tell you to, Chopper whispered. Robin merely nodded, trusting that he had a plan. Chopper leapt towards Kumadori in jumping point, avoiding the tendrils of hair that reached out to grab him, and shifted one more time. This time, arm point came as intended, and he launched his most powerful attack at Kumadori. Biz-Ao. Sakura Blizzard. A series of blows broke through the CP9 agent's tech-eye, staggering him and causing him to stumble as blood dripped down his chin. Chopper knew it wouldn't be enough to finish him, but it was enough to make him drop his tech-eye for just a moment. Vicente Fleur. Robin didn't even need to be told, easily recognizing the opening. 80 arms sprouted around Kumadori and wrapped around his arms, legs, shoulders, and neck. Clutch. A sickening crack rang out into the air, and as the arms dissipated, Kumadori let out a weak moan before falling to the ground, unmoving. Having refueled on cola, Frankie began to overpower Blueno, who was still injured from his earlier coup de burst. Landing a strong right to the agent's face, he watched in satisfaction as his opponent crashed into the ground with a grunt of pain. You're getting slow, Blueno. Maybe you should go back to serving drinks. To his credit, Blueno didn't rise to the taunt, instead hanging back to catch his breath. Frankie didn't let him though, charging forward with another haymaker at the ready. Blueno suddenly opened up a door into the air and disappeared into it, causing Frankie to skid to a halt in surprise. He quickly spun around and threw another strong right into Blueno's face as he reappeared. Impossible, how could he have known? Blueno wondered in alarm. Calm reasserted itself on his mind as his reasoning arrived at the answer. He didn't know, he knows that his back is his weak spot, so he defends it reflexively. Blueno jumped through his air door again, and Frankie once again spun around to protect his back, only for Blueno to jump out from the same spot he'd been in. He appeared behind Frankie's back and landed multiple Shigen and a Rankyaku before the cyborg could react. Frankie let out a cry of pain as he was sent on a collision course with the ground. He struggled to get up, his human side having been hit. Blueno tried to capitalize, using the Doa Doa no Mi to get behind him again, but received a nasty surprise for his efforts. Max Cola power. Coup de bout. Blueno didn't even want to think about what happened to him at that moment. When he made his report to the world government later, he would tell them he was defeated in hand-to-hand combat against the cyborg. Anything was better than letting his superiors know he lost because he got farted on. His body finally came to a stop when it impacted with one of the many mangroves around the archipelago, and he welcomed unconsciousness as a sweet relief. Not from the pain, but from the sheer humiliation and the smell. Drake blocked a strike from Kaku and Jabra simultaneously, holding them each back with one weapon. He then twisted around and shoved them both backwards, much to their amazement. "This guy's physical strength is insane," Jabber commented. "Fine. I'll just have to overwhelm him with speed." Kaku came to the same conclusion and the two both vanished using Zoro. To their shock, he dodged using the same technique and their blows impacted the ground. Surprised. As a former rear admiral, the simpler Rakishiki techniques are well within my grasp. Though since you've both transformed already, I suppose it's time to even the playing field. Drake shifted into his hybrid zone form, his body changing size and shape to emulate a cross between a T-Rex and a human. "An ancient zone," Kaku muttered. This fight was getting more and more interesting. Drake used Zoro to rush at Cabra, who blocked his kick using Tekai Kenpo. He was still pushed back by the force, but Kaku attacked Drake before he could follow up. Going for the weaker opponent first. Smart move. Kaku complimented, using his neck as a flail to try to him his opponent. Drake was surprised by the unorthodox move, being put momentarily on the defensive. That was until Jabra sent a Rankyaku at Kaku, interrupting his attack. "Hey, who are you calling the weaker opponent, you bastard?" the Wolfman shouted. It looked like the two were about to get into an argument, but Drake left them no time to do so. He approached with a quick Zoro and swung both his weapons at the distracted Kaku's neck. Kaku was able to move in time to avoid a fatal hit, but Drake still cut through his Tekai and drew blood. Running thin on patience and livid at both his opponent and supposed ally, Kaku dropped to the ground and began rotating. "You've both got me angry. I don't care who I hit with this now." Recognizing that the motions he was going through weren't for show, Drake and Jabber both took evasive maneuvers. Rankyaku. Sky Slicer. A circular blade of wind shot out from Kaku, far more powerful than the standard Rankyaku. But although it was fast and deadly, its charge time made it predictable, and it therefore became easy to dodge. Or at least, it would have been. At the last second, Drake grabbed Jabber and threw him into the move's path. Jabber was hit dead on by the attack, which instantly cut through his Tekai and put him out of commission. "Damn, I let my anger rule me," Kaku whispered. Though he was still seething, there was a hint of regret in his voice. "I should have pulled back the technique in time." There was no time to think about that now, though. Drake and Kaku used Zoro to charge at each other once more, and although Kaku's physical prowess and versatility allowed him to keep up for a while, he was soon overwhelmed by Drake's greater strength and superior devil fruit. Eventually Drake was able to sink his sword into Kaku's foot, punning him to the ground and rendering him immobile. Gritting his teeth through the pain, Kaku tried to send a Shigan at Drake, but the supernova used Zoro again to appear behind him and swung his axe at the back of his skull full force. Kaku dropped to the ground, unconscious and bleeding from his head. He'd kicked the fallen pacifista in the head to make sure it was down for good. The impact with the metal produced a dull clang, but the human weapon didn't move. It was covered in dents and scrapes all over. Blood soaked the ground where it lay, the part of its body that was still human, not having been up to the abuse the two supernovas had delivered to it. "DCH, stubborn fucker finally kicked the bucket," Kid grumbled, still not happy about Apu having assisted him. "Hey, Trafalgar, don't tell me you need help over there. Does it look like I do?" The Surgeon of Death deadpanned. His own cyborg opponent was cut into a dozen pieces. Even then it futilely tried to make its way towards Law to either apprehend or kill the pirate. "You're not looking too good, Pacifista-san," Law said with a chilling smile. "Don't worry, this'll end soon. I'm against unnecessary suffering." The Pacifista tried to aim a laser from his severed hand at Law in response, but Law switched its hand with around its leg, causing it to aim at its own head, which went up in flames from the explosion. "You could have fooled me, bastard," Kid drawled. "Just finish it already. Don't tell me what to do, Eustace." Law quickly shambled over to the pacifista's head and rammed his sword through its now exposed brain. The flickering light in its eyes instantly died out. "That pretty much finishes up all the government dogs here, as far as I can tell," Apu said, arms crossed casually behind his head. "It still leaves the damn admiral," Kid said. Both of them had been briefed on the situation by Law. "You think Straw Hat and Demon Wind can take him? They did it once before, didn't they?" Law reminded him. "I doubt they'll lose. I've met both of those two, and they had this look in their eyes that had me convinced they wouldn't go down very easily. Didn't have you pegged for the sentimental type, Trafalgar. Shut up or I'll kill you." Marine Admiral Kizaru and Dark King Rayleigh blitzed across a baddie archipelago, exchanging a rapid flurry of swordplay. The residents and passerby of the lawless zone had long evacuated the battlefield due to the massive amounts of collateral damage that would assault their surroundings with every clash of light and steel. Neither combatant had landed more than a glancing hit on the other yet. Although they seemed to be evenly matched, anyone with a trained eye could tell that the Dark King was worse off. His breaths came in heavy gasps as he tried to regulate his breathing. "Starting to slow down, are you?" Kizaru mocked. Even if you were the right hand of the Pirate King decades ago, retirement still hasn't done you any favors. When was the last time you picked up a sword, I wonder? I still have some fight left in these old bones, Admiral. Underestimating the old generation will be your downfall. Kizaru was about to respond, but just then, his senses flared and he was forced to disengage to dodge a deadly wind blade from Zoro. This created an opening for Rayleigh to send his own flying slash at him, but that too was dodged. As light particles reformed his body a distance away, Luffy appeared in his path, fist blackened with obsidian lightning, running down the length of his arm from the effects of his conqueror's haki. Gomu Gomu no Nighthawk. The blow landed cleanly on Kizaru's face, the impact causing a massive shockwave as he was blown backwards. He finally righted himself, and though he was hardly fazed by the large bruise forming on his face, his scowl showed that he was slightly nervous about fighting these particular three pirates all at once. Luffy and Zoro wasted no time. Year 4th. Snakeman. 9-sword style. Asura. If the previous confrontation between two of these fighters was enough to clear the area, the four of them clashing was enough to make all of Sabaody give serious consideration to evacuating. The backlash from their battle was felt all over the archipelago. It wasn't long before Kizaru began to feel the strain. Although neither of the Straw Hats were strong enough to push him to his limits on their own, together they were a dangerous and deadly challenge. Add in Rayleigh, who was practically on par with him save for stamina issues, and this opposition was overwhelming. It was only liberal use of his light speed that kept him from taking debilitating hits, but Straw Hat and Dark King could both use future side observation to track him, and Rorano's own well-honed instincts were nothing to scoff at. Finally, his evasiveness failed him, and he took 3 hits in short succession. Jet Culverin. Luffy's fist snaked its way towards him before delivering a punishing blow to the back of his skull, dazing him and eliciting a pained grunt. 9 Demon Flash. Zoro's 9 armaments hardened blades cut through his torso, blood seeping from the wounds. Umber Ray. Black lightning surrounded Rayleigh's sword as he unleashed a pitch-black flying slash at Kizaru. The Admiral barely had time to use haki to defend himself as he was enveloped by the darkened wind blade. When the dust settled, Kizaru could be seen standing in a slouch, covered in blood from head to toe. His eyes were narrowed as Luffy and Zoro rushed forth once more, readying another assault. No. Draw back. Rayleigh shouted suddenly, but the warning came too late. The concussive force of unknown origins hit the two, blowing them both backwards. Although Luffy was barely able to right himself with Gear 4th, Zoro was less lucky, and the blast carried him into another mangrove entirely. Startled, Luffy looked up towards the source of the attack, ready to take out the offender. Only to see Admiral Fujitora no, Vice Admiral Isso hovering in the air above Sabaody. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Luffy said, sweating dripping down his face. Isso lowered himself down in front of an injured Kizaru. "You look like you've seen better days, Borsalino-san," the level-headed marine stated. "How embarrassing," Kizaru drawled. "I would have wrapped this up by now if I knew one of my subordinates would be seeing me like this. But I wasn't expecting you, you see. Fleet Admiral Sengoku sent me as backup," the blind man explained. He seemed to be under the impression that we'd need a failsafe. Seeing the situation here, I'm inclined to believe him. "It seems this battle has just fallen out of our favor, young one," Rayleigh said. Luffy didn't reply. He just got ready for another round. Just then, Kizaru warped away at lightspeed. Luffy swore. "Rayleigh, would you be fine?" "Of course," the elder pirate assured, despite his fatigue showing. "Go after him." Luffy shot off after Kizaru, hoping he wasn't too late. The Straw Hat crew were heading towards the Sunny in a battered state, Law and Bonnie walking alongside them. The other supernovas had already departed, emphasizing the fact that it was the last time they'd be giving out free help. "We sure laid a super beating down on their asses," Frankie shouted, carrying an unconscious Anji over his shoulder. "It was a close thing, though," Nami said wearily. "We were lucky." "Very much so," Robin agreed. "But I can't help but worry about Luffy and Zoro." "Get down." An injured Zoro leapt in front of the crew, none of them having even spotted him. A beam of light came their way, but Zoro deflected it with Shusui, causing it to explode off in the distance. Kizaru appeared in front of the group, causing everyone sans Zoro to stiffen. "You lot sure are making my life difficult," Kizaru grumbled. "Gomu Gomu no Black Mamba." Luffy shot down from above, still in Gear 4th, aiming his enhanced Gatling at Kizaru. The Admiral weaved through the blows rather effortlessly, only for them to bounce off the air and follow him, forcing him to deflect Luffy's arms with 2 lightspeed kicks. Luffy and Zoro began to tag team Kizaru again, but just when it looked like they were gaining ground, Kizaru aimed several lasers at the crew, forcing them both to abort their attacks and deflect them. This left them both vulnerable, and Kizaru continued to rain down lasers on the two, who tried their best to block but received several burns for their efforts. Then Kizaru landed a lightspeed kick to Luffy's gut and things took a turn for the worse as he lost his grip on Gear 4th, the technique having already run its course. The difference after that was substantial and the two immediately began to lose ground against a now fully serious Kizaru. The Loja finally warped in between them and caught them both with a lightspeed kick, sending them flying away in opposite directions. Kizaru then turned his attention to the crew and they watched in terror as he raised a glowing finger towards them. Sanji's flitted in and out of consciousness, wondering what the hell he was seeing. He was dreaming of terrible memories that weren't his and yet somehow were, memories that made him want to vomit. It was confusing and disorienting. He didn't know whether he was on Sabati Archipelago or somewhere deep in the ocean, shackled head to toe inside of a sea stone cage with no hope of escape. That wasn't all he remembered. It all came back to that shitty naval battle, the one he remembered but didn't. He was getting flashes of a great battle at sea against opponents he didn't recognize. They lost. They lost the battle and everything important to them. He knew it deep in his bones, down to every last bone that screamed out in protest against the idea because it hadn't happened, these weren't his memories, this was a lie. Why was he seeing this? He remembered being subdued after it all and brought to level 6 of Impel down in chains. He was tortured for days there, or what he assumed was days. It was hard to keep track of time in that shitty hellhole. He had just been laughing at the guards, taunting them, daring them to keep trying their best to finally break him because they never would when it happened. The words echoed through his mind like an ethereal metronome, the disembodied voice rattling through his head, jarring him. Your journey back won't go as smoothly, given your condition. Good luck, adventurer. He didn't know whose words they'd been, but he didn't care because it was then that he'd been struck by a sudden sense of weightlessness and it had occurred to him that he wouldn't be spending much longer in Impel Down. Higher and higher he rose until he found himself lying flat on his back, unchained, with a splitting headache, 2 sets of memories, and a distinct feel of soap bubbles against his skin. His eyes opened. The Straw Hats all aimed attacks at Kizaru, but they were completely ineffective against his Loja form. Even Law and Bonnie's powers had no effect. Such heart you pirates have, Kizaru mocked. Sorry about this. But my mission is to wipe out the Straw Hats, not just their strongest fighters. The laser that was aimed at Nami would have surely killed here. Except Sanji was suddenly in front of her, deflecting the laser with a kick. It hit shot through a nearby mangrove before exploding. The entire group stared at Sanji, shocked out of their wits, as Kizaru stared at Sanji intently. There's something vastly different about you, the Admiral commented. Had their intel been wrong? They hadn't accounted for another one of these freakish prodigies. It was then that Luffy and Zoro arrived again, clearly panicking at the thought that they'd left the crew unattended, only to look confused when they realized that no one had been harmed. It wasn't long before their awakened crewmate's pulsating aura caught their attention. Sanji? Luffy asked with awe. Sanji smirked. Yo, shitty captain and mosshead. This is a lot to take in, you know. I feel like my head's about to explode. All I can say is, I hope you bastards have room for one more in your shitty club. Breathing in sharply, Ace cast a dome of flames around himself, forcing his opponents to distance themselves somewhat. He had managed to take out the remaining battleships, but had taken more damage than we would have liked in the process. Worse yet, all 4 of his opponents were still in the fight. The 4 vice admirals wouldn't be much of a threat individually, but they worked fluidly as a team and coupled with his injuries that still hadn't healed from his fight with Blackbeard, that was making things difficult for him. That wasn't to say he hadn't dealt any damage of his own, but he just couldn't seem to pin them down long enough to land a good enough hit. He'd been using area of effect attacks, but he couldn't use moves like Entei without killing innocent civilians on Sabati in the process. He quickly spread his arms out, causing the dome of fire surrounding him to spread out in all directions. His 4 opponents got caught in the blast, but their haki defended them from the worst of it. As the 4 readied their next assault, a human bullet blurred through the sky towards them. An iron grip found its way around Bastile's skull and he plummeted downward until the newcomer crushed his head against the ground. A crater formed at the point of impact. The other 3 were so caught off guard that they fell back to reassess the new threat. You're late, Ace said. Let's finish this quickly so we can go help Luffy. When the dust cleared, Bastille was prone on the ground, out cold. So dramatic, Maverick sighed, catching up. You just had to make an entrance, didn't you, Chief of Staff? I don't need to hear that from you, Rooftop Stalker, Sabo replied, and Maverick shrugged in surrender. Sit this one out. You're injured from your fight with Sentomaru. What? Sentomaru's been defeated as well, Dalmatian shouted. Don't lose conviction. Stainless said. The revolutionary got the drop on us, but we still outnumber them. They smirked. Let's see how long that lasts. Hachi, Papig, and a disguided Kami were all on their way back to Shaki's bar. It was the only safe place they could be during all this madness. Both Hachi and Papag were worried about their new friends, while Kami showed a confidence in them that befitted her innocence. "Nayu, do you think they'll be okay?" Hachi asked as they made their way through the crowds fleeing from the direction of the fight. "Don't worry," Kami said. "It's Luffy Chin and his crew. I'm sure they'll pull through." "If you say so," Papag said. "The world government seems to really want them out of the picture, though." None of them noticed a large curly-haired man eyeing Kami's disguise with narrowed eyes as they walked by. Luffy and Zoro had many questions right now. Still, Luffy had never been one to look a gift horse in the mouth, and while Zoro was at times, he knew there were moments when it simply wasn't wise to do so. So it wasn't that surprising that they both decided to address Sanji's situation after the fight. Thus, the three now stood against an increasingly curious Kizaru. The three were faring somewhat better against the Admiral now, but their injuries were taking their toll on their strength and stamina, and Sanji had it the worst of them. Kizaru had realized this and focused on attacking the chef relentlessly, trying to put him out of the fight. Only his observation haki coupled with Luffy's was keeping him from taking a debilitating hit. And on the offensive side of things, Kizaru continued to demonstrate that he did not hold his position for nothing. He dodged Zoro's Zanzen Sekai and struck him with a light-speed kick. He repelled Sanji's hell memories with superior haki, blowing him away, and he weaved in between the assault of Luffy's Red Hawk Storm and then forced him back with a light sword that nearly decapitated the rubber man. "We aren't making any headway," Sanji shouted. "We just need to buy time until we can use Gear 4th and Asura again," Luffy said, panting heavily. "That's time we don't have," Zoro said grimly as Kizaru charged up a bowl of light. "Fire Fist." A familiar and very welcome voice rang through their ears. Kizaru cancelled his own attack and warped into the air, out of the way of the massive fire blast. Only for Sabo to blindside him with a follow-up attack, he reacted quickly enough to block the revolutionary's kick with his forearm, but it sent him flying back towards the ground. Kizaru's face remained impassive, but inwardly he cursed. "If they're here, it means the Vice Admirals and Sentomaru have been defeated. Which means I'm on my own unless Isso manages to defeat Dark King." Suddenly he wasn't liking his chances as much as before. As he landed, Zoro and Sanji lashed out respectively with a 1080 caliber Phoenix and Hell Memories. He warped away again, only to appear in the path of an elephant gun. Straw Hat had predicted his movements again. He was hit dead on and crashed head first into a nearby mangrove. The pain coursing through his normally invulnerable body was frustrating, and Kizaru showed as much as he made his next move. He warped into the sky above Sabati and began to charge up a massive beam of light, keeping each of his 5 opponents in sight. This was more power than he had had to expend in years, but there would be no way to dodge this blow. They'd have to take it head on. "He's trying to blow up the entire lawless zone," Zoro shouted. "Ace," Luffy called. "I'm on it," his brother grunted, already forming a massive fire to match Kizaru's attack. Kizaru saw the growing flames but continued undeterred, confident that his technique would win out. But with all of his concentration focused on his foes, the haki-imbued kick that struck his head from behind caught him by surprise. And while it didn't hurt him, it did phase him and make him look briefly away from his targets. For a single second, he saw Maverick's exhausted but triumphantly smug face. Then Ace's shout drew his attention back. "Genesis Edict." The haki-imbued miniature sun that had allowed the fireman to overcome Blackbeard's darkness was upon Kizaru before he could respond and, left with no other defense, he transformed into light. But the blast radius was so wide that it lit up the sky, and with no room to dodge or warp away, all he could do was coat his intangible body with armament haki and attempt to wait it out. He vaguely noticed an impossibly long black arm seizing the screaming revolutionary nearby and dragging him out of the flames to safety. All of Sabati looked towards the sky, shielding their eyes from the light, and as they felt the scorching heat from the distance, each and every one of them shared a sentiment that they would never utter aloud. The celestial dragons may call themselves gods, but never could they breathe a flame so godly themselves. Inside the city-wide raging inferno, Kizaru's defenses began to slip. Soon his haki would give out and he'd be forcefully solidified. Taking a chance, he focused every bit of his concentration to warp out of the blast while maintaining his intangibility. To his relief, it worked. As his body reformed from light into flesh a distance away from the fire, Kizaru allowed himself a moment to relax. Until he saw Sabo hovering in front of him using Geppo. Kizaru barely had time to feel panic before a haki-imbued punch sent him flying back into the fire, and this time, he was in his human form as it consumed him. It took all of his willpower not to scream. By the time the technique faded out, he was panting heavily and covered in severe burns. As soon as he could bring himself to concentrate again, he comprehended the sight before him. Monkey D. Luffy, tattooed with armament haki once more, bouncing in front of him. "Darn it," the Admiral sighed. "You're going to kill me, aren't you?" "I might," Luffy snarled. And if I don't, I will if you ever come after my crew again. King Kong gun. The coup de grace struck Borsellino head on, the admiral didn't have the energy to block the attack. He barely managed to stay awake as Luffy's attack sent him flying off of the archipelago, and finally he lost his grasp as he struck the ocean. The last sensation he remembered was the water's cool embrace as it mercilessly dragged him down into its murky depths. I fear we will have to put this fight on hold, Dark King, Isso said. The gravity in the vicinity suddenly reverted back to its usual intensity as the abnormally strong vice admiral sheathed his sword. Rayleigh, panting slightly, followed suit. The lives of your comrades over the mission, huh? If only more Marines thought like you do. Rayleigh said. I won't deny the validity of your claim, Isso said. Though to begin with, my mission was to act as backup for Borsellino-san, and letting him drown doesn't achieve much to that end. Fair enough. I suppose I'll trust you not to go after those young ones then, Rayleigh replied, before turning away. Isso rose into the air and with merely a thought, flew off of Sabati and over the waters of the Grand Line. With his observation hockey, he could sense Kizaru's form resting against the ocean floor. Reaching out one arm, he increased the pull of gravity on his comrade's form with himself as the epicenter, and after several long seconds, the unconscious admiral rose out from the surface and into his waiting hand. Locating Sentomaru and the 5 vice admirals that had participated in the siege, he quickly repeated the action, and soon, all 6 figures hovered around him like satellites. Finally, he turned his attention toward the cluster of destroyed battleships and scowled. He couldn't sense a single survivor amongst the fleet. Fire Fist had chosen between the lives of the Marines bombarding the island and the lives of his comrades and countless innocents on the archipelago. The choice must have been obvious. And yet, despite Isso's grief, he knew it was supposed to be their job to protect the masses. It was the duty of the Marines to defend those who couldn't defend themselves, and here they were, willing to sacrifice all but the celestial dragons in order to wipe out a single pirate crew. And one of the most wanted criminals in the world had done their job for them. At the cost of men who'd been following orders. Sometimes, he couldn't help but think that this world was beyond saving. Such a tragic waste of life, and it's all on us. I'm glad you sent me here, Fleet Admiral. But if you yourself knew how poorly this was going to end. He clenched his fist and flew, letting the wind carry away his doubts as his fellow Marines floated behind him. The remaining 6 members of the Straw Hat crew were shaking with adrenaline. It was already disheartening that they were unable to even touch Kizaru despite their best efforts, but when the sky had been consumed with a giant fiery representation of how outclassed they were, it only drove home their powerlessness. They could hardly believe that they'd won. At the moment, though, they were all more concerned with Sanji's circumstances. Since the moment the chef had woken up and blocked Kizaru's attack, he had been like a completely different person. Usopp had been shocked the most, having seen his aura pulse and expand before his eyes. Blackleg, what happened to him? Bonnie asked. He wasn't nearly that strong before, but suddenly he can tangle with a Marine Admiral. Law's eyes were narrowed. Straw Hat and Demon Wind seemed to know something about it, he replied, as they listened to the 3 speaking. How did you come back, Sanji? We thought you were dead. Luffy said, not caring who heard at the moment. No idea, the chef answered. One moment I was in Impel Down, the next I heard a voice I didn't recognize and I was here. Roger must have sent him back too, Zoro speculated. Roger? He's the one who sent you guys back? Sabo asked, as Ace's eyes narrowed. Yeah. Well, his ghost anyway. I guess he couldn't send the chef back as far, though. Wonder why. It could have been the distance, or maybe the condition he was in, Sabo reasoned. Luffy's eyes widened. So that's what he meant. He said the third one would be difficult. Zoro, annoyed, shot him a look. You didn't think to mention that when we first came back. Kind of important. It's best not to question it, Ace said. We're just lucky that it happened when it did. What the hell are you lot on about? Bonnie asked, walking up to them. It sounds like you just said the Pirate King sent you back in time or some shit. The Straw Hats all exchanged uneasy looks while Law looked on in interest. Sanji, seeing what was coming, scanned the area with observation hockey to make sure no one was eavesdropping. Luckily, everyone had evacuated the area a while ago. They did, Luffy said, breaking the silence. Zoro and I, and now Sanji, were sent back to this time from over 2 years into the future. That's why we're so strong. Roger could actually do something like that. When he's dead, no less. Bonnie asked. He actually said it was because he was dead, Luffy remembered. Some kind of devil fruit. There are a select few that stay with the user after death, Law informed. We didn't ask, Zoro admitted. At the time, we didn't exactly believe it ourselves. Ace hummed. Pops knew the bastard pretty well. Maybe I can ask him. Bonnie's brow furrowed. Did Ace have something against the Pirate King? He'd never mentioned it. So you three are basically New World level pirates in the bodies of your younger selves, Law concluded. Thanks to the late Pirate King who you somehow met and who for some reason decided to do you a favor. Luffy deflated. Don't make it sound like a fluke, Trafalgar. Stop calling me that. We're not just New World level pirates. He continued, ignoring the command entirely. We were easily as strong as the Yonko before we came back. But these weaker bodies take a lot getting used to. And I'll have you know he didn't send us back on a whim. He did it because we made it to Raftel. Law's eyes widened, along with Bonnie's. Made it to Bonnie trailed off, dumbfounded. Law sighed. So you're the Pirate King, yeah, Luffy said. That's only in the other timeline though, so you've got nothing to worry about. The race is still on. I'll keep that in mind. But that said, Zoro said, fixing them both with a dry look. I shouldn't have to tell you that this stays between us. Bonnie scoffed. Like we'd go and broadcast intel like that. If anything, I'm looking forward to seeing you tear through the world government some more, Law agreed. About that, Sabo spoke up. Don't you guys find this strange? The Marines have gotten aggressive lately, to the point of recklessness. They normally wouldn't try to risk so much on a gamble like this. You're right, Ace mused. Pops isn't just going to let this go when he hears about it. They're down one admiral right now, they have a Yonko's retribution to worry about, and they didn't really accomplish anything. They should have known this would be a possible outcome. I believe they did, came a new voice. They all turned to see Rayleigh walking towards them. Or at least, Fleet Admiral Sengoku did. It seems he sent a high-ranking marine with extraction in mind. Luffy nodded, remembering how the admiral or vice admiral at this point in time had shown up to the fight. So it sounds like Sengoku didn't exactly approve of this mission, Sabo said. Did the order come from the 5 Elder Stars, then? What could they be thinking? I think it came from even higher than that, Luffy muttered. Sabo's gaze immediately snapped to him. You mean you guys know about that? No, don't answer that. Of course you do. Okay, you lost me again, Bonnie said. Aren't the 5 Elder Stars as high up as it gets? Don't worry about it for now, Sabo said. We have bigger problems at the moment. He turned to Ace. I'm going to get in touch with Dragon. I suggest you and Luffy get in touch with Whitebeard as soon as possible. Straw Hat. The group's attention was brought to another newcomer. Hachi ran up to Luffy and then collapsed to his knees. There was blood running down most of his arms. I know you have your own battles to fight, but please, we need your help. Kami's been kidnapped by slave traders. Isco, proud owner and manager of the Grove 1 human auctioning house, was currently cowering before the fury of a celestial dragon. That was not a good situation to be in for anyone, much less someone in his line of business, but he couldn't just hold his tongue right now. His business would be ruined at this rate. Howard. Saint Shauria spat at the man groveling before her. How could you even consider calling off the auction? Please, Saint Shauria. Disco tried to reason. With all the chaos happening on the island right now, don't you think it would be too dangerous to host the auction? No, I don't, Shauria said with a snort. You just have weak constitution. The pirates are none of your concern. The marine will handle it. Now, this auction will continue. My family and I have been looking forward to it and I won't see it cancelled because you decided to cave at the slightest pressure from some pirates who are as good as dead. Why yes, of course. My apologies. Disco said. He still thought this was a terrible idea, but he knew better than to disagree with a world noble outright. I just have to hope that my business doesn't fall apart because of this woman's stubbornness. Unquixote Doflamingo himself could not have fathomed a more cruel and unusual death to that hope than what happened next. As Shauria turned away in a huff, a crash was heard from behind the celestial dragons and slave traders. They all turned to see that the doors to the auction house had been smashed open. In the doorway stood Straw Hat Luffy. Behind him stood his crew, as well as Fire Fist Ace, the Heart Pirates, the Bonnie Pirates, and the Revolutionaries. Isco paled. Shauria snarled. Who do you think you are? She shouted as Luffy descended the stairs to the auction house. Luffy ignored her, walking up to Disco, who stumbled back at the dangerous gleam in the pirate captain's eye. Where's Kami? He asked, voice deathly quiet. Incensed, Shauria pulled out a flintlock and pointed it straight at Luffy's head. You dare ignore me, do you know who I am? Nope. Don't know you, Luffy replied. Enraged, Shauria pulled the trigger, firing 3 times. Not many people watching understood what happened next. The loud crack of the gun firing was drowned out by an even louder crack that split the air around them. The bullets that had exited the barrel of the gun stopped halfway to Luffy before falling to the ground. Shauria followed suit, foaming at the mouth. After a few tense moments of shocked silence, her guards scrambled to call Marine HQ, but they too fell to the ground, unconscious. Zoro walked up to the still cowering Disco and unsheathed one sword. The mermaid. Now. Isco hurried to obey, leading them to where the slaves were being kept. Amy was being kept inside a giant bowl, filled with water but with no openings in the glass. There. She's all yours, so PP please don't kill me. Disco begged. Oh, we won't, Sanji said menacingly. But I can't promise the same mercy from your boss. It was hard to tell if Disco fainted before or after Sanji kicked him in the face and sent him flying into the wall. Zoro walked up to the bowl and made 3 cuts in the blink of an eye. The glass slid apart seamlessly, water spilling out, and Luffy caught Kami before she could fall to the floor. Luffy chin everyone you came. She said through a cascade of tears. Luffy gave her a smile. Sorry we weren't there. We were a little busy. But thanks for hanging tough until we arrived. Amy just nodded her head and hiccuped. Law walked up to the cells, where the rest of the slaves were being held. They stared at him warily. Room, he whispered, and a blue bubble enveloped the auction house. Emotionless, he unsheathed his sword, causing some of them to stiffen. But when he began swinging it through the air, none of them were injured. Instead, the locks to the doors came undone, and their chains and collars were cut open, freeing them all. The collars began ticking, but with a mutter of shambles, they all disappeared, replaced by an assortment of random objects. Several explosions could be heard in the area, and the former slaves watched, stunned. Law nodded to the door, and wasting no time, they all rushed out, including the giant that had been shackled to the wall. Next, the surgeon walked up to a slave that Shauria had brought with her. He had been silent throughout the whole ordeal. I'm gonna get you out of here, Law said. Care to join my crew, Pirate Captain Jean Bart? I always repay my debts, was all the pirate said. Law swung his sword again, and Jean Bart was freed. Sabo turned to Luffy. I assume you know what we're going to do next, the revolutionary said. Luffy nodded. It'll just save us the trouble. On that day, the revolutionary army struck Sabati. With Marine HQ in disarray, they took their chance, storming across the archipelago. They raided every auction house, freed every slave, and killed every slave trader on the island. In the aftermath of the incident that would rock the Grand Line, their message was all too clear. As Cole and Maverick tore apart the last auction house, Sabo pulled out a transponder snail. Dragon will want to know about this. The Straw Hats, Heart Pirates and Bonnie Pirates gathered around in intrigue as Ace dialed Whitebeard's number in the transponder snail. It wasn't long before they heard a click. Didn't expect to get another call from you so soon, Ace Edward Newgate's voice intoned without preamble. Luffy blinked in confusion. You called him earlier? As soon as I woke up from my fight with Teach, Ace confirmed. Straw Hat, is that you? Almost as soon as the question left the snail's mouth, its expression turned sterner. Has something happened? We just finished beating Kizaru, who may or may not still be alive, depending on how fast they fished him out of the ocean, Luffy responded with his characteristic bluntness. The silence that was downright tumultuous greeted that revelation, and Luffy sighed. That's not enough, is it? You already know the answer to that question, Brad. You know full well what's going to happen now. Of course I do. That doesn't mean I like it, you shouldn't have to go to war for me or my crew. My promise to anyone who allies with me is nothing less for anyone who hurts them, Monkey D. Luffy. What makes you think you're any different? The tense silence fell again, and it may have been a full minute before Luffy brought himself to reply, his face splitting into a dangerous crescent-shaped grin. In that case, we'll join the rest of your allies for the attack. The old man snorted. Gurarahe. Telling you to hold off would end the same way as you telling me fine. But at least take the rest of the day to relax. Mustering all my forces to charge Marineford will take a while anyway. Luffy winced, noting his crew stayed out of the corner of his eye. Yeah, we'll do that. Thanks. See you on the other side, Pops. Don't be late, Brad, the old man chuckled. With that, the call ended, and what was arguably the Navy's worst nightmare was set in motion. There were blatant advantages to having an alliance with someone empowered by a devil fruit, specifically designed to preserve life in or after situations that would otherwise be impossible to survive. The blatant one here was that while the aftermath of such a grueling battle would normally have the Straw Hat Pirates helpless and recovering for at least a couple of days, the help law granted Chopper meant that the worst of the damage was already undone by the time morning arrived. As the Pirate Alliance occupied themselves with nursing the last of their injuries, Bonnie barged in with a newspaper. Mouthful of pizza despite the fact that it was breakfast time, she threw the article into the middle of the room, with the headline on full display. Carnage on Sabati Archipelago and Whitebeard on a warpath. Marines prepare for battle. The Straw Hat Pirates, who previously shocked the world by overpowering Admiral Aokiji, have exceeded all expectations. The exact details of the battle that they waged on Sabati Archipelago yesterday are jumbled, but this much is certain. The Navy mobilized an unprecedented force against the Straw Hat Pirates, including 2 of the 7 warlords of the sea, 6 vice admirals, 10 battleships. And Admiral Kizaru. The Navy's defeat in this battle is due to the unexpected intervention of the other supernovas present on the island, as well as two unexpected powerhouses. Fire Fist Ace, 2nd Division Commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, and the Revolutionary Army's Chief of Staff, Sabo. From the few reports we have gathered, we can confirm that Straw Hat Luffy defeated Pirate Empress Boa Hancock and Demon Wind Zoro defeated the tyrant Bartholomew Kuma. Most of the remaining forces met their demise at the hands of the aforementioned reinforcements, and it took the full effort of the Straw Hat's three strongest fighters, along with Fire Fist and Sabo, to defeat Kizaru. In the aftermath, the supernovas confirmed that their alliance was a one-time occurrence, but while Ace's connection to the Straw Hats is obvious through their alliance with Whitebeard, Sabo's remains unknown. On the subject of Whitebeard, news of the Navy's attempted slaughter of the Straw Hat Pirates has clearly reached his ears already. Since last night, news has surfaced of various ships flying the Whitebeard Pirates flag attacking and subsequently devastating marine bases across the New World. But the destruction is far from random, every base destroyed follows a linear path through the ocean straight to the Red Line. If it wasn't clear before that Whitebeard does not tolerate attacks on his allies, it is now. The world's strongest man is on his way to Marine headquarters, and he's not in a merciful mood. We need to leave soon if we're going to make it there on time, Zoro grunted, draining the last of a sizable sake jug. About that. I'm going to have to catch up to you guys, Ace said. Luffy was bewildered. Why? Ace showed them an article on the next page of the newspaper. It read. Royal Warlord arrested. Knight of the Sea Jin sent to impel down. Seems like he spoke out against the world government's actions, Law said. That would do it. They hate losing face. The dark frown that Luffy donned as he read the page was all the three crews needed to know their next move. Change of plans, guys. We need to call Pops again. In the middle of the New World, two pirate fleets faced off against each other in neutral waters. Red-haired Shanks stared up at Kaido's towering form as they stood face to face across the water. Kaido, what is your motive in pursuing Whitebeard? Why get involved in a war that doesn't concern you? That doesn't concern me, Kaido shouted in outrage. I've been fighting that bastard Whitebeard since you were in diapers, red-haired brat. I have an old score to settle, now move your fleet before I crush it. Shanks smiled benignly. I won't move, he said. But you're welcome to try and crush me. Kaido leapt from his ship, brandishing his club, and Shanks met him halfway, saber in hand. The heavens split as the two clashed. I'll buy you some time, old man, but I sure hope you know what you're doing. And Luffy, you really have grown. Perhaps too much to be natural. Maybe one day soon we can share a cup of sake and speak as equals. Marine headquarters had most of its forces gathered for the upcoming war against the Whitebeard Pirates. Among those present were Fleet Admiral Sengoku, Vice Admiral Garp, Admiral Akainu, Admiral Aokiji, Vice Admiral Isso, Dracula Mihik, Don Quixote Doflamingo, Gecko Moria, a platoon of pacifistas, and an army of marines over 10,000 strong. Sengoku's blood pressure was rising steadily but surely. As he received report after report of bad news, he grinded his teeth harder and harder. Fleet Admiral. Boa Hancock has stated that she can't make it back to Marineford. She claims to have been injured by Straw Hat Luffy. Sir. Bartholomew Kuma is in no condition to join the battle. He says he was nearly killed by Urano's Oro, and we confirmed as much when he dropped off Dracula Mihik. With Jinbe and Crocodile in impel down, the warlord's present number at a mere 3. Enough. Sengoku roared. Is Admiral Kizaru healed yet? Sir. Kizaru-san is still in a coma due to his injuries. We don't believe he'll recover in time to participate. Sengoku was getting ready to explode when Commodore Branu entered the room, looking nervous. Fleet Admiral, he began. We're receiving reports that Whitebeard is getting ready to submerge beneath the Red Line. As Sengoku gathered his wits, Garp looked at him with an uncharacteristic grimace. Sengoku, I don't think we're going to get out of this unscathed. 1,000 Sunny soared through the air above the Terai current, keeping itself airborne through consecutive coup de bursts. Frankie had been prepared to keep the ship in the air manually any time it got too low, but Sunny had informed him that she could do it herself at will, which had allowed the cyborg to focus on refueling with his many barrels of cola. One of the perks of having a ship with its own will, Luffy supposed. On board the ship with the Straw Hats were Ace, Sabo, Law, and Bonnie, and while his two brothers seemed right at home, their new alliance members still seemed to feel out of place. They each sat in separate corners of the ship, contemplative. It was a stark contrast to what Luffy was used to from those who boarded the Sunny. Even the more stoic of their alliance in the previous timeline had learned to say fuck it and got caught up in the chaos of the Straw Hat crew soon enough, but he supposed they were still settling in. He could tell with his observation haki that they were both unsure of their places within the alliance, which was strange because that was never the case before. But then, the crew hadn't been nearly this strong before. Did they feel like they didn't have as much to contribute? Frowning, Luffy made his way over and stood in between them, seeing both their gazes follow him. "Hey guys," he shouted. "Sorry you had to leave your cruise at Sabati." Law just shrugged while Bonnie rolled her eyes. "Not everyone can have a flying ship," she said. "We wouldn't want to leave ours unattended, so it's fine." "You sound like you're sulking," Law pointed out, one eye open. Bonnie shot him an annoyed look, which he was unfazed by. She sighed. "I guess I'm just feeling pretty useless. We're going up against the world government. Straw Hat over here is a powerhouse, along with Ace and the Revolutionary, and even you have a role as a medic. Meanwhile, I'd be a distraction at best against a Marine Admiral." Luffy's frown deepened, and he was about to retort when Law spoke up. "Is that all you're worried about? You shouldn't worry about it. You're crucial to my plan, after all." Luffy grinned, seizing the chance to lighten the mood. "Yeah, listen to Trafalgar, Bonnie," Luffy said. "You're crucial to the plan." "What plan?" "You have a plan?" he asked Law. "For the record, Straw Hatter, you may be a good leader, but your strategic planning skills need a lot of work. But to answer your question, yes, I have a plan. And Glutner's participation is imperative." Law began describing his plan in detail, and as he went on, Luffy's grin gradually widened until it was splitting his face. "Law, you're the best," he shouted. "You thought of a plan like that in such a short time?" Bonnie asked. "It's been a few hours since I was clued into this crazy-ass plan to assault Marineford," Law said. "That's plenty of time to think things through. I'm not some scrub who runs in guns blazing without any ounce of strategy in mind." Luffy pouted. "That's mean. Anyway, you'll have to tell Whitebeard when you call him. He could be crossing the red line as we speak." "Luffy?" Frankie shouted from his position at the front of the ship. "We're approaching the gates of justice." Everyone on board the Sunny soon congregated at the front of the ship, staring up at the massive gates that barred their entrance to the undersea gal. As they drew closer, Sunny materialized. "As loath as I am to admit it, my roar can't destroy something like that," she said. "You guys will have to handle it." Luffy didn't answer, walking towards the figurehead of the ship. Without any prompting, Zoro, Sanji, Ace, and Sabo followed suit. "Don't tell me they're gonna bring down the gates, just like that?" Chopper asked. "Hey Sabo, what's your bounty?" Luffy asked as they all took their positions. 480 million. "Great. That brings us up to a good number." The rest of the crew looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Nami asked. "What's his bounty have to do with it?" The Sunny continued to fly closer to the gargantuan gates, making some members of the crew nervous. "Guys. If you're going to do something, do it soon," Usopp said. The crew braced themselves, grabbing hold of the Sunny's railing. The gates were upon them. At the moment before impact, Luffy's fists enlarged, Zoro's swords blackened, Sanji's leg caught fire, Ace's fist did the same, and Sabo fired off a Rankyaku. Grizzly Magnum. N80, Caliber Phoenix. Hell Memories. Fire Fist. Brain of Insurgents. 2 billion belly jackpot. They shouted as one. Their combined attacks blew a hole through the gates of justice, causing a shockwave to nearly blow the Sunny off course. But with one last coup to burst. The Sunny passed through. Luffy smirked. "Ace, call the old man. Tell him we're at impel down and that he should hold off on his attack." He shot a glance at Law. "And that my allies have one hell of a plan for him." Sengoku grit his teeth. "Commodore, how are our forces looking?" "Sir, we have around 40,000 troops," Bran replied. "More of our bases are responding to our call now, but it was short notice. Even with ships coming in from every direction, I believe we'll have at best 50,000 Marines by the time he gets here." "That won't be enough," Sengoku said. "Our higher-ranked officers will have to carry us through the battle." "You and I will need to get involved," Garp informed him. "With Sakazuki, Kuzan, Isso, and the rest of the vice admirals backing us up, this may not be a complete disaster." Sengoku let out a sigh, trying to calm himself. "It will still be the closest we've come to ruin since the beginning of the Great Pirate Era. The world's faith in us will surely take a hit." "Their faith can be gained back. What's important is that we're still there to gain it back," Garp said. After Ace called Whitebeard and relayed their new plan, they arrived at Impel Down. The moment the Thousand Sunny landed in the waters next to the undersea prison, it was swarmed by Sea Kings. Luckily, the ship had 2 conquerors on board and 2 widespread waves of Haki simultaneously subdued them. "One of us will have to stay here," Ace told Luffy. "Otherwise there will be no one to keep the Sea Kings in check." "In that case, I'll go," Luffy decided. "I have an old score to settle with the warden anyway." "I'll come with you," Zoro said. "If we can't get the keys to Jin's handcuffs, I can cut him loose." Luffy nodded before turning to Sabo. "By the way, Ive is here. He's waiting for the Revolutionary Army to make a move on the world before he escapes, so if there's ever a time to tell him his wait is over, it's now." Sabo looked bewildered. Ivankov is here. He told us he would join us again once we needed him, but has he seriously been in prison all this time? I could never understand that guy, he sighed. Fine. I'll free him. Luffy and Sabo both launched themselves off the ship and towards the prison. Zoro jumped after them, swinging his swords in a downward arc. The wind pressure from his swings propelled him through the air. That leaves us on guard duty, Sanji said. Another horde of Sea Kings surfaced from beneath the water, and Ace chased them off with another wave of Conqueror's haki. And Sea King duty. When Luffy and Zoro arrived at the prison, the guards were on high alert. Their entrance hadn't been subtle, and no doubt the entire prison knew they were here by now. They bludgeoned their way through the prison, ignoring the guards trying to stop them. Wasting no time, Luffy punched through the floor with gear 3rd, and he and Zoro fell 2 floors down to level 2. Unbeknownst to them, Sabo used the distraction to sneak by unnoticed, heading towards the lift and straight down to level 5. Zoro, I'm going to cause some chaos as a distraction. Luffy conveyed. Do we even need one? Zoro replied back. Couldn't hurt. It might keep Magellan busy for a while. As Zoro took down guard after guard, manticore after manticore, and even a giant chicken-snake hybrid that Luffy had completely forgotten about, the rubber man easily swiped a ring of keys from one of the guards. He stretched his arm out and unlocked a nearby cell before throwing the key at the prisoners. From within the cell, Buggy the Clown stared back, dumbfounded. Straw Hat. He shouted in disbelief. Can't talk now, Big Nose. Gotta go. Who are you calling Big Nose? Whitebeard's ally or not, I'll murder you. After unlocking his sea stone cuffs, Buggy chased after the 2 Straw Hats in outrage. This is one of the worst incidents we've ever had. Magellan shouted. Who's attacking the prison, anyway? Sir. I've confirmed that it's Straw Hat Luffy and Demon Wind Zoro. Hannibal reported. Also, you'll surely get demoted for this, and then I'll take your spot. He added, not realizing he was speaking out loud. Magellan ignored him. Straw Hat and Demon Wind. As much as it pains me to admit it, there's no way I can defeat a force like that on my own. Hannibal. Send orders to the guards in level 6. They are to release Shiryu immediately. After punching another hole in the floor, Luffy and Zoro proceeded down to level 3. They're going deeper, Buggy shouted from his place above the hole they just made. Are those flashy bastards even trying to escape? To hell with this, I'm getting out of this hellhole. Meanwhile, Luffy did a quick scan with his observation haki. Bentham's not here, he told Zoro. He must have avoided getting captured this time, the swordsman conveyed back. One less thing to worry about. Luffy opened another cell, hoping that Magellan would follow the chaos up here so they could free Jin before having to deal with him. Neither of them noticed another familiar face inside the cell. Zala, formerly Miss Doublefinger, blinked in surprise as she caught the keys. Was that Straw Hat? She thought. After freeing herself from the cuffs, she followed after them, curious to know where they were going. When they proceeded down to level 4, their haki protecting them from the heat, Luffy and Zoro were confronted by 4 large bipedal animals. Awaken zones? Zoro asked. Yeah. They were a pain to deal with. Luffy replied. They all follow one of the guards here. I think her name was Meso-chan or something. An orange-haired woman soon blocked their path, brandishing a whip as she stood behind the 4 awakened zones. You two have some nerve, invading Impel Down. I'll be sure to enjoy the delightful sounds of your. That's nice, Meso-chan, Zoro said, cutting her off. But we're in a hurry, so stand aside or get cut. Who are you calling Meso-chan? It's Sadi-chan, asshole. Do I look like I care which fetish you're named after? Zoro asked, unimpressed. You have half a second to move. Outraged, Sadi raised her whip, but Zoro struck first. Hawk wave, he said, delivering a non-lethal air slash that slammed her against a wall and knocked her out. The 4 mindless zone users immediately reacted to the attack on their leader, charging at Luffy and Zoro with reckless abandon. Dead Gatling. Great Dragon Whirlwind. And were taken out immediately by their area of effect moves. You struggled with those guys before? Zoro asked in disbelief as they all fell to the ground. So? You struggled with baboons on Hoki's Island, didn't you? Luffy replied. No comment. As they got further into level 4, they stopped, both sensing a stronger aura approaching. I won't let you proceed any further. Magellan roared, poison coating his body. A snake-like construct made of poison came rushing towards them, and they both dodged out of the way. Zoro, go ahead. I'll handle him. The swordsman rushed past Magellan, startling Hannibal who was right behind him. The warden tried to stop him from advancing, but Luffy punched him through a wall, his haki protecting him from the poison. Hannibal tried to attack Zoro, but got cut down in an instant. Magellan rose from the rubble of the wall he crashed into, glaring at Luffy venomously. Unforgivable. He shouted, sending another Hydra Luffy's way. Luffy overpowered it with an elephant gun, which splattered the poison everywhere and made contact with Magellan, driving him through another wall and onto the other side of level 4. Seething, Magellan's body started secreting a different type of poison, this one being blood red in color. This poison is called Kinjite. Not even your hockey will be enough to shield you from it, Straw Hat. Prepare yourself. Venom Demon. As the giant poison construct formed, Luffy took a breath and centered himself, knowing that Magellan's boast was far from empty. Zala snuck through level 4 with ease of practice. Nico Robin hadn't been the only member of Baroque Works who was trained in stealth. Incapacitating one of the guards, she stole his keys and began searching for a certain prisoner. It didn't take long to locate him. She just had to follow the screams. Soon, she found him in a fight with 3 other prisoners, if the slaughter could even be called that. Even with the sea stone cuffs on, his strength was nothing to scoff at. She waited until he tossed his last bloodied opponent into the boiling water. The prison was clearly in chaos if the guards weren't stopping something like this. And again, maybe they didn't care. Heads up, Oz. She said, throwing the key his way. He caught it on reflex, before observing her curiously. How did you get free? He asked. The Straw Hats are rampaging through the prison. I should have guessed it was them. I guess we owe them one since we have a chance to escape now. I'm going to go free the boss. You coming? With you all the way. Having taken Impel Down's lift down to level 5, Sabo was now looking for his wayward comrade. Shivering from the cold, he hastened his search. Iva should be on this floor, knowing his level of infamy, he said to himself. Reaching out with his observation hockey, he was surprised to realize that the aura he was searching for was still below him. Is he in level 6? Sabo wondered aloud. Oh well. One way to find out. Taking a leaf out of Luffy's book, he smashed a hole through the floor, falling down deeper into the undersea gal. And right on top of Ivankov. Something fell on me. Iva shouted. My back. My back. Ooh-oh, the pain. Iva. Are you okay? The other members of the Kamabaka kingdom asked. I'm fine. So you're not hurt then you fooled us. Inazuma sighed. Iva focus please. It's good to see prison life hasn't dampened your spirit, Iva, Sabo said. Sabo boy. In level 6 of Impel Down, 2 guards hovered nervously over one of their most infamous prisoners. Shiryu-san, we have orders to free you, one said. Your orders are to help apprehend the Straw Hat pirates. They unlocked his cuffs and let him out of the cell, handing him his sword. The moment it entered his hand, he smirked and unsheathed it. Apologies, he said, before severing them both in half with a single swing. I'll be exercising my authorization to cut you down. As the 2 guards fell to the ground, dead, Shiryu turned to the other prisoners, who were cheering at the bloodshed. Attention, prisoners of level 6. I will free you all on the condition that you follow my lead. What say you? The prisoners all howled their agreement, save for 2 who sat in their cells and ignored the commotion. One had a hook for a hand and a scar across his face, and the other was a blue-skinned fishman. Among the freed prisoners was a rugged black-haired man with a missing arm, burned scars from head to toe, and a savage grin across his face. Zoro spun around, swords in hand, unleashing a whirlwind of blades that tore through the floor and carried him downward. Straight to level 6. Landing easily on the concrete floor of the dark eerie prison level, Zoro noted it was nearly empty. Jinbe and Crocodile sat in their cells alone, watching Zoro's arrival with curiosity. Where are the rest of the prisoners? He asked. They were freed by Shiryu of the Rain and left with him, Jinbe answered. Zoro's eyes narrowed, the name bringing back memories that pissed him off. He ignored it for now. Whatever. Jinbe, I'm here to free you. Jinbe tilted his head to the side. Why? Captain's orders. He could see that Jinbe was confused by the answer and added, my captain is Ace's brother. That seemed to wipe away the fishman's doubts. Zoro drew Wado and focused before lunging forward. In seconds, the bars of the cage were sliced open, along with Jinbe's cuffs. Crocodile raised an eyebrow as he witnessed the feat. Everything the swordsman had just cut was made of sea stone. He smirked. I heard you're planning to invade Marineford, the Sandman spoke up, causing Zoro to turn toward him with a disinterested stare. Free me too, and I'll help you out. I'm always willing to kill some Marines. Zoro smirked. You know, somehow, I don't think we'll need your help. Crocodile's eye twitched, and Zoro continued on. But I guess I could help you out. Of course, you probably know we're allied with the Whitebeard pirates now, and that they'll be at Marineford with us. He wouldn't happen to be your goal, would it? Crocodile's eyes narrowed, and Zoro's smirk widened. I'll let you go if you promise to only fight the world government and not go after the old man. The former warlord scoffed. I refuse, he said, not even pretending to consider. Zoro shrugged. Suit yourself. Have fun down here. He could practically feel Crocodile's irritation as he and Jin turned to leave. That wasn't the only thing he could feel though. Directly above them were two auras he hadn't sensed since Alabasta. Looks like you'll get your wish after all, sand bastard. Zoro leapt upward through the hole he had made, landing on the floor of level 5. Jin landed next to him a moment later. Zoro's eyes rested on the two former Baroque work agents that were now staring at him in shock. "Hey, long time no see," he said. Dawes Bones and Zala got into battle-ready stances, both activating their devil fruits. Zoro chuckled. "See ya," he said, before walking away, leaving the two stunned. Jin followed behind him. Having taken the lift, Shiryu arrived at the top floor of the prison, the freed prisoners in tow. The mob of dangerous criminals celebrated their freedom, making their glee known by shouting into the open sky they hadn't seen in years. Notable among the crowd were Avalo Pizarro, Katarina Devon, Vasco Shot, and the giant Sanguine Wolf, who had shrunk down to the size of a normal human in order to escape. Zahahahaha. It's good to feel the outside air again. And then there was that guy. Not only had Shiryu never seen him or heard of him before, but he was covered head to toe in what should have been lethal injuries. One had to wonder how he had survived being incarcerated in such a state and what he had done to get into level 6 despite having no former infamy. "Hey," the man said, turning to Shiryu. "My name is Marshall D. Teach, but you can call me Blackbeard. What would you say to joining my crew? The rest of this bunch can come too," he said with a wide, unsettling grin. Shiryu raised an eyebrow. While it was interesting that the man was a D, his offer was hardly compelling under the circumstances. "I'm the one who freed you, and you're asking me to join you?" he asked. He gestured to the man's missing arm and numerous fourth-degree burns. "Why would I join a cripple who looks like he'll never be able to fight again?" Blackbeard laughed again. "I may not be in good shape now, but I have a plan to regain what I've lost. I just need a shot at the Whitebeard pirates. With a little time, I'll be able to sway the winds of change in my favor." Shiryu was still skeptical, but he considered the man's Blackbeard's words. Before he could come to a decision though, his observation haki flared at him in warning. He turned, gripping his sword, but was too slow. The entire group of prisoners was scorched by a monumental pillar of flame. Agonized screams filled the air as most of the former inmates were incinerated on the spot. Along with Shiryu, 5 of the other prisoners had survived the initial assault. One was Blackbeard, who was on the ground clutching his injuries but had still clung to life somehow. Shiryu drew his sword as their assailant landed in front of the prison. The other survivors followed suit, drawing weapons as Sanguine Wolf grew to his original size. Ace ignored them all though. "Teach," he roared as he shot straight for his old crewmate who just wouldn't die. Still recovering, Blackbeard tried to stop the attack with his one remaining arm, but in his injured and pained state, he was far too slow. Ace's flaming fist pierced his heart, coming out his back. As the other prisoners watched, he pulled his fist out and Blackbeard fell, dead before he hit the ground. Breaking free from their stunned stupor, the rest of the prisoners converged on Ace and attacked. "You can't dodge forever, Straw Hat," Magellan shouted as Luffy continued to evade his venom demon. By now his Kinjite poison was everywhere and the pirate captain was having to watch where he stepped. Luffy took a deep breath and prepared himself, but before another barrage of poison could make its way towards him, the floor burst open. Zoro emerged from the level below, landing in front of the hole he'd made with Jin right behind him. Magellan, seeing that one of his prisoners escaped, aimed his venom demon at the fishman. Jin formed a stance, preparing to defend himself, but Luffy appeared in front of him and held one hand out. Jin could feel the intensity of Luffy's haki concentrating around his hand before it burst from his palm in a wave of concussive force. The advanced application of armament haki easily repelled the venom demon, splashing the deadly poison in a wide radius around Magellan, whose eyes had widened in shock. Luffy looked down at his fist and smirked. "It's coming back to me." Without further hesitation, the pirate captain blitzed towards Magellan faster than the warden's eyes could follow, unfearing of the Kinjite poison that covered his entire body. Steam enveloped his arm as he reared it back to strike. His fist shot forward, only to stop just short of his opponent. Magellan felt the impact anyway though. Another wave of haki came forth from his fist, more powerful this time, and a loud crack filled the air. All of the poison in the immediate vicinity was blown away from the force, and Magellan himself was sent crashing through the far wall. This time, he didn't re-emerge. Luffy turned back towards a stunned Jin and a smirking Zoro, grabbed them both in one arm and shot upwards towards level 3 using Geppo. When Sabo arrived at the top floor along with Ivankov and the rest of the Akamas, he saw Ace struggling to fend off several escaped prisoners. He immediately joined the fight, with Ivankov following his lead. As the two went to alleviate the pressure from Ace, Inazuma's hands morphed into giant scissors and he cut a long strip of stone out from the ground to form a pathway towards the Sunny. Trusting his superiors to hold their own, he began to cross, boarding the Sunny with the rest of the Kamabaka kingdom. Crocodile sat along in level 6, bored out of his mind. It sure is quiet in here now, he thought. He didn't regret turning down Rorano's deal, not one bit. He had a score to settle with Whitebeard and no crewmate of Straw Hat was going to order him around. That didn't mean he was satisfied with the current turn of events. At least having other prisoners around had made for some mild entertainment. Now it was just him in a cell, with no one in sight and nothing but his thoughts to keep him company. Ah, the trials of being stubborn and not having Straw Hat's dumbest luck to fall back on. At that moment, two figures fell from a hole in the ceiling, one carrying the other and impacted with the ground, forming a small crater. Mr. One and Miss Doublefinger. Crocodile felt a savage grin stretch across his face. Perhaps some of that dumbest luck rubbed off on me after all. Using a key they had pilfered from the guards above, they unlocked his cell along with his cuffs. Sand swirled around his form as he relished in his newfound freedom. Good to have you back, boss, Zala said. Crocodile's unfettered laughter filled the empty prison floor. You two are getting a raise, he said. Operation Utopia never did pan out, did it? I may have lost interest in Alabasta, but I'm sure there are plenty of other paydays to be had. What do you say we take the world by storm again? Their eyes gleamed in interest, and Crocodile remembered exactly why the one pair had been his favorite. With all the answer he needed, a sandstorm sprung to life, enveloped the two, and shot upwards towards the hole in the ceiling. Moments later, level 6 of Impel Down was well and truly empty. Luffy, Zoro, and Jinbe arrived at the entrance to see another battle taking place. Upon seeing Shiryu clashing with Sabo, Zoro's eyes narrowed and he unsheathed his swords. He shot forward towards the former inmate, but Shiryu saw him coming and intercepted the strike. This, however, gave Sabo an opening to land a heavy kick to Shiryu's head, staggering him. Zoro took the chance, and Shusui gleamed menacingly before it severed his body in two. As the two halves of the treacherous warden's body hit the ground, Sabo blinked, surprised by the brutality. Did you know that guy? He asked. You could say that, Zoro replied. With Luffy and Zoro joining the fray and the strongest fighter amongst the inmates down, the remaining four were soon defeated as well. Luffy, Zoro, Ace, Sabo, and Jin then crossed the pathway Inazuma had made. As the five boarded the Sunny, Ace began taking stock of everyone's locations. Is everyone alright? He asked. Are we missing anyone? Luffy's brow furrowed as his eyes scanned the deck. Nami, Usopp, Chopper, Robin, Frankie, Brook, Law, and Bonnie were all accounted for, but where's Sanji? There was a splash as said chef jumped out of the ocean and landed on deck. He was followed by a swarm of sea kings, which emerged from the water and surrounded the Sunny. Luffy and Ace wasted no time and subdued them all with a twin blast of Conqueror's Haki. Frazzled, they dove back into the water. Took you long enough to get back, Sanji growled, glaring at Ace. I had to dive into the sea to stop those shitty sea kings from eating the ship. Ace bowed. My apologies. Quite the daring escape, Iva commented, staring back at the prison. The world government will never live this down. Sanji glowered. Oh great, it's you. Iva looked puzzled. Do we know each other? Before the chef could answer, Usopp spoke up. Guys. We've got incoming. He said, pointing toward the prison. The others turned and saw what he meant. A sandstorm was floating over the ocean, heading towards the ship. Luffy made a fist. Is he serious right now? He knows I'll kick his ass, right? Kick whose ass? Frankie asked. Who is that? Someone I wish to never see again, Robin replied. Nami was pale. Don't tell me. The sandstorm reached the Sunny and dispersed to show Crocodile and his two subordinates standing on their ship as if he had every right to be there. You. Nami, Usopp, and Chopper all shouted at once, clinging to each other in fear. Frankie and Brook, seeing their reactions, tensed and prepared for a fight. Straw Hat, Crocodile greeted. Hope you don't mind, but I'm hitching a ride with you. Hell no you're not. Luffy shouted. Get off my ship you damn croc. As much as I may agree with your sentiments, Luffy-san, we may not have time to argue, Jinbe said. He pointed back to the prison, where a newly awakened Magellan was forming another venom demon. The warden's poison engulfed the panicking inmates who were left behind. Those aboard the Sunny cringed at their screams of agony. They sighed. He's right. We need to leave quickly. If you even try going after Pops, I'll kill you myself. Crocodile didn't respond, merely returning a level stare. His point made, Ace turned away. As Frankie went to prepare Sunny's escape, Crocodile's eyes roamed the Straw Hat crew until his eyes met Robin's. In a while, Crocodile, the archaeologist said. Like a Robin, he said with distaste. How's life with these fools treating you? Robin smiled. Better than prison life, I'd imagine. Crocodile looked like he was about to burst a vein. Before he could respond, Luffy's voice stopped him. Croc. The former warlord turned around and pretended not to be unsettled by the look in his old enemy's eyes. I will leave you here to drown, and I won't lose sleep over it, Luffy said calmly. Don't push your luck. Crocodile wisely kept his silence, and Zala dragged both him and Mr. One away from the Straw Hats. It wasn't long before a Kuta burst propelled them high into the air and through the gates of justice. That was interesting, Law said. You sure about him, Straw Hat? Bonnie asked. Hardly seems like the cooperative type. He hates the world government, Luffy said. Which might be useful. And if Law's plan works out, we probably won't have to worry about any attempt he might make on Whitebeard's life. Bonnie nodded. Point taken. 50,000 Marines were gathered at Marineford when Whitebeard resurfaced in front of the Red Line and launched his first assault. Before he was even within sight, a tsunami already towered over the island, bearing down on the Marines with the threat of a watery grave. Akiji! Sengoku shouted. The admiral had acted before the order, leaping into the sky. Ice Age. And freezing the tsunami hull. Next came an earthquake that shook the island and shattered the massive ice sculpture that Akiji had just created. As colossal chunks of ice fell towards the island, threatening to destroy the city and kill everyone in it, Akainu lifted both arms. Great eruption. The giant shards of ice evaporated on contact with a barrage of magma. For a few minutes this continued. The Marines fended off a sequence of earthquakes and tsunamis, using the power of the admirals, with even Isso joining in to defend Marine headquarters. But it soon grew apparent that Whitebeard wasn't showing up in person. Something's wrong, Garp said, expression grim. He's not coming. It can't be, Sengoku said, face pale. He means to sink us all. At that moment, the island of Marineford began to tilt. The Straw Hat Alliance and their guests stood on the deck of the Sunny. Sanji was inside the kitchen, cooking everyone meals to keep their strength up before the battle. Law and Bonnie were seated by the rail, looking bored, and Crocodile and his group were sitting to the side, waiting for their arrival. Everyone else was discussing the upcoming battle when their chef walked outside, the food noticeably absent. Luffy? You're going to want to see this, he said. Luffy turned Sanji and blinked at the sight of the fruit in the chef's hand. I found this in the pantry, Sanji said. Ace's eyes widened and he looked momentarily pained. That's. Thousands of Marines prayed for their lives as the island of Marineford tilted on its axis. The ground caved in as the tectonic plates beneath the land shook and trembled along to Whitebeard's will. Fissures in the earth swallowed entire battalions of soldiers whole and massive ocean waves filled them. Screams filled the air as the tremors continued and the island began to crumble, piece by piece, like a puzzle that was always meant to be broken. Sengoku thought fast. Isso. He shouted and the vice admiral seemed to understand what was expected of him. His sightless eyes narrowed in concentration as he reached out with his gravity powers, attempting to keep Marineford from collapsing in on itself. To a degree, it worked. The island's descent into the ocean slowed dramatically as the forces of gravity began holding the island in place. But anyone could tell it was a temporary solution at best. Although Isso had taken to his devil fruit quickly, he was still fairly new with it and keeping an island from crumbling as a more experienced devil fruit user continued to send tremor after tremor through the earth was no simple test of his powers. Sweat dripped down his face as he did everything he could to save the Marines under him. Sengoku was already thinking about the next steps of his hastily revised battle plan. Whitebeard won't stop. If we stay here he'll drown us all. We have to take the fight to him. He turned toward Garp, who nodded. Garp. Akainu. Akiji. You're with me. Isso will hold the fort while we're gone. The four used Zoro to descend to the plaza below, where the warlords were gathered. There's been a change of plans. Follow us. He pretended not to notice the amusement in the pirates' eyes as they voiced their agreement. Akiji led the way, freezing the ocean so they could make their way over by foot. Sengoku, Garp, Akainu and Akiji all used Zoro to traverse the frozen sea, while Miha kept pace behind them and Doflamingo flew using his strings. Sengoku sighed in frustration as Moria fell behind, unable to keep up with their pace. Why do we even keep him around? Thanks for watching the last part. If you made it here, should I make a movie for the story?